Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Luffy Awakens Nika Fruit and got Harem. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Nika had waited a long time for someone to claim her. Years of waiting, of evading the prison gallows that ruled the world after that century, waiting to feel that one. Most of her fellows weren't as picky as her, she knew, but for most of them, their domains didn't require nearly so much of the ones they chose as she did of hers. She'd almost wanted the red-haired boy who saved her from falling into the hands of the tyrants. Almost. He'd had so much in him that she adored. Freedom, joy, love of the world in all its forms. But she'd made too many promises to be anything but completely sure. And she'd felt a different destiny in him, so she'd reluctantly passed over him and continued to wait. Then she'd appeared. As soon as her aura entered the room where her fruit form waited, Nika felt her and knew instantly she was the one. She'd stretched out her hand, tempted her other half to come and reforge them, gently urging the pirates to look the other way until the girl's teeth dug in and their bond was forged. Luffy, Nika adored her from the very start, from the shoreline to the forests with her brothers and finally out into the wide seas with her crew. Her other self is gangly, coming into her powers one bit at a time as she stumbled from one disaster and tyrannical force to another almost by accident. But Nika has waited for centuries. What's a few more years to that? Drinking in the spirit of adventure as Luffy grew strong enough to take all that weight upon her shoulders. Perhaps she was a bit too used to waiting. Nika had bristled as the sands monster almost killed Luffy, when the model leopard had tried the same, when she'd been faced with the ice and light minions and was far too unprepared to even have a chance against them. But her human didn't reach for her true power, and forcing the issue was far too dangerous to her mind. So Nika had grimly waited the situations out, whether Luffy triumphed or just escaped with her life. She'd gotten out every time, and every failure prompted her to get a little stronger, closer to being ready. Yet right now, waiting seemed to be her curse, a secret second one hurtled at her by Mother Ocean when she took this form that Nika hadn't truly realized until right now. She waited as Luffy discovered that the boy she'd grown up with was slated for execution. Waited as she charged into Impel Down. Waited as she was whiskers breath away from dying from poison and heat and cold, leaving Nika with the deepest fear that her promises would be left unfulfilled again. Waited as she cut into her life force processing the well-intentioned but terribly administrated miracle cure. Waited as she fought and ran and forced her way down only to be too late and the boy Ace was gone. Waited as she was thrown up into the sky and dropped from the frozen waterfall, and waited as she charged headfirst into this war where she's so desperately outclassed by most combatants there. No, waiting was a curse. She'd convinced herself otherwise all these years, wrapping herself in the confidence and certainty that she would make the sun rise for those in chains when the time came. Clinging to that cold comfort with both hands had clearly lulled her into a false sense of security. This was hell. Nika's scream of rage, frustration and edging panic when Light's Chosen shot a hole through Luffy wasn't tangible to the people on the battlefield. But she knows she rang the bell of every other sea devil for miles. She doesn't really care, either. She doesn't want to search for another wielder. Luffy is the one, she knows it, it's written in the universe. She loves her. You're not ready for this. She pleaded with the girl as she struggled, trying to force herself up to start running again even though she's bleeding out and so weak and everything is awful and she's so close yet so far. You'll have to retreat. No, Nika jerked back, blinking rapidly. In the darkness of Luffy's mindscape, suddenly her other half is right there before her. As her heartbeat shivered and started to weaken, the bloodied girl blinked into existence, clutching her chest and staring at her with wide, shocked eyes streaming with tears. An awakening? Surely not. It was too soon. And yet, Nika couldn't deny the situation. The sensation washed over her, just as it had so many years before when her last wielder had come before her this exact same way. Luffy was truly one of a kind. Or mad. Or both. Nika is pretty sure her crew had long decided it was both. I have to save him, Luffy said, clutching her chest. Nika stared, shaking her head. You're not ready, she protested. This was not what she'd expected. She didn't think they'd have this conversation for another few years. Your haki is just barely awakened. My true power will rip you to pieces. I don't care. You'll die before you can save him. I don't care, Luffy screamed, all love and desperation and despair and pleading, and Nika fell quiet from the sheer force of emotion. I can't let him die in chains. I can't. It's not right. He's been trapped by people hating Roger all his life. I love him. I love him. Chains. The word struck Nika's consciousness hard. And despite all her care and loyalty to her role and the promises she made, she doesn't shut Luffy out of this space as she'd been preparing to. You'd think she of all beings, the one who understood Luffy best, would know better. I need all of you, Luffy barreled on, her image shivering as her body got weaker. I don't care what happens to me. I want him to be free. Please. Nika thought about it. Truly let herself think about it in those terms, about how that boy had been slated to have the life he'd barely started cut short because he had been born to Roger, as if that had been a choice he made. They were forcing this wicked law upon the world, that they had the right to kill because you existed in a fashion they disapproved of, and he would be their demonstration. His life would be discarded like it was less than worthless. Anger welled up inside her, her own emotions mingling with Luffy's, and she realized she's lost the argument before truly able to start it. Nika reached out and placed her hand on Luffy's quivering head. Very well, she decided. Those brown eyes light up as bright as her own sun. I'll have to carry us through this. This awakening is premature, and it will make your path from here more difficult than it would be otherwise. She'll be revealing herself before the army of the tyrant, and whatever others discover the truth from this televised battlefield, Luffy would be in frequent danger. But Luffy was almost always in trouble, usually because she went looking for it. Luffy, I hope you survive this. Luffy merely beamed at her as their minds meet in the awakening, overjoyed that Nika was letting her have her way, and the drums of liberation roar. The ground shook and lightning erupted from Luffy's prone body. Nika stretched out her limbs and hopped up into the air, wincing slightly at all the battle damage she can feel, quickly using her power to bypass them. She chuckled grimly, rather than a full-body laugh as the battlefield reeled at the sudden hacky pressure. Usually she could find joy and amusement in just about anything, but the consequences of this situation are too dire. Luffy is only half conscious, her mind scattered and unfocused, and Nika can feel the strain of this on her body. Whipping out one hand and seizing her background lightning, Nika swept her gaze over the battlefield to take stock while everyone was still reeling from the power surge of her appearance. Those walls need to go. And the biggest threat to Ace aside from the two law dogs on either side of him are the three mutts in the plaza. Luffy, Ace gasped, jerking forward as far as he was able in the chains pinning him to the execution platform. The power blast had nearly knocked him senseless. He wasn't willing to chalk it up to his torture and impel down and lingering exhaustion. The adrenaline kick of his family coming to his rescue in spite of him putting them in this position had taken care of that. As Luffy hovered in the sky, bouncing in place and chuckling in a dry, angry manner while literally crackling with power, her hair has turned pure white and her eyes were glowing like an awakened Zoan on a rampage. But that doesn't make sense. Lu had eaten a paramecia fruit. She's a rubber person? What? Nika swung her arm out and unleashed a storm of lightning into the plaza itself. The orderly lines of Marines separating her from the scaffold scatter like ants. Dozens and dozens of men either blasted into unconsciousness immediately or picked up and flung like dolls by the impacts. Light's wielder didn't even bother to dodge or bring up his haki, assuming that this is the same underpowered girl he'd skewered minutes ago. Nika tried not to take too much pleasure from slamming a lightning bolt into his chest that flung him half the length of the island and smashed him into the concrete of the Marineford Tower. Lava and ice were a little less arrogant and dodged with their automatic defenses, and she doesn't have much time to take satisfaction in their reeling surprise. The sea stone walls have to go first. They were obstructing most of the Whitebeard pirates, along with the old man Quake loved so much. Nika bent her body downward and dropped like a missile, crashing into the concrete and spreading her power across it. What is this pressure? Whitebeard wondered in shock. And it took a lot to shock the oldest emperor of the sea after everything he lived through. Until a moment ago, that little girl in Roger's hat had been badly wounded and exuding no more power than a typical Paradise rookie. But that eruption of energy when she shot up into the sky, her form changing, was so heavy it was as if she'd been replaced by someone or something from the New World. The ground suddenly rippled beneath his feet. No, it didn't tremble slightly like one of his weaker quakes. It wobbled up and down like it had spontaneously turned into pudding and a child was shaking the bowl violently to get it away from a greedy friend. Whitebeard dug his bicento into the ground to steady himself, or tried to, because the ground stubbornly resisted, stretching rather than being impaled. An ungodly shrieking of metal hit his ears. It took him a few moments to fight against the vertigo and triangulate where it was coming from. It was below. Ha ha, ha ha ha. Nika laughed scornfully, punching the concrete hard before jumping up and down on it, emulating Luffy on the white clouds in Angel Island. Her powers couldn't pierce through the stone walls themselves, but with how they had risen from the ground on command, she knew that they were on some kind of track and pulley system, and that couldn't all be made of sea stone. It would be wasted where it couldn't obstruct pirates. She shook the whole island, cracking apart concrete and metal as the rubberized areas they were attached to tore them away from their systems or simply shattered them apart with the sudden, violent stress, sending another violent ripple about as big as one of Whitebeard's lesser quakes did the trick. The walls directly behind her began falling rapidly back into the plaza with tortured screams of metal. No, Sengoku screamed in alarm, his eyes widening immensely at the sudden, impossible sight. Garp's insufferable granddaughter launched herself in the air like a spring, so fast she was almost a blur, neatly avoiding the hail of magma an enraged Akainu subsequently sent her way. Hovering in the sky, she swirled in place and looked scornfully down at him. Her body had transformed, taking on the characteristics of... Wait, it couldn't be. Whitebeard straightened up when the ground stopped shaking, abruptly reverting to its real shape. Her fruit has awakened, he realized, thinking even as he raised his arm and urged his sons onward. He needed to take advantage of this twist of fate quickly. Is this really all stemming from rubber powers? No, I'd believe it in any other situation, but what I'm sensing from her now... Ha 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 ha. Ace's girl laughed again. And this tone of hers is definitely mocking and subtly different from the rude girl who'd had the nerve to tell him off on his own ship. There's an elegant edge that wasn't there before. She bent her body in a completely unnatural crescent to avoid the next magma jet that mutt through at her, then flew off like a balloon that had just been violently punctured. She zipped off to the very top of Marineford, her fingers hooking in the edge of the rooftop. There's a titanic tearing sound, and half of the roof is ripped loose in her hands, staying together in one piece instead of crumbling into thousands of shingles, bits of concrete and wood fragments, and she chucked it like a discus at the man in retaliation. Wogathering. I'll ponder the bizarreness of awakened powers once we have Ace back. The old man decided quickly as Akainu was threw a rapid barrage of magma at the attack to avoid getting ground into the dirt. I doubt that power burst will last for too long after all the punishment she's taken. Nika hadn't expected that to take the man out, just to distract him. She flung herself out across the sky, flying overhead in an arc to pick out where Whitebeard and Luffy's new friend Jim were. That's how we'll get rid of them, she reassured her other self. Luffy's soul buzzes with joy and wonder at her power, though Nika doubted she'd remember much of this afterward. She dropped to the ground, waving around light bursts from Kizaru. Bah, he's awake already. Of course, whistling, she bent over backward to avoid the next burst of light when she touched down again. Then she straightened up and massively enlarged her teeth, making them pearly white and intensely reflective. Kizaru's attempted flash step to get up in her face and keep her from dodging his next attack gets refracted on the surface and shot clean out of Marineford and out across the ocean. Nika snapped her head back to normal and Luffy's snickering slips through her mouth. It's lucky, really, that he had fought Luffy before and had been thoroughly confident she was powerless against him. Because she had been, until now. Light would be sulking about this one for quite a while. Nika just knew it. Akainu had come up right behind her in the moments she'd taken to get that smug bastard off the battlefield. But that had been a calculated risk. Before he could bring a magma-fueled fist down on her head, Whitebeard dropped an earthquake right behind him, striking the man from behind. What the hell have you done to yourself, brat? The old man asked as Akainu was sent stumbling away from her. Nika turned around and smiled mysteriously at him. She couldn't speak, not really. She and Luffy were holding this together with willpower and pure stubbornness. She needed every speck of strength that she could scrape together diverted to other means. Instead, she pointed directly upward at the sun before pivoting toward Akainu again. She's too far away to hear Jim's intake of breath. Instead, she stuck her tongue out at the unhinged man who slaughtered Robin's people and pulled down an eyelid mockingly. She saw the rage kick in and stepped 3 feet to the side so she wouldn't be in Whitebeard's way. Ace was her priority still. The 2 old men on either side of him were staring at her with mounting shock and disbelief. Of course, at least one of them would recognize her for who she is. How to get around them? She didn't want to fight them straight up. She didn't have the time if she wanted Luffy to survive this, so she had to get around them instead. Her eyes fell on the execution stand itself. The top half was sea stone, but just like the walls, they couldn't make the whole thing out of the precious material. Likely the Marines were using their entire stock of it in this effort to kill Ace and his father, and they couldn't afford to have it where it wasn't useful. Nika grinned, unfazed by Whitebeard and Akainu's battle going on right next to her, and began to spin like a top. Luffy would call it Gum Gum Buzzsaw, probably. She zipped past the battle, up the walls and underneath the tower, narrowly avoiding Garp dropping down to block her path. She bounced between the 4 supports of the tower, using her inertia to saw through the metal as fast as possible before unwinding herself, stopping, and delivering the hardest kick she can muster against the back leg of the stand. Sorry, Ace. The tower crashed forward. Nika staggered, clutching her chest for a long, painful moment. Luffy's body couldn't take this much longer. Water rushed up from the platform. Jim trying to head off Sengoku for a few precious moments. She could hear a massive roar from all of Ace's siblings as they surged into the plaza to lend a hand. Nika ran forward, to the head of the platform. Ace was lying half on the ground, half dangling from the chains on his arms. For a second she was afraid she'd knocked him out or worse, injured him, but he twisted her way the instant her footsteps approached him. Luffy, he gasped when she stopped by his side and sank to one knee, grasping his arms right above the chains in one hand. The evil chains. Nika grimaced and quickly dug out the key Boa gave Luffy, slammed it into the cuffs as Sengoku roared at her, and twisted it in the lock. The unclicking sound filled her with a rush of Europhia before her power ran its course, forcing her to cede everything back to Luffy. Luffy, upon whom the stress and strain of the premature awakening fell on like the waterfalls of Wano. compounding her injuries, sending her spiraling into a bleak darkness instantly. 2 years later, wake up, Straw Hat, wake up, Luffy moaned in protest, shying away from the hand shaking her. Go away, Nami, she mumbled blearily. Her whole body ached from the memory her Nakama's voice is dragging her away from. Every scar feeling like she'd gotten it a week ago rather than 2 years. She pawed weakly around her soft pillows, looking for Sabo or Chopper or Zoro, but none of her comforting sleeping buddies were there to squeeze until the tremors went away. She made a distressed, upset noise at the realization. Where were they? They'd always been there when she had these bouts. It had first happened when she was with Rayleigh. Fragments of memories of her awakening and the feeling that all her wounds from that battle had reopened suddenly. After much poking and prodding when Rayleigh called him over in a panic, Traffy had concluded that it was a consequence of the way her devil fruit had awakened at Marineford. He'd stitched her up as best he could, but she'd have psychic pain where she'd been hurt in bouts forever, which sucked and was stupid. Who made her body so it would randomly decide to remember that one time she got beaten up really bad. She got better. She didn't care that she'd hurt herself that badly. It had been the price she'd needed to pay, and she'd pay it 1,000 times over if she had to, but this was so dumb. She recovered from that fight. Not fair. Luffy burrowed her head deeper into the bed, wishing one of the minks would come over so she could cuddle with them at least. She's not in complete agony, but it hurts. It feels like soreness and hot pins and needles in her chest, arms, legs. Pure low-key misery. She wanted to sleep until it went away. You seriously think I'm Nami? Wake up. A firm hand grabbed her shoulder, shaking her again. Luffy grumbled incoherently, flinching from the rough movement. Damn it, Luffy, Big Mom's lion has finally woken up and we have a problem. Traffy, Luffy mumbled as her brain slowly started to kick into gear. She blinked blearily upward, and sure enough, her favorite captain slowly came into focus. He looked agitated, but not in a funny way like when she threw a party after capturing Caesar. Then the rest of his sentence catches up with him and she sits up in a flash, her heart skittering happily. You called me Luffy. Traffy always called her Straw Hat before. He was far from the only one. Smokey and Sword Girl, and honestly most people she met called her that, but Luffy had been trying to get him to use her name for ages. They're friends now. They beat down Mingo together and they're in an alliance. But he kept calling her Straw Hat anyway. It drove her nuts. He's finally said her name. It sounds really nice on his voice, somehow. Luffy wasn't sure where that thought come from, but the sight of super serious Law going red at the cheeks and sputtering in a familiar way causes her to laugh and forget about it. Do you only ever listen to every third word I say? The dark-haired doctor demanded, looking elsewhere. Peckham's, Big Mom's minion, who is the only one who knows where your cook is and what's going on. He's woken up and is asking after you. Luffy stopped laughing immediately. Sliding to her feet and ignoring the shiver that runs through her muscles, she seriously asked, where? Her left hand balls into a fist. Sanji, which infirmary? Wasn't Chopper looking after the minks over there somewhere? She started to run off, causing Law to grumble something and grab her by the arm. Just follow me, he said, holding her wrist firmly but weirdly gently as she snapped back to his side. Right, she muttered, nodding like a bobblehead and letting him pull her along. Luffy has just enough self-awareness to acknowledge that she's not good with directions, and she needs to find out more about what happened to her cook right now. We never should have split up, she thought unhappily. It had been necessary for Traffy's plan to work, but she'd hated every minute of her precious people being separated. It had been painful for 2 years, and she liked it even less once they'd finally gotten back together. And now Sanji ran off, up and left them behind just like Robin did to try and solve this without them, and Luffy hadn't been there to smack him upside the head and demand he take them with him. And why do the people she loved do this arc? No, calm down. They'll get Sanji back, no matter what Big Mom or anyone else has to say about it. Luffy shook her head to clear it. Don't pass out on us like that, Law said after a few minutes as he pulled her away from their mounts, an odd cadence in his voice. Your doctor flipped out and wouldn't calm down until he'd checked your breathing and blood pressure. Didn't mean to, Luffy whined rebelliously. It happens when I'm tired. She'd passed out the same way after they'd defeated Mingo. He should know this already. NGH. Law gave her a vexed look. You're so troublesome. The sun goddess should be a little more sturdy, don't you think? I'm sturdy, Luffy protested, indignant. She pouted at him, her expression intensifying when he wouldn't look at her. Rude. I can fight for days just like you, who beat down Mingo in the end again. Put more faith in me. We're allies, because you're stubborn and bullheaded and have no common sense. Law muttered, and wild, and beautiful, and precious to me, gah. He very carefully looked everywhere but at the girl who'd barreled into his life, forced her way past every wall he'd spent years putting up around his heart and made herself at home, boldly ignoring his every effort to hold her at arm's length. Showing kindness and loyalty to a man who'd come to believe there was little to be found in this era. Glowing like the sun, grabbing him and setting him dead center of her family without hesitation despite all of them screaming at her for trusting such an obviously dangerous person. defending him just as furiously despite knowing him for a fraction of the time, making his dream come true and fighting with all of her might for it. Law had kept his heart carefully closed off ever since he was a child. His crew had trickled in as he chose them, and he'd slowly allowed it. But after his most precious person was torn out of his life, love was something he kept chained and imprisoned deep in the ruins left of his heart. Everyone he loved had been violently torn away from him, one after another. He let himself love his crew, though he'd never admit it out loud unless under tremendous pressure, but he kept it reserved and aloof because it was safer that way. Love made him think of his parents, dead on the floor, Lami burning in the hospital, Kora-san's apologies before he was shot dead. He wanted nothing to do with that love again. Some things were worse than death. See stone cuffs again. RRRRGH. Not that stupid stone again. Ace had these on at Marineford. Old man Zephyr had an arm made up of it. Smokey has it on the tip of his weapon. These dumb rocks are supposed to be rare, aren't they? Get out of here. Our alliance is over. Luffy briefly glanced sideways at him and actually rolled her eyes. You sound like Ace, she said in exasperation. I didn't listen to him then either. Anyway, Robin, I can't even touch this. And Nami left with Sanji too. Do you still know how to pick locks? I'd say it's best we find the key proper, Captain. I don't quite have Nami's delicate touch. And if the lock jams from my efforts getting these off will become even harder. Okay, where would we look for it? Are you even listening to me? Nope. Luffy turned and smiled at him, her warmth laced with ferocious determination that struck him speechless. I never turn my back on people I love. I'm gonna save you, Traffy. Hang on tight. She spun around and lifted Trafalgar onto her back, blissfully oblivious to the effect her words had caused. And yet, Law swallowed hard, hyper-aware of Luffy's warm flesh underneath his fingers. How oddly delicate her wrist felt to him, even though delicate was the absolute last word that could describe this wild menace. This confounding girl. She kept whining at him, oblivious to how her touch made his heart race, to how she made him feel. Law couldn't tell if she was doing it on purpose or not. She was often truly, stunningly clueless, but Luffy didn't say the word love lightly, even if he has no idea what she means by it. He pulled her down the hallway toward where Peckham's was recovering. Luffy finally stopped chattering at him, her serious face sliding on like a well-worn coat. Amazed you survived that, she heard Nami saying when she entered the room. The rest of her Nakama were already there. Zoro immediately stood up as soon as he noticed her. Luffy nodded at him, ignoring the weird look that passed between her first mate and Traffy, and ran over to the bed where Peckham's was laid out. The lion mink was wrapped in bandages but otherwise looked healthy, if rather angry. I used my power to block half of it, Peckham's responded shortly as she approached. But you bastard. He must be plotting something he doesn't want Mama to know about. Why else would he leave with just Blackfoot? He pounded his fist on the mattress. I'm sorry. He took me off guard. It's fine, Luffy dismissed, dropping into the chair next to his bed. He was your Nakama. Of course you didn't expect him to shoot you. Peckham's gave her a strange look at that before shaking his head. Who arranged this wedding on Sanji's behalf? It rankled her deeply. How could anyone put Sanji in a marriage without his consent? It wasn't marriage if two people didn't decide on it. It was Mama and the head of the Vinsmoke family, Peckham's responded, frowning. Did your cook never tell you who his father was? Though I suppose that a prince who abandons his crown and all his comforts in favor of being a pirate must not think too highly of it. Warning you of his father would have been wise. Vinsmoke Judge is the leader of Germa 66. Nami sputtered and then stalked up to the bed, looking indignant. What are you talking about? That's a mythical evil army. The stuff of comic books written to support the Marines. Traffy uttered a strangled wheezing sound, causing Luffy to shoot him a concerned look. His eyes were really wide. Don't be ridiculous. No, it's a real organization, Peckham said in all seriousness, and he had a genuine look to him, so Luffy chose to believe him. She rocked back on her heels, stunned, unbidden. Her mind went back to the note that Sanji had left them. Believe this if nothing else. I never intended to deceive you. Sanji, of course I believe you, but why not tell me? What were you afraid of? And Blackfoot's father is its head. The Vinsmoke family is family of assassins. Luffy processed that for a second, then scowled and shook her head. I don't really care about any of that, she said casually, causing Peckham's to stare at her again. She got a lot of those looks, so she ignored it. What I want to know is if Sanji is coming back, if he wants to get married. That's okay, but I'm not becoming subordinate to Big Mom. Peckham's gave her a wide-eyed look, then waved his hands. Straw Hat, Big Mom doesn't want you as a subordinate. In fact, she would like to forgive the tribute that you stole altogether. There's a brief moment of perfectly stunned silence in response to this. Who could blame them? It didn't make any sense. WHHHHY, Luffy asked uneasily after a few seconds, before her crew could explode into a cacophony. Because she would like you to be her daughter-in-law, Peckham's responded, shocking the girl even more. Luffy reeled backward in shock, her hazel brown eyes growing incredibly wide. Was he serious? The lion mink reached into his pocket and pulled out a pink and white card, which he held up to her. Her name was on it. She stared. I wanted to avoid this after you rescued my family and friends from Jack the Drought, because of how this would affect your crew and ambitions. But I was sent to deliver a marriage proposal on behalf of Big Mom and the strongest and greatest of her sons, Charlotte Katakuri. Luffy snatched the card and stared at it. She read it 3 times in a row in an attempt to make sense out of it, but the only words were what he had just informed her. She was still staring at it as her crew finally started screaming in shock, alarm, and anger. Get married, sun goddess. I offer you my best and most noble boy, Katakuri, in marriage. Grandpa, Luffy said with unusual seriousness, looking up at her parental figure. Makino's bar was full of its evening regulars, who were torn between enjoying their evening meals and staring at the famous visitors who'd come to their island the morning. My dad is supposed to walk me down the aisle if I get married, but I don't have a dad. Would you do it instead? Garp choked on the steak he'd been happily enjoying a moment ago, wheezing and hammering his chest. Luffy yipped as her grandpa's shudders almost tossed her off his lap to the floor. What do you mean, wedding? Who's talking to you about such things, Luffy? Who's trying to make off with my precious princess? Hey, nobody, Luffy protested, baffled by his reaction. Lots of fairy tales end with a pretty princess getting married. And I asked Makino about it after finishing the last book you got me. A giggle escapes her lips. Makino got really flustered and asked me if I'd heard about it from Shanks. I wonder why. Shanks told me once that a pirate captain has the authority to conduct a wedding on his ship. Does she want to get married? Garp's eye twitched uncontrollably, while his companion chuckled into his mug. What? I thought Makino was a quite sensible woman. Don't tell me she's gone and fallen for a pirate. Fallen for? Luffy blinked at him. Makino hasn't fallen down recently. He doesn't mean that literally, Luffy, the other man said, shaking his head. Falling for is often used as a romantic figure of speech. The girl uttered a little ah of comprehension. Then her brow scrunched up as it always did when she was thinking very hard, and a few seconds later she gasped. Makino wants to marry Shanks, she whispered with the tone of someone who'd come to a tremendous revelation. Forget it. I didn't say anything, Garp said frantically. Don't tell me you want to get married. My heart couldn't take that. Why not? Luffy protested. Because no man is good enough for my precious princess, Garp declared with all the authority of the hero of the Marines. The men in the bar felt shivers go down their spine even though they know it isn't directed at any of them. Many of them cast apologetic looks at Luffy, who they all think is a cute little troublemaker. They now sense a lot of broken hearts in her future. Whatever man fell for her would have to go through one of the strongest Marines in history. But that's not fair. Luffy flailed her arms. What if I want to get married in the future? Then whoever that person is will have to pass Grandpa's test. Only the best of men is worthy of you. You just said nobody would make you happy, Luffy pointed out, very much taken off guard at the idea of her grandpa denying her something as important as her potential wedding, aside from being a pirate, which she intended to do regardless of what he said. But a potential wedding was different from that. For all that it was a vague concept to her at 6, the story Shanks told her had the pirate's bride being really happy. Looking around for allies, she pivoted toward her grandpa's guest and grabbed his sleeve. Few others would have the nerve to do so, but the man's mystique was very much lost on her. Nay, Zephyr Gigi, if Grandpa is a big meaner and won't walk me down the aisle, will you do it instead? The purple-haired man looked down at her with something between shock, hesitance, and a conflicted longing brought about by a very painful loss he'd endured some years before. Well, don't indulge her, Zephyr, says the man who spoils her more than anyone. Zephyr deadpanned before looking down at Luffy again. Brief memories of his own wedding flicker through his mind. And despite his deep disapproval of the girl's dream, he shrugs and says, if I'm still alive by then, I suppose I could do so if Garp gives you trouble. Yeah, Zephyr, Garp sputtered in protest, disbelieving that his old friend isn't taking his side. Zephyr looked both happy and pained when a cheering Luffy launched herself at him, hugging him and looping her arms around him several times. Hesitantly he patted her head, then lifted his gaze and gave Garp a very serious look. Garp, of course you want to protect her forever. Your little granddaughter is your greatest treasure. But even you and I can't keep them shielded from the world for all time. Eventually, she'll want something or someone you disapprove of, and you'll have to choose between your comfort and her happiness. When that time comes, choose wisely. For the life of him, Garp couldn't find the words to respond to that. Not with the weight of loss that he knows is attached to those words. Zephyr, I'll invite you either way, Zephyr Gigi. You'll want to come, right? Even if there are pirates there. Luffy looked up at him with big, hopeful hazel eyes. They'll be real pirates, not lousy raiding fakers like the ones you've always fought. Zephyr glanced sideways, hesitant. If I live that long, he allowed, and Luffy cheered, unable to read between the lines. Luffy blinked out of the memory, still staring blankly at the invitation with her head slightly bowed. All around her is chaos. She's not getting married. Zoro shouted, flicking Shushi an inch out of his scabbard. Luffy will be king of the pirates. Does Big Mom really think we'll allow her to try and take our captain to be one of her trophies? It's obviously a trap. Nami fretted. I've seen Charlotte Katakuri's wanted poster. He has the highest bounty of the entire fleet except for his mother. He'll be the biggest monster of the lot of them. He's worth over 1 billion berries, Robin acknowledges, nodding her head. Her eyes are half closed as she draws up the relevant memories, looking unconcerned despite the implications absolutely worrying her. Despite him not being the eldest, it's generally believed he'll take over the Big Mom pirates if or when his mother perishes. Usopp started hyperventilating, all but vibrating in place. Oh no, Luffy, you gotta say no. You can't marry a monster like that. The Yonko won't take a blunt refusal kindly, Brook pointed out, gently strumming his guitar. She already has Sanji in her clutches. If there's any chance that she'll harm him in retaliation, we must bear it in mind. We're at war with Kaido now, Law said heatedly, gripping Kikoku ferociously. He's not shouting, but the venomous sharp edge to every word carries his voice into the chaos easily. We can't afford to let Straw Hat you get trapped in Big Mom's web, now or ever. Chopper rushed over to his captain and hugged her arm, trying to read her expression. His captain, his big sister, was usually very easy to read. Luffy didn't feel anything quietly. Her joy, her anger, her amusement, her worry or her fear, it was always as brilliant as the sun's rays. And right now she looked perplexed. Luffy, the little reindeer Zoan prodded, worried. Luffy made a faint sound and turned the card over again, her brow furrowing tightly. But what about Sanji? Frankie pointed out. We can't just abandon our Nakama to a Yonko. Yet we also can't just give her our captain. We're in a tough spot here. I can't believe that idiot Cook has put us in this situation. Zoro seethed. If I see him again, I'm going to kill him. Nami immediately slapped him upside the head. The absolute hell you will, she bellowed as he cursed at her in protest. He's our friend, and he's your friend too even if you won't spit it out because you insist on being such a man. Friends, the swordsman sputtered in disbelieving indignation. With him, Nami smacked him again, unamused. Damn it, quit that, witch. Peckham's watched this all unfold with a disbelieving expression, sweat trickling down his brow as his eyes flickered between Straw Hat's first mate and the Surgeon of Death like he's watching a tennis match. He didn't think he'd be able to get clear of their attack radius in his current sorry state. And he's not interested in spending an indeterminate amount of time as a sentient head locked in a submarine's fridge. He should have asked to speak with Straw Hat privately. What a mistake. Luffy stared even harder at the invitation. Then she pointedly shot her fist into the ceiling with a crunch. And like magic, the babbling instantly stops. Retracting her arm, Luffy slowly stood up and fixed Peckham's with a penetrating stare. The mink began to sweat even harder, feeling rather like he was being pierced by the sun's unforgiving rays. Peckham's, the incarnated sun goddess intoned, her usually cheerful voice eerily level. I need you to explain something to me. He stared warily at her, reaching to tug his IV line free in case he needed to make a break for it. Which is what? Luffy held the card out in front of her face. Katakuri, she said seriously. Does he actually want to marry me, or did his mom bully him into saying it? There's a perfect minute of stunned silence as everyone in the room slowly pivots to stare at her. Luffy's expression doesn't change one iota. There's no writing from him anywhere on this invitation. She barked, waving the paper furiously. Is this a weird joke? Who doesn't write their proposal personally? That's what you're upset about. Her whole crew shrieked at a volume that makes Zushina's ears twitch in discomfort. Peckham's blinked rapidly at the sheer intensity of the ringing in his skull. And for the life of him he cannot figure out why Luffy doesn't seem fazed in the slightest despite the wave of noise being directed straight at her. She's still staring a hole in his head waiting for an answer. Mama arranges all her children's marriages, Peckham said when he could hear himself speak over the tortured ringing noise in his eardrums. She selects their partners carefully to create more and more alliances for her crew. It makes them stronger, so he doesn't even want to marry me. He wants to buy groceries, Luffy said, now looking well and truly offended. That's so rude. And I didn't say that. Peckham sputtered frantically, his brain jamming as he tried to keep up with that logic. You are Nika incarnate. Any man would fight and die for the chance to marry you. Do you not know that? And what do groceries have to do with anything? The glares that both Zoro and Law leveled at him in response to that. Well, if both of those men didn't have Conqueror's haki, Peckham's was well and truly fooled for a moment. He half expected to blink and find all his organs sitting innocently in 20 different jars. Damn what Mama would have to say about it. There's no note from him anywhere on this card, Luffy complained, waving the offending invitation over her head. He hasn't even written me a nice poem. There's only his mom asking the question. I'd almost think Big Mom was asking me to marry her for all that he's visible on it. Usopp uttered a truly high-pitched shriek at that notion, and Zoro's face turned an interesting shade of purple for a second. Robin, meanwhile, has clamped one hand over her mouth to smother a very heavy fit of laughter. Katakuri is a man of few words, Peckham stammered out in sheer confused disbelief. This conversation has gone down such a strange road. Why, you'll understand when you meet him. Luffy eyeballed him with naked suspicion, judging his honesty, before seeming to accept his words, or at least that he believed them to be true. This doesn't seem to change her mood, however, because she then crossed her arms and huffed. Gramps and Makino always said I can't marry a man I just met, she said stridently. It's not smart. We need to go on dates before we decide if we want to get married. So you can call Big Mom and tell her that Katakuri and Sanji's bride can come and live on our ship for the next few weeks. I'm powerful enough to protect them, so she can't complain about that. We'll travel together and then we'll know if we want to get married. Peckham's eyes widened into plates, and he shot off his bed with a shriek of disbelief. He couldn't have heard that right. He must still be unconscious from the morphine and having a bizarre fever dream. This girl couldn't possibly be that audacious. Did she have any idea what she was saying? He tried to imagine delivering that message to Mama, and his blood pressure vaulted into previously unknown territory. Mercifully, he's not the only one. Her crew briefly went a uniform shade of white disbelief. Are you serious, Luffy? Usopp shrieked when he was physically capable of speaking. Please say you're not bringing a monster like that onto our crew. You're seriously considering it. Zoro roared. Luffy, just say no. Nami pleaded, her brain blanking at the idea of having Big Mom's chief soldier and any of his sisters on the Sunny. Are you out of your mind? Law demanded. Big Mom would never agree to that. And even if she did, her children would be honeypots. Their only task would be to deceive you and drag you back to her island after you let your guard down. Luffy turned toward him and blinked a few times. Didn't Usopp say something like that about you when we met? She asked confusedly, as if he's the one being ridiculous. Law twitched violently at the memory and gave the sniper a blistering look. The dark-haired boy yips and dove behind Frankie's massive frame for protection. Just because I had honest intentions when we forged our alliance doesn't mean Big Mom's children would. Law stressed, turning fully to face Luffy. Don't think that just because she's an emperor, she's anything like Whitebeard. They might both call their crews their families, but that's the only thing they have in common. Big Mom is not honorable or reasonable. If she gets the chance, you would be nothing but her sugar-addled minion who only serves as a cog in her war machine. That should get through to her, right? She won't seriously contemplate courting a Charlotte. Any Charlotte. The fact that she knows about marriage and had given it enough thought to actually retain things she'd been told about it by parental figures not named Shanks didn't mean anything. It didn't, right? His heart relaxed ever so slightly when Luffy flared in response. That's never gonna happen. She snapped, crossing her arms. I will be king of the pirates, not her. And damn it, but Law believed her. He wanted to put the crown on her head himself. Luffy then slumped a little, looking frustrated. But I have to go get Sanji back, so I have to get to her island. She missed being able to just beat down anyone who tried to take her Nakama from her. Arlong hadn't been this powerful. She's gonna have to be smart about this. Like Sabo. Sabo was all about super sneaky plans. He'd be so proud of her. So I'm gonna say that I'll come and go on some dates with him. She'll think that I'm definitely gonna fall for her trap and not suspect anything. And that feeling came right back. Law's eye twitched violently. He exchanged a wordless look with Zoro. And the other man's expression is identical. The two men briefly share a moment of sympathy instead of wariness and sizing up an opponent. We'll need a plan to get Sanji back. Then if Cat actually likes me, I'll kidnap him and bring him with us. Luffy continued because she's deeply oblivious to their blood pressure needs. Peckham's uttered a tortured wheezing sound and clutched his chest. If he was at all sympathetic to Big Mom's minion, Law would have offered him a paper bag. You're not serious. Nami whimpered. That's just a joke. Right, Luffy? Luffy paused and gave her navigator an honest to Nika look of confusion. You have to run away with your fiancé before you get married, don't you? You're not marrying him. Her entire crew shrieked, and their goddess had the absolute gall to look confused by it. Loud, Luffy complained, yanking her hat down over her eyes. She stood like that for a second, like they were the ones being unreasonable and just needed to get it out of their systems, before something suddenly occurred to her and she suddenly skipped up to Law. He tried not to jerk back in surprise. Hey Traffy. She actually looked serious, then bowed down. I'm sorry, I know this makes preparing to fight Kaido more tricky. I just can't leave my Nakama behind. Luffy then straightened up, and there's a little glow in her eyes, her awakened form faintly bleeding through the way it always did when she was serious. I don't want to fight a Yonko without my cook. I need him. Law full body twitched, then forced himself to breathe. You know this about her. For fuck's sake, you were there when she forced herself to awaken her Haki and her devil fruit mere minutes apart to save Porketh. You knew this when she kept breaking everything trying to save you. She did this for him too. She would fight an emperor for him. I know, he said shortly. Then impulsively continued, we're going to need to make teams. I trust Popo to get my crew and the samurai to Wano and begin setting things up. But some of yours need to come as well and get embedded in the local population. Time is not on our side. Luffy blinked. You're not going. But you hate not having plans. Aren't you the one making them for fighting Kaido? And you don't ever make any, which is why I'm going with you. Law responded doggedly, pointedly ignoring the disbelieving sounds from the traders behind him and from Luffy's crew. Knowing you'll run up to Big Mom, punch her in the face and demand she give your cook back or else. She smiles and nods at him like he's a genius, and he could already feel the headache coming on. The things I endure for you. Then it'll be Marineford all over again. So with that in mind, who do you want to send to Wano? Luffy frowned thoughtfully and grasped her chin. About 2 seconds later she snaps her fingers and grins. Zoro. Zoro is my first mate and he's the best at making sure things go smoothly. Because he's easily as reckless as you and leaves the thinking to others. Robin remarked lightly, leaving Zoro torn between glaring at her and looking so very pleased. I'll go to Wano as well, Luffy. We're really doing this, Nami moaned, rubbing her forehead. The captain has spoken, Zoro responded. He sounded like he was forcing the words out through his teeth. Robin gives him this gentle sympathetic look and he scowls at her in response. Frankie, Usopp, you're coming with me. Law nodded, seeing his logic. Nami would get Luffy to Wano and Chopper would patch up the inevitable consequences of her idea of problem solving. Okay, Usopp mumbled meekly. He is not fighting with Zoro when he's in a jealous fit. No. He learned his lesson back in Alabasta. Luffy clapped her hands together. Good. Let's get to making preparations, she declared. We're gonna need to pack lots of food. And restock on gunpowder and stuff. Her eyes widen and she snaps her fingers. Oh, and I'm gonna need a dress just in case. Can't pretend I'm a bride if I don't have a wedding dress. Nay, kitty. She turned on her heel and ran off in the direction of Cat Viper's room. Is there a seamstress I can talk to around here? Hang on, little sis, Frankie protested, hurrying after her. We need to do inventory first. Nami moaned pitifully and buried her face in her hands as Chopper and Usopp run after Frankie as well, babbling about medical supplies and tools and things for repairs. She doesn't even want to look in the direction of her captain's 2 present suitors. Nope, she's not getting in the middle of that. No sir, not even if you paid her. Robin walked over to her and gently pats her shoulder. There, the older girl said comfortingly. This is going to be a disaster. Nami groaned without raising her head. I'm not even sure who I'm afraid of more. Do you think Big Mom would kill me quickly, or does she draw things out? Robin hummed soothingly, moving to rub her back like a mother. Law's crew was rambling at him as well, so she guided the orange-haired girl off to one side so they could hear each other speak. We'd best place a call to those two about this, she reminded her navigator. Nami peeked at her from between her fingers. It took her a second to figure out who Robin was referring to, but when she did, her eyes grew impossibly wide. Is that wise? Nami choked out weakly. Now well and truly getting visions of disaster. Fiery, burning disaster that would make Marineford look like a cheery romp in the park. That would make the Marines look at it and decide they hadn't gotten off that badly after all. Things could actually have been worse. If you're concerned about their reaction to being told Luffy might be getting married now, how do you think they'll feel if they find out during or even after the fact? Robin asked pointedly. Nami froze as still as a statue, slowly rolling that point around in her head. Then she calmly walked over to what she judged to be a relatively sturdy-looking pillar and began to knock her head against it repeatedly, cursing her captain in agonized despair. Robin let her do so for about a minute. Nami could hardly kick up a storm to vent with the still-recovering minx in close proximity, before calmly interposing a hand between her forehead and the stone so she wouldn't hurt herself. Do you want to be the one to call, or shall I? Robin asked lightly. I'm not calling her father, Nami said adamantly, putting her foot down. Not happening. Luffy can tell him herself if she wants to. I think that's fair, Robin mused. Fine, I'll call them. But I want your moral support, Nami said, slumping in relief when Robin immediately nodded in assent. Then we'll go help our captain with the dress. There's a faint spark of light in her eyes at that. I haven't been able to play dress up in a long time. Robin chuckled. Honestly, she's just excited to see what Nami and the seamstress will do to make a bride out of her wild tomboy of a captain. Sanji stared out across the ocean as the ship inexorably dragged him back to the life he'd tried so hard to abandon, occasionally glancing down at the picture in his hands. His cigarette was slowly burning down to a stub as he exhales puffs of smoke in the vain hope that it will help him stop thinking, or at least think less. Big Mom's minion has finally left him alone, though he doubts that will last long, so he has nothing to do but dwell on the sorry situation he's in. Charlotte Pudding is beautiful, delicate, cute, her eyes something to drown in. Sanji's heart jumped when he saw her picture, and then he was told she was a chef. The perfect woman. If he weren't being forced into this on pain of Zeph being killed, he would have gone after her without hesitation. Or he would have, if not ... if not for. Sanji put the picture down and dug around in his pocket for a new cancer stick. He could still hear his Sunshine's laughter in his ears, her yelling into the transponder snail at him to stay alive, to get to safety, that he's in charge and to take care of everyone, that she trusts him to handle it. They must be laughing, he murmured, that the future king of the pirates has such a useless crew member. He was able to protect Nami, Swan, Chopper and Brook, but he was completely unable to prevent them from being dragged into his mess the very moment after they'd provoked Kaido, the strongest creature alive. He remembered hearing about Marineford secondhand from Ivankov, dragging every agonizing detail out of the revolutionary and screaming at them for not protecting her better, for letting her get poisoned within an inch of her life, for allowing her to force a premature awakening that could have destroyed her mind and left her in the same state as Impel Down's jailer beast. He screamed at him despite it not quite being fair, because he hadn't been as angry at Ivankov as he had been at himself. How he'd hated himself for being weak enough that Kuma was able to send him away that day on Sayabati. He should have been there with his Sunshine every step of the way, protecting her so she wouldn't have had to spend minutes not breathing, not spend weeks in a coma, not have to expose herself as Nika to every greedy pirate and wicked tyrant who'd been watching that farce of an attempted execution. What kind of man fails the woman he loves so thoroughly? Yet Luffy hadn't cared, hadn't even understood what he was getting at when Sanji apologized to her upon their reunion. When he spelled it out for her, she'd gotten mad at the notion he'd done anything wrong and smacked him repeatedly until he reluctantly withdrew the words in order to please her. Then she refused to entertain the subject when Moss had edged toward it, actually glaring at her first mate. Sanji flicked his lighter uselessly a few times before managing to spark a flame. "She'll come for me," he thought gravely as he lit his new cigarette. "That's just who she is. It's a tactical mistake, though, isn't it? Maybe that bastard surgeon would argue her around to delaying the rescue until after they'd fought Kaido. At least, she might actually listen to him." But even as he ponders that, Sanji acknowledges the chances of that are very low. Sanji's blood pulsed in aggravation when he thought about the man, and how Luffy had gladly latched onto him and devoted herself to him like she'd known him as long as him, despite him and everyone protesting. The tattooed menace had struggled and protested the whole way, put up a front, but he hadn't been fooled at all. He could see Luffy defrosting him like Nika's sun melting winter's snow away. Sanji could begrudgingly acknowledge he owes the man more than he could ever repay for saving his Sunshine. But that didn't mean he was willing to tolerate yet another rival. Mosshead was bad enough. He was even worse. He refused to let the surgeon have a chance as well. Though admittedly, it was likely rather bold of Sanji to assume that he himself had a chance with his sun goddess, more than causing her so much trouble at a critical time. He knew she would blow it off as irrelevant, more than being the unwilling son of an evil empire. He knew there was a strong possibility he'd lost long before he'd ever had a chance. What was a prince to an emperor, after all? Sanji shook his head firmly at the thought, gritting his teeth at the familiar flare of determination. His heart refused to give up even now. He truly is a fool. He looked down at the picture of Pudding again, wondering if there's the slightest chance that meeting her could change things. He doubted it, though. He sent her a silent apology, hot guilt bubbling in his stomach. Nothing could be more humiliating than being promised to a man whose heart was distracted by someone else. After all, "Forgive me, you deserve better," he thought. "One of everything. For a single table. You're not serious." "What? Can't take a challenge, Patty." He laughed as he grabbed the corn and the butcher's knife and moved to the nearest cutting board. The other man yelled something he didn't hear over the sound of his blood pulsing excitedly at such an opportunity to test his skills. He'd make every dish as delicious as the next. It took time, sending one dish out after another while the other cooks questioned how their new customer planned to pay for all of this. Zeph ordered 2 waiters to tend to the table in question exclusively, and he was as baffled as everyone else when the bewildered men reported that the table only sat 4 people, and one person was doing the lion's share of the eating. Sanji would believe that when he saw it. When he finally reached the end of the dishes, his curiosity got the better of him. He wanted to see who this mystery customer was, and if they were enjoying the fruits of his hard labor. He felt like he'd just pushed through a lunch rush, so he left the kitchen and walked out into the restaurant proper, passing by the harried waiters. "Hey, it's so nice." A beautiful, free-spirited girl's voice rang in his ears, briefly leaving him floating on air. His heart quickening, Sanji zeroed in on the table at a brisk walk. "Wow, you finally slowed down, Luffy. Do you not like that dish?" one of the 2 guys at the table asked, sounding vaguely impressed. "No, it's the best out of all of them." Her back is to him. Her curly black hair waves wildly when she shakes her head. The worn straw hat she wore fell down in front of her eyes. She laughed again, that unique and dizzying sound, and readjusted it. "That's why I gotta savor it." Sanji took a breath, smoothed his hair to the side and walked up to the table, planning to put the charm on as usual. "I'm glad to hear that. I'm the cook. I've never seen someone order half the menu before and I was curious. The chair twisted sideways in a flash and Sanji found himself underneath a pair of beaming hazel eyes and a brilliant smile, warm as the sun itself. You made all of this for me. Thank you. It's so good. Monkey D. Luffy clapped her hands together, and Sanji lost all the words that had never once in his life deserted him so. His heart almost stopped in his chest. And long before Nika awakened he thought he must be in the presence of a goddess. Sanji shook his head and roughly ran one hand through his hair. For once, smoking wasn't doing a thing for his nerves. Slamming one hand onto the railing, he cursed the man who brought him into this world. He wonders if Ryuji will be there when he's dragged before that warmonger again. He wondered if she'd be the same. Or if Judge had crushed her spirit and her empathy over the years. If he'd broken the only family he'd truly had before Zeph and after his mother, Sanji might have to kill him. The sun was beating down warmly on the mountainside village when the familiar sound of the Moby's whistle blared across the distance. The kids who were playing in the yard all paused what they were doing and pivoted toward the mountain. When the whistle blasted a second time, they exchanged delighted looks. Ace is back, a boy said happily. Come on. I hope Marco's with him. Another boy fretted. Mama's back has been bothering her again and nothing's helping her. Maybe they have presents again. The girl put one hand on the jeweled hairpin she'd been given some months back, her heart pounding hopefully. Oh, I hope so. She took off in a rush, causing her friends to sputter a barrage of protests and chase after her. Hey, no fair. You have a head start. The group of children charged down the roads as a single unit, their excited shouting alerting everyone in their wake as they go. A farmer rested his pitchfork in the ground and sighed in relief. You worry too much, his wife said fondly. Edward raised that boy himself to be his successor. I know. Transitions like this are hard, is all. I can't help but worry for them a little. The man looked up and smiled at the familiar sight of Phoenix's flames shooting over the mountaintop. The kids really started screaming in delight. How is he, by the way? His wife chuckled. Resting, if he knows what's good for him. Nightingale wasn't pleased in the slightest that he came back injured from that last expedition. He really needs to understand that he's retired now. The two share a warm laugh, glancing downtown. Among the buildings there is the home where their most famous child of their village had returned to after a long life of adventuring. Not many people here were old enough to remember him from before he'd left to become a pirate, but they all knew who he was to them, their father and protector. Marco the Phoenix swept down to a few feet from the ground, allowing the young man on his back to jump down with a laugh. The kids immediately formed a semicircle around them, cheering as Marco landed. You're back. Of course I am, Portgas Diaz said warmly, ruffling the boy's hair. I'll always come back. The wind made his long white coat flutter slightly around his feet. He's shirtless underneath it, but the long coat had become a semi-permanent addition to his outfit ever since his bounty poster was updated. We missed you, the girl said shyly. What did you bring back this time? Her friend asked, bouncing excitedly in place. More toys. Treasure. Both. Did you get into cool fights? Ace laughed warmly, waving his arms as the kids all began babbling at him and talking on top of each other. One at a time. I'm having trouble understanding everyone. Marco gave him a fond look, seeing how the kids hung on his every word and jostled to get his attention. You're becoming more of a dad every day. He ribbed the younger man, who nevertheless now served as his captain. Shut up, Marco. Ace responded cheerfully without looking at him, a light shade of red coloring his cheeks. Come on, kiddos, let's go to the bakery. You can tell me everything I've missed there and get some treats. Haruta and Vista be up with the cargo as soon as they can. The kids all cheer loudly. The two brothers let themselves be pulled along in their wake, heading to the downtown of the village. It's grown some over the past 2 years, more houses being put up and refugees from power struggles across the ocean stumbling onto the shores looking for somewhere to hide. It helped that the Marines were a sorely overtaxed organization that was bleeding money, men and infrastructure, so the pirates had been able to grab much more for the area, despite them very much facing their own problems. The world government had not come out well from the Paramount War. Sengoku's order to cut the cameras had come to absolutely nothing thanks to Buggy the Clown, who in his efforts to hype himself up and rebuild his reputation had given the whole world a front row seat to not just the awakening of the model Nika fruit, but Luffy devastating the Seastone Wall's support system, sending Kizaru flying out of the arena like swatting an errant fly, and bypassing both Garp and Sengoku to set Ace free. Her collapsing from the strain had given them no respite with the walls gone. Whitebeard and his sons had stormed the plaza, encircled Ace and the unconscious sun goddess protectively, and performed a fighting retreat back to their ships. With Sengoku, Akenu and Aokiji still relatively capable of fighting, the Marines might have been able to salvage something from that disaster. But that was when Blackbeard had arrived with his escapees from Impel Down, while Buggy had still been pointing his visual den at the chaos, proclaiming himself to be the only man to have walked away from a battle with Nika able to rebuild his strength and crew. Of course, the terrified world citizens had been less interested in him than they were in the fact that monsters from whispered horror stories were suddenly not only freed from the supposedly inescapable prison, but had formed a single crew with a former warlord at the helm. To say this was something of a PR disaster for the world government was like saying that Luffy has a bit of an appetite. But these thoughts were relatively far from Ace and Marco's mind as they ushered the village kids into the bakery and greeted the girl behind the counter. Staying on their father's home island was soothing in a way very few experiences could compare to. "I'll have a look at your mom soon, I promise," Marco told the young boy reassuringly. The kid melted with happiness and began scarfing down his muffin with gusto. He glanced at Ace, who's knocking back a strawberry daiquiri and lounging comfortably against the bar as he amused the children with abbreviated stories of their trip. Odd as it was to see him wearing that long coat, it fit him now. Ace usually took it off during leisure time, not liking covering up his tattoo, but he'd picked it himself a while back. He'd wanted to visually emulate their father a little bit now, with him as acting captain. And the bastard retreated, trailing after his mother like a dog on a leash. Ace finished, his voice dripping disdain. "I almost feel sorry for the Marines with this being the best they can do to fill warlord positions. Wonder why Mihawk bothers with it. Is he really Grandpa Edward's son?" one of the girls asked dubiously. For the sake of plausible deniability, the kids had been taught not to refer to the old captain by his moniker, "'cause he sounds like a punk." Ace snorted. "Even if he has Pops's blood, that doesn't make him his son. Our brother." He groaned and rolled his shoulder. "He almost hits like him, though." Before he could start on another story, however, Haruta stuck his head in the door and sighed in relief. "Oi, Ace, call for you." He walked inside, holding a tray with a transponder snail that's all but wringing its shell off of its back. "Very persistent, whoever it is." Ace arched an eyebrow, looking a little surprised, and set his mug aside. "Sorry, kids. This might be important." He stood up and walked out of the bakery to a chorus of groans. Marco followed after him, making sure to close the door after him. Ace grabbed the receiver and lazily stated, "Yo, what can the Whitebeard pirates do for you?" "Ace-san," a semi-familiar voice shrieked through the snail, making the Ravenet lean back slightly in surprise. The snail took on the features of a half-enraged, half-panicked navigator that he sort of knew but recognized instantly. "Oh, thank Nika, you finally picked up. I was starting to think I wouldn't be able to reach you. Wouldn't that have made my day just perfect?" "Aha, I still can't get a hold of Sabo. I bet he's buried in some undercover mission that won't end for days. The inconsiderate jerk who serves as my captain's missing brain cells." "Nami," Ace managed after a second of sheer surprise at the tirade. "Nami, is that you?" His expression shifted from calm to worried so fast Marco could have blinked and missed it. "What's happened? Where's Luffy?" Nami gulped, and beads of sweat formed on the transponder snail's head. "Luffy's fine, we're fine. Not sure how long that'll last. With this ridiculous, she's getting fitted for a dress. I'm just calling to pass information along." "A dress?" Ace parroted in confusion. "What for? You're not still in Dressrosa, are you?" Luffy had pounced on the transponder snail number he'd given her after Marineford and called him incessantly, even after she started traveling. But her crewmates hadn't always joined in, having her navigator call him with her nowhere to be heard, and sounding more stressed out than Dandan after they'd gone crocodile hunting. His heart started to pound painfully in his chest. "No, we're in zoo, and the problem is," the snail's eyes swivel from side to side, suggesting Nami was pacing. "Big Mom sent Peckham's and some other goon of hers, Bijay or something, to kidnap Sanji for a wedding to one of her children. Peckham's was gonna let the whole thing go because we saved the minks here. Jack the Drought had attacked this place looking for someone named Rezo and they wouldn't give him up, so he poisoned them all with gas. But we got here in time to undo it. But that other guy shot him in the back and took Sanji away anyway, because his family is the head of some supposed evil empire. But the worst thing is..." "Slow down," Ace ordered sharply, reeling from the absolute spitfire delivery of information. Nami clammed up instantly, the snail going very stiff. "Jack attacked Zoo. Is he still there? Were you there when it happened?" "No, he got called away to go try and free Doflamingo from escort to impel down. We arrived afterwards," Nami responded, before a nervous tone entered her voice. "He didn't manage to do that, did he?" Ace snapped a look at Marco and Haruta. "Not that we've heard," he said after they both shook their heads. "So Bijay took Sanji, that's your cook, right?" It took a second to place the name. "That was one of the worst generation, the user of the castle fruit." "Yes," Nami said, looking both upset and furious at the admission. "That would be bad enough, except Big Mom ... she also wants to." The usually self-confident navigator trailed off, which causes Ace to ball up one hand into a fist. "Wants to what?" He prodded impatiently. He's already seeing a trajectory of events he doesn't like. Luffy would never let anyone taking one of her crewmates from her stand. The smoking ruin where Anai's lobby used to be stood testament to that. But this wasn't a complacent judicial island she's storming, it's Linlin. Nami took in a deep breath. She wants Luffy persons. She mumbled in a rush. I can't understand you, Ace stated flatly. Repeat that, and slower, please. Ugh. Big Mom sent a message proposing that Luffy marry her son. Nami blurted out, her voice shaking audibly. Katakuri. Charlotte Katakuri. The transponder snail tray slipped from Ace's numb fingers and clattered to the ground. Haruta yelped and might have berated him for not being more careful with the poor thing, but Ace couldn't hear him over the static in his ears. The sentence repeated itself in his mind mockingly as he tries to process the idea of his Lou in the clutches of Charlotte fucking Linlin ... that murderous fucking monster who ate her own children when she went on her hunger rampages. She wanted to force Lou to marry her son. The Fire Loja sucked in a shaky breath and forced himself to page through his emotions one at a time, to not lose his head. Rage was first, furious and familiar, because how dare that fat old hag try to get her greedy hands on Lou. Second was a violent burst of anxiety. Two priorities going to war with each other, and then he forced his head to clear and spoke again. What did Lou have to say about that? Nami causes the rattled snail to make a complicated expression. She ... said that she's not getting married to a guy she doesn't know, so Katakuri will have to court her if he wants to marry her. She said slowly, like she's afraid to say this out loud. I honestly can't tell if she's at all serious about letting him try, or if that's the cover story she's going with so we can enter Tottland and get Sanji back. Ace uttered a very dry chuckle. Yeah, it can be hard to tell with her sometimes. He put a hand on his hip. Katakuri, huh? And here I was thinking he was the most tolerable one of Big Mom's brood. Venomous anger flared his chest. Do you know him at all? Nami hedged uncertainly. Ace shrugged aggressively. As a person, not really, but I can say his reputation's earned. Strong, smart enough to use that strength well, and he's mastered observation hacky enough to see short visions of the future, both in and out of battle. You're kidding, the navigator moaned dismally. I wish, Ace responded. Thanks for contacting me, and keep pestering Sabo until he picks up. The elusive bastard might be on a mission of some sort, but he'll want to know as soon as possible. He briefly smiles at the thought of the blonde's reaction. The image gives him a brief moment of respite. I'll get back to you in a bit. I need to talk to some people. All right, Nami said, like she doesn't trust his calm-sounding reaction. There's a clicking sound as she hung up. Ace squeezed his eyes shut, his hands balling into fists. He could feel both Marco and Haruta staring nervously at him. Hey, why the sad face, Lou? Ace hopped off the edge of his first ship onto the dock, where the raven-haired girl had stopped helping him load food crates in favor of staring despondently out at the ocean waters. You were so excited to see me off yesterday. Luffy tugged on the brim of her hat, hiding her eyes from him. A slight frown crossing his face, Ace put a hand on her shoulder. I am, Luffy protested, shaking her head violently. I'm really happy for you, Ace. I'm just, she sniffled, sending a bolt of panicked alarm through the older boy. Hey, no tears. Pirates don't cry, he babbled, brushing a shimmer of a tear away. Do so, Luffy muttered just to be contrary. She'd said those very words herself whenever he'd teased her about her ability to handle things without him in the previous week. Unfortunately for her, repressing her emotions was not something she was good at, and she shook her head. I'm gonna miss you so much. Ace smiled, the gesture not showing just how much those words filled him with joy. You're crying like I'm going away forever, he teased, moving her hat up. Her shimmering hazel eyes focused on him. His chest squeezed at the sight and he brushed her cheek again to urge them away. I thought you were going to chase after me into the sea. What, are you not tough enough after all this time? Don't tell me you've decided to be a housewife like Woolslap keeps telling you to. The words have their intended effect. Luffy's mood flipped from sad to indignant instantly. That's not funny. I'm going out to sea and I'm gonna be king of the pirates. I'll catch up with you before you know it. Her eyes flashed. You won't even see me coming. Ace laughed and nudges her hat back so he can ruffle her hair. She squeaked, pouting adorably at him, and his gaze drifted briefly to her full pink lips before he caught himself and shook his head. I mean it, Luffy yelled, misunderstanding the gesture. I know you will, Ace responded, dropping his hand. Once you reach the Grand Line, I'll be there waiting for you. He winked. So don't leave me hanging, okay? Luffy smiled brightly. Her eyes are still shiny, and a moment later, she lunged forward and hugged him tightly. Ace uttered a quiet woof and wrapped his arms around her shoulders, almost afraid that she'd hear how hard his heart was pounding. Fuck, he was going to miss her. Miss her warmth, her laughter, everything. I'll miss you too, Lou, he murmured. Luffy made a happy sound and squeezed him tighter. Good luck, Ace, she murmured, before beaming at him. I love you. Ace jerked slightly, his breath catching in his throat. I know, he said, instead of the words he wanted to say back. He'd promised to be her brother, before he was old enough to know the forms that love could take, and what if she rejects him? You tell me all the time. You're not worried I'll forget, are you? Luffy peered up at him. Nope. Sometimes I think you don't believe me, though. I do. I really do love you, Ace. Ace's left arm melted into fire. Not bright orange flames, but brilliant white. The searing heat causes his brothers to automatically take a few steps back from him. He didn't say anything for a long moment, staring blankly at the middle distance, putting the memory away in favor of thinking on the information that Nami had given him thoroughly. Sort through the implications, work out what Big Mom's plan could be, and take stock of the Whitebeard pirate's current situation. He directed the heat toward the sky and away from the building just in case, as he thinks, keeping his flames from doing any damage. It gave his rage somewhere to go. Marco stared uneasily at Ace and faintly swallowed. His brother and captain is glacially calm on the outside. It's eerie, because he knew it was the exact opposite of what he's feeling. For the first time he missed the times when the Ravenet would yell, curse and lose his temper like he used to. Underneath Ace's roiling haki, even though he knows he won't hurt him, Marco couldn't escape the faint feeling of being a bird in the grasp of a cat. Ace clenched his fist and dismisses the white flames. Where was the last time and place we saw Weavile or the traitor? He asked in a neutral tone. I'll call the fleet, Haruta responded, already dialing. Some time later, marriage. That tyrannical hag wants to make Lou marry one of her spawn. Sabo bellowed, prompting Ain to slap a hand over his mouth. He glanced indignantly at her. The Neo-Marine rolled her eyes and jerked a thumb over her shoulder to where the doctors were examining Kuma, or had been. Now they were wincing and giving him wide-eyed looks. The blonde frowned and reluctantly bowed his head in apology. Ain gave him a faintly wary look and dropped her hand in a way that told him it would be back in a flash if he started shouting again. It wasn't fair. They were clear of Mary Ghosts, damn it. Don't scream at me, it wasn't my idea. Nami whined, the poor transponder snail mimicking her swirling eyes. They have Sanji too. Do the revolutionaries know anything about Germa 66? That moron didn't tell us he was Vinsmoke. We wouldn't have cared, but now he's getting married because of them and we're running into them blind. They're involved too. Sabo cursed, punching the deck. Damn it. He'd thought that Sanji's swirling eyebrow looked familiar somehow, but he hadn't been able to make the connection. Trying to buy favor with Big Mom. No doubt, so they can try and reconquer the North Blue. Conquer, Nami repeated, like she was hoping she'd misheard him. Judge Vinsmoke, Ain started in a low hiss, is a descendant of the family that originally held rulership of the entire North Blue Sea. Their kingdom splintered generations ago, but the world government in its infinite wisdom, her voice dripped with scorn, still recognizes his family as royal and the fleet of warships that act as the modern Germa kingdom as a member state. Nami was silent at that for a minute, which was just as well because Sabo was reciting multiplication tables inside his head to be able to think without screaming again. Oh my god, the orange-haired navigator muttered finally, sounding too exhausted to even be peeved at the revelation. I'm starting to come up with all these horrible ideas as to why Sanji-kun never talked about his past. Sabo felt a spike of warm empathy toward the former prince, which caught him by surprise. He wouldn't have thought that he and Sanji, the guy he'd punched in the face for flirting too hard with Luffy, came from such a similar place. Keep all that worry and anger reserved for when you meet Judge, he advised. It'll make dropping a lightning bolt on the bastard even more satisfying. Nami hummed thoughtfully at the idea. So, there's no way to talk Luffy out of this incredibly dangerous detour on her way to Wano. She must know that if she just says the word, I'll have Sanji extracted from Tottland and back on the Sunny within the week. He'd do it in a heartbeat. Karasu has lost too many poker games to him to be able to refuse. And he'd completed their most important mission for the foreseeable future. He'd be off as soon as he passed the most dangerous information to Dragon. Of course, that would require Luffy being willing to risk him going into an emperor's territory alone. He had to make the offer, however. The snail translated the longing look Nami must be wearing perfectly. Have you ever been able to talk Luffy out of anything? She asked helplessly, but I'll definitely pass it along. Maybe she'll have a last-second change of heart. Sabo heard Robin laugh gently on the other end and the snail started pouting. I can hope. Sabo chuckled softly, understanding her feelings. I'll have our people in the East Blue put their ears to the ground, he told the snail. Big Mom's tea party invitations come with a caveat. If you ever fail to make it there for any reason, she sends her minions to find someone you love to cut their head off and put it in a box. Nami inhaled sharply. Barady, she said, understanding instantly. So that's the restaurant he worked at? Sabo confirmed. The snail nodded vigorously. Good, that cuts out any time wasted on searching. I'll let Ivankov know to watch out for rats poking around Kambeka as well. And local sympathizers in the waters around the rest of your homes will be on the alert for both Germa and Linland's goons. You are a saint. An actual saint, not those world-noble bastards. Nami told him, sounding like she was slumping in relief. You won't get in trouble spending the revolutionaries' time and resources helping a pirate crew, will you? Sabo scoffed. We'll keep it circumspect. And besides, anyone who complains about that can take it up with Dragon. Or my pipe. Of course, I don't know what I was expecting. Aang smiled faintly, amused. Sabo was entirely predictable when it came to Monkey D. Luffy. Koala had mixed opinions on the matter. Ever since the Neo-Marines and Revolutionaries had started a partnership, she'd found herself on missions with the twosome fairly frequently, and she'd say she knew them pretty well by now. The moment Luffy entered the equation, Sabo's priorities swiveled to her. Irrational guilt over his amnesia played a part, sure, but sometimes Aang wondered. And while Dragon didn't quite show it outright, she knew from her sensei, who had been ensuring that every CP0 agent sent after Luffy over the 2 years she'd been in seclusion training either came up with nothing or vanished into the ocean without a trace. The man was a distant father, probably by necessity, but he was still the young pirate's father, and he guarded her like a mythical dragon guarded his treasure. I won't be able to head to Whole Cake Island straight away, Sabo was warning the navigator when she came out of her thoughts. We're wrapping up our most recent mission and can't afford to be complacent about it. But once I'm able, I'll be on my way. Is there a signal we should look out for? Nami asked. Nah, just bide your time, I'll come find you. It's safer that way, Sabo responded with a slight shake of his head. Tell Luffy to be careful with Katakuri. He's the closest to having a soul out of most of that brood, sure, but he's his mother's enforcer first and foremost. The snail nodded vigorously. Thank you, Sabo. Robin's warm voice sounded from the other side of the line. I know this isn't exactly convenient for you. It's for Lu, Sabo said with a shake of his head. Don't worry about it. His brow furrowed. Before I forget, does Ace know? Yeah, I called him first. He hung up before he lost his temper. Nami sounded a little unnerved. I'm both grateful and a little terrified of what he's planning. Sabo clicked his tongue. Let me worry about that. I'll talk to him in case he needs an infusion of common sense. And to coordinate, tell Lu to be careful and that I'll be right with her. And if that seamstress is making her a dress, it better look divine. The snail blinked rapidly. Okay, Nami sounded a little dumbfounded, but Sabo knew that he had his priorities in order no matter what anyone told him. I won't keep you any longer, then. Luffy will be sorry she missed you. Tell her I'll see her soon, Sabo responded lightly. A few polite exchanges later and he hung up. The blonde sucked in a deep breath, then vaulted to his feet and started cursing under his breath, stalking back and forth with his hands behind his back. Aang watched him move, rather wishing that Koala was here. That old hag thinks one of her brats is worthy of Lu, does she? Sabo seethed. The world's in luck. She's going senile at a rapid pace. Who the hell does she think she is? A Yonko, who's used to getting what she wants. Aang deadpanned, bemused. Yeah, well, not this time. Sabo growled, his fist shimmering with haki. Hell will freeze over before I let her turn Luffy into one of her long-suffering in-laws. He froze at the edge of the clearing, his heart completely in his throat. For a moment he almost couldn't recognize the slender waif of a teenager curled up among the roots of a great tree, looking tired and discomforted, as the cute, bratty little girl who'd chased him and Ace through the jungle until she'd wormed her way into their lives. The difference was jarring, and it painfully drove home just how much he'd missed, how much his amnesia had stolen from them. Sucking in a deep breath, he walked up to the tree. Hey Lu, breakfast isn't gonna catch itself. He tried. If you keep sleeping in, Ace and I will keep all the tiger meat to ourselves. Those half-closed hazel eyes snapped open instantly. No, my tiger. She shrieked on autopilot before her eyes registered who she was looking at, and indignation melted into confusion. Wait. What? She stared up at him, at the familiar top hat and goggles settled on blonde hair. Blue eyes, one shaded by a sizable burn scar. She knew that face. She did. She had missed it so much. Her mind spun, and she slowly shrank back into the tree, much to his dismay. Oh, I'm dreaming, she mumbled. Why? Sabo asked softly. Because you're gone, Luffy responded insistently. Her voice tiny and fragile. You died. Dogra saw you get. She bites her bottom lip, tears forming in her eyes. He saw my little ship get fired on by a celestial dragon, Sabo confirmed, watching her eyes grow even wider. Who else knew that, after all? Turns out those spineless bastards can't shoot for shit. He burned half my face and almost drowned me when I passed out and my boat collapsed. But he didn't kill me. Your dad fished me out of the water and patched me up, made me a revolutionary. I'm right here, Lu. That's not funny, Luffy said, her voice getting a little shaky with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and budding hope. You would have come home if you hadn't died. The statement felt like a knife in his chest. God, he wished that he had. That he'd bypassed his gut instinct about Goa and looked just a little longer to make sure he wasn't leaving anything behind. I would have if I hadn't taken a head injury. It gave me amnesia. I forgot everything about my life. He sucked in a shaky breath, tears prickling at his eyes. Until I saw you. It's me, Lu. Sabo. Luffy slowly sat up and stared deeply into his eyes, searching for any sign of deceit. The light of the sun burning into him as she catalogued every inch of his face and compared him to her memories. Sabo swallowed minutely, silently pleading that she'd believed him. The longest moment of his life ticked on until Luffy's expression softened ... and then lit up like the new dawn. Tears spilled down her cheeks, joyous and disbelieving, and Luffy tackled him so hard he was flung several feet back before landing on his back in the grass with a thud. "Sabo," she cried, burying her face in his chest and hugging him like a python. Sabo wheezed, the air knocked out of his lungs. Not that he cared. He hugged her back as hard as he could. "Sabo, Sabo, you're alive. You came back." Sabo closed his eyes briefly, then flexed his fists and scowling out at the ocean. "Yeah," he muttered darkly. "Linland's days are numbered. Murderous bitch shouldn't have targeted Lu if she wanted to keep her head." "You think that's possible now?" Aang asked. The Marines didn't manage to kill Whitebeard, and his health was worse than hers currently is. Sabo glanced sideways at her and smirked. "Trust me. Are you sure we can't make it a little roomier?" Luffy asked, twisting from side to side and watching the skirt of her dress swoosh around her ankles. "I can probably fight in this, but it'll be harder to kick than usual." The cheetah mink seamstress shook her head, somewhere between amused and exasperated with a hint of existential dread. "I've done my best, Luffy-chan, but dresses aren't meant for fighting." She zipped up the back, causing Luffy to blink and roll her shoulders. They had spent about 2 hours struggling with the top half of the dress, or the seamstress Ayla had been struggling while Luffy obliviously complained over and over that she needed more range of movement. Wedding dresses were a complex creation at the best of times, but sizing and creating one for a pirate who was rather expecting her potential wedding to devolve into a brawl. Well, thankfully for poor Ayla's nerves, Nami and Robin had quickly joined her in her efforts and vetoed some of Luffy's more interesting requests for her dress, such as multiple snack pockets. The Ravenet had adamantly declined a veil, saying she wouldn't wear anything but her hat and wasn't going to attach anything to it. Nami kind of despaired at the realization that Luffy honestly considered Roger's keepsake as proper wedding attire. She was impressed, though, that her constantly energetic captain had somehow managed to endure the hours of the dress being assembled. Granted, Luffy had occasionally fallen dead asleep in the chair, forcing her and Robin to hold her up and pose her while the seamstress and her assistants worked. But she hadn't thrown any tantrums about being bored or made any escape attempts. By her standards, that was an incredible show of restraint. "By marrying someone, you're promising to be with them forever," Luffy had said when Nami expressed disbelief at this. "If you don't approach it seriously, why would anyone believe your promise is real?" "I didn't realize you'd given this that much thought," Nami admitted after a few seconds, blinking rapidly at her. Granted, the whole thing had still been a struggle. Luffy understood very little about clothing and its making, so she had no problem asking for outrageous things and not understanding why it gave Ayla and her crew hives. Robin's steady presence helped the process along, and Nami had snapped early on and decided to dig into her own closet for date outfits for Luffy so they won't be trapped in this building for weeks. The results were quite remarkable, though. Luffy's wedding dress is a thing of beauty, floor-length, sleeveless, a neckline that emphasizes her femininity without being too generous, and the layered skirt embroidered with golden suns and flowers was straight out of a fairy tale. Luffy beamed, swirling in a circle. "Well," Ayla prompted, admirably not sounding completely exhausted. "It's great," Luffy exulted happily, bouncing on her heels. The cheetah mink immediately collapses into her chair in relief and her assistants cheer like they just won a war. "Shishishishi, it's so comfy. Oh, too bad Makino isn't here to see it. Maybe I'll have Usopp take some pictures." You do look amazing, Luffy," Nami admitted, a little odd. She hadn't thought that anything could make Luffy look like a bride rather than the tomboy she was. But this ... the orange-haired girl had attacked the dress up with all her energy, but she still hadn't really expected much more than making her cute, not divine. "I'm almost glad Sanji isn't here," she admitted silently. "He'd faint and stay unconscious for days. I just need to find the right necklace and it'll be perfect." "I agree," Robin said lightly. "You should dress up more often, Luffy. I'm sure our crewmates would be rather impressed with the results." Nami laughed dryly. "Yeah, impressed." Lowering her voice to a hiss, she leaned over to the archaeologist and whispered, "Are you trying to kill Zoro and Sanji?" Robin gave her a picture-perfect innocent smile at that. "Do not mess up my betting pool, which I've got a fortune riding on this." Luffy blinked rapidly at Robin. "Pirates don't wear dresses," she laughed, shaking her head. "This is a special exception." She hopped up down from the changing platform, a bright smile on her face. "I can't wait to show Zoro and Traffy." Nami fumbled with her drink and spilled half of it on her boot. Cursing virulently, she gave Luffy a wide-eyed look. "Hey, the dress is part of the plan, yeah?" Luffy asked, blinking at her. "I want to show Traffy that I'm taking the plan seriously, and I need Zoro's opinions. Oh, and I want to show Usopp and Frankie before they go too." "That sounds like a fine idea," Robin said while Nami tried to regain her composure. "Shall we give the boys a call and have them come to you? Best we not get the dress dirty before we've even pushed off Zoo, after all." Luffy looked down at her outfit as if seeing it for the first time. Yeah, that would probably be smart, she admitted casually, and Nami resisted the urge to throttle her at the implication that she would have run out to the sunny if Robin hadn't been quick on the draw. Ayla looked like she might faint. Robin smiled serenely and pulled out a baby din-din while Luffy whirled in a circle again, seemingly in rapture. I'm still surprised you gave marriage much thought, Nami remarked when she'd marginally calmed down. I wouldn't have thought Miss I'm going to be king of the pirates was the type. Makino told me a lot of fairy tales about princesses and adventurers when I was little, Luffy said, testing a curtsy. She wobbles and almost falls flat on her back at the deeply uncharacteristic movement, snickering at herself. I didn't care much for the whole locked in the tower thing. Nobody would ever be able to do that to Shanks. But what I did like was that Makino always said that marrying someone they loved made the princess happy forever. Luffy tilted her hat up and gave Nami a little smile, a bit more serious than her usual, but equally sincere. Doesn't that sound amazing? You were never worried that no one would want to marry a pirate? Nami asked. Shanks was there when Roger and Rogue got married. Luffy responded, unfazed. He told me all about it. Right, your pirate dad. Nami's smile grew a little strained. I don't suppose you're planning to tell him about this maybe marriage of yours. Luffy blinked rapidly. I hadn't thought. Well, I'm supposed to meet him again when I'm a great pirate and give him his hat back. Now she had her thinking face on, which Nami isn't sure if she's worried or hopeful. Maybe. She smiled at the thought. It would be cool if he was there. But he's probably busy with his territory ... The door swung open, admitting Chopper, Usopp, Momonosuke, Brook and Frankie. Luffy pivoted to face them, beamed, and bowed, lifting her skirt just like all the pictures from Makino's book. Hey guys, do I look like a bride? She asked them cheerfully. Usopp's mouth unhinged and dropped to the ground. Chopper gasped in awe. Momo's eyes grew really wide before he blushed red as a tomato, and Brook literally collapsed into a pile of bones, his skull pink in the cheeks. Wow, big sis, Chopper blurted out. You look so beautiful. Who are you and what have you done with Luffy? Usopp whispered in disbelief. Was this delicate, beautiful flower his captain and best friend? What sorcery was this? Had someone cast a spell on her? Sure, Luffy usually dressed in boys' clothes that were practical instead of flattering, but still, what's that supposed to mean? Luffy asked, confused and a little indignant. Usopp flailed a little, too afraid to explain and still too surprised to speak anyway. Wow, little sis, Frankie laughed, patting her on the head. She practically disappeared under his large hand without protest, a little giggle escaping her lips. You look mighty fine in that. I'm impressed. Well done, ladies, Brook said from the floor. Our captain has never looked more radiant. What are you all yelling about? It's just a change of clothes, Zoro grumbled as he walked into the room, still carrying a crate of food. Law trailed right behind him, muttering something about how ridiculous this was since she wasn't going to get married. Usopp had been standing in his line of vision. The sharpshooter yelped in terror at the sound of his voice and leapt out of the way. Zoro set eyes on Luffy and dropped the crate on his foot. His eyes widened into discs and he stared speechlessly at the Ravenet, who stopped making any sound under the intensity of his gaze. The swordsman's mouth went completely dry. Beautiful. A hot spike of desire that swamped him in an instant was familiar, but more powerful than ever before. He wanted to take her into his arms and entreat her to choose him, tell her everything he'd tried to convey ever since that day in the dusty yards of Shell's town. Zoro, you dropped the food, Luffy cried, scandalized. Her swordsman kept staring at her, like he was in a trance, and the girl felt her cheeks heat up intensely along with her heart suddenly beating like a fleeing rabbit. A sound that might have been Nika snickering echoed in her ears. See Zoro, he's never seen you in anything but boys' clothes. Has he? Law asked, drawing her attention to him. How the man was capable of speaking, he wasn't sure. His sun goddess was drowning out the whole world. It would be so easy to shamble her into his arms and kiss her. He'd half raised one hand to do exactly that. Damn how many people were watching. When the moment was shattered. Luffy Heim, you're so pretty. Momonosuke cheered, running up to her and jumping up to hug her. Luffy grinned and wrapped her arms around him, lifting him off his feet. The young boy immediately buried his face in her ample chest. His childish crush on his rescuer amplified by budding adolescence and a lewd boldness. The death glares that pierced him from behind. Well, how the kid didn't drop dead on the spot Usopp couldn't figure out. A black aura that dimmed the light around Zeus swirled around Zoro and Law, livid at the little brat taking advantage of Luffy's obliviousness like this and wondering if they could get away with turning the would-be shogun into a pile of talking limbs. Thanks, Momo, Luffy said cheerfully, promptly dropping Momo on the ground. The boy yipped in disappointment. Her sense of balance restored, she waved at Law. What do you think, Traffy? Wha? The surgeon of death stuttered at question, snapping out of his rage fit in an instant. Of ... the dress. It suits you, he managed lamely. Zoro chuckled mockingly, causing him to snap a glare at him. Good, Luffy said, a little bewildered. Nami wordlessly walked over to the wall and started knocking her head against it. This is all I needed. Now that I look like a bride, Big Mom will definitely think I'm gonna marry Cat no matter what. She turned to Zoro. I gotta talk to you for a second, Zoro, about going to Wano. Just give me a sec to change back. Zoro nodded jerkily. He wouldn't be able to focus on anything she said while in that dress anyway. The seducing woods were avoided by even the most daring of Tottland's citizens, which included many of Big Mom's own children. Only the most powerful among the officers went there for any reason, which made it perfect for the purposes of Charlotte Katakuri, who was just about sick of his siblings screaming about his upcoming wedding. The tall man sat alone on the edges of the water, a pile of newspapers sitting next to him while he paged through the expose on the Straw Hats' rating of a nice lobby. Katakuri read through the descriptions of the crew's assault on the judicial island and snorted in annoyance. Trying to get actual information to analyze mixed in with the slurry of propaganda and blatant lies the world government peddled was harder than finding sea stone in a sky island. But it was the only source of information on his now fiancée he could get his hands on. Within the paragraphs trying to portray her as some sort of diabolical mastermind. Around the same time they'd given Marshal D. Teach a warlord position. If he remembers correctly, Katakuri picked up that the only reason that Luffy had attacked the island was because they had kidnapped her archaeologist. Do what you want with the world, I just want Robin back. Usually it was his mother, or Newgate or Kaido, who leveled entire islands when someone they put value on was taken. That girl had only been sailing for 6 months, yet she challenged the entire world government and succeeded. She was described as a wild card in a viciously unpredictable danger. There were rumors that she was the one who had defeated Crocodile, not Commodore Smoker, only several weeks before that. She had destroyed the Marine's attempt to execute Roger's son, and she was the holder of the human fruit model, Nika, loyal to and protective of her crew. Aside from that, Katakuri couldn't figure out exactly who Monkey D. Luffy was. So this is where you've been brooding. Katakuri uttered a faint irritated sound at his sister's voice. Bruley strolled out of the seducing woods and sat down next to him, making a face when she saw the newspapers. You weren't expecting to get any decent information out of the government's rag, were you? It would be a reprieve from knowing nothing. Katakuri responded shortly, not looking at her. Don't you have wedding preparations to work on, Bruley? Now, is that any way to speak to someone who's worried about you? Bruley said. Katakuri stared straight ahead. It's strange to see you caught so flat-footed. I'm not. Oh yes, that's why you're cribbing the government's notes on your bride-to-be and snapping at anyone who tries to talk to you about your engagement. Katakuri twitched and tossed the newspaper aside. Why is mother marrying me off now? We have brothers closer to the girl's age, ones who don't. He violently shook his hand in front of his scarf-covered mouth. Have this to disgust and horrify her. She'd never want to touch him, once she'd seen his mouth. And how long could he conceal it from her in the first place? Up until the wedding, if he was lucky. His hands balled into fists, frustrated and angry that he'd let himself believe that his mother wouldn't ever try to marry him off. He'd avoided the subject as much as possible and hoped, as he'd gotten older, that she would focus on his sweeter, more attractive siblings to hook allies. And why did it have to be that girl? Nonsense, Bruley said sharply. There is nothing wrong with you, in your entirely unbiased opinion, Katakuri asked, though his tone was tired, not biting. She's a fool if it disturbs her. His sister retorted spiritedly. You are everything a man should be. You're a protector, a warrior, you never lose. Why wouldn't she want to marry you? Katakuri didn't say anything, frowning. Yes, Nika would be so pleased to be forced into a subservient role in our pirate crew. Can't Mama see that this won't get her what she wants? Mother never asked me if I wanted to marry this strange girl. Perhaps I don't wish to marry at all. Bruley sighed and put a hand on his arm. She never asks any of us that, she acknowledged. We do everything we can for her because she gave us life and protects us. You knew that. She bumped his shoulder, something she hadn't done since they were children. How bad could it be, Katakuri? Haven't you seen how happy Praline is with her new husband? She is, Katakuri admitted, slightly begrudgingly. He'd watched the Sun Pirate like a hawk after the honeymoon, but he's never been anything but a perfect partner for his sister. But I am not her. Of course he's not coming out to town. Oven laughed, very amused at the idea. Katakuri's face is so horrifying he couldn't even buy a woman. Cracker burst into a howling fit of laughter, and Katakuri resisted the urge to do any more than twitch his fingers. The only thing worse than this brother's insults was the fact that they were right. Bruley was definitely frowning now, and Katakuri knows that he's said too much. He was the reliable one. He needed to be the one she leaned on, not the other way around. You haven't met the girl yet, she offered. She might be all right. Her crew must suspect why mother is making the offer, Katakuri said. Perhaps they won't come. Fire First would take them in if they made for his territory. Bruley scoffed. That child. Mama would crush him. Don't be so overconfident. Katakuri rolled his eyes. Didn't you see what happened to the Marines when they presumed that they couldn't possibly fail? He was captured and strung up in the yard like some paradise pirate. His family had to come and save him. He's just another cocky Loja who got the captaincy because he was Whitebeard's favorite, Bruley said scornfully. He was captured by Marshal D. Teach, Katakuri retorted, annoyed at her attitude. How do you fancy your chances in a one-on-one fight against that freak? A freak who used to be your brother, who you trusted unconditionally. Bruley fell tellingly silent. He won't have a mental block like that fighting us, I assure you. Fire Fist. The man Luffy had nearly sacrificed her body, mind, and life to save without hesitation. Her desperation to rescue him so powerful she awakened her fruit. Something twinged in Katakuri's chest, an ugly feeling he didn't know how to describe, and he ruthlessly squashed it and put it from his mind. The girl doesn't seem to be the type to run. Not when her cook is here, he acknowledged, before Bruley could read anything into his expression. She, among all his siblings, was the one who knew him best. But we have to at least consider it. True, Bruley said after a few moments of silence. But I'm not worried. Nothing will get past you, big brother. Katakuri exhaled slowly, his scarf hiding a small smile. As exhausting as his routine is, as draining as maintaining this facade of perfection was on him, to protect her and his other sibling, it was worth it. Shiffin is screaming, pleading, and he bolted toward her voice, down the hall and into the room where his sister is being beaten black and blue. When he saw her assailant, he staggered to a stop instinctively. He stood there for a moment, frozen, Shiffin seeing him and pleading him with her eyes, help me, you always protect us, why are you just standing there, please? He moved forward and reached out to the assailant's arm, without a plan and moving entirely on instinct. And then, how dare you? Katakuri's breath hitched, and a phantom shiver of pain ran down his arm. He flexed his hand instinctively, chasing the memory away. Do we know when the girl will be here? He asked, his calm firmly in place in an instant. We haven't heard from her, Bruley admitted, but she won't keep Mama waiting long. Katakuri nodded in agreement. He wondered how long he had until he would be face to face with the sun goddess. This strange, unbalanced feeling. Would it go away once he met her? Perhaps then he could properly square her away as an asset. Or an opponent. Perhaps once she raged at them for taking her cook and rejected them from the outset, he'd realize how much he'd been overthinking things. Yes, surely that would be it. She wouldn't get close enough to even want to see his face. He'd never have to wonder if maybe she might be odd enough to. No, he wasn't a child anymore. Stay in contact with us, all right? Zoro asked Luffy, watching as the Sunny and the Tang finished their final travel preparations. Be discreet about it, but whatever goes wrong, I want to know about it. Luffy nodded confidently. She's back in her usual red cardigan and shorts, and she looked slightly more serious than usual, fully understanding that she wouldn't have her trusty first mate at her back for this adventure made her a little uneasy. I know, Nami's in charge of the snails, she said, because she knows she forgets things like this, but the orange-haired girl won't. Then she pivoted slightly to the other man and said, Kine, I'm trusting you with my Nakama. Make sure the plans go smoothly, and take care of Momo. Kinemon bowed deeply. You have my word, Luffy Heim. We will be waiting for your and Sanji-san's arrival. This wild girl had done the impossible. She'd given him hope. When he'd seen her determination, her ferocity, the depths of Nika's powers, he'd truly believed that defeating the monstrous Kaido was possible. Luffy clapped her hands together, a beaming smile on her face. Zoro's heart twisted itself into a familiar knot. Great, thanks, we'll be there before you know it. Kinemon nodded and hurried off to speak with Popo and Law. Zoro looked his captain up and down. He'd been with her the longest, her first crewmate. He could read her better than almost anyone. Luffy couldn't shake of that little bit of concern she felt for them as the crew separated. It was because of Kuma and how he'd forcefully split them up 2 years ago. Luffy had forgiven him for it now, knew he had done it to make them ready for the new world on Dragon's orders, and he had protected the Sunny in their absence. But for a girl whose greatest fear was being alone, the separation had been traumatic. It had never shaken her confidence in them, only in herself and what might happen if she wasn't there to protect them. Zoro had been sorely tempted to take Kuma apart and turn him into a stereo system when he realized this. You're worrying too much, he told her. I'm not worried. Sure, Zoro rolled his eyes before putting a hand on her slender shoulder. Robin will make sure none of us are conspicuous. We'll be discreetly connecting with any Kazuki loyalists and getting the lay of the land. The beast pirates won't think anything of it. Luffy dropped her arms to her sides. I know, she said. Traffy told me a couple of times. Zoro took in a breath so he could say something he didn't want to. Well, try to listen to him as much as you can in Tottland, please, he asked. Law was an adept strategist. He can admit that, even if it felt like nudging her closer to him. Big Mom won't be like anyone we've fought before. She has the same level of power as Whitebeard. You remember what he could do, don't you? Of course I do, Luffy said, sounding a little offended. Uncle Ed is so cool. Zoro almost wished he could have been a fly on the wall the first time Luffy had no doubt casually called the strongest man in the world that mid-conversation. Just don't let you guard down, Zoro said, knowing that asking her to be careful was pointless. Luffy smiled and bobbled her head. I won't. She stepped closer and peered at his face, her brow furrowing. Are you worried, Zoro? Worried, me? He scoffed, trying to sound insulted. Luffy giggled in response, her eyes sparkling like she'd just heard an inside joke. His heart skipped a beat when she shot forward and hugged him tightly, looping her arms around him. Her slid one arm around her waist. Inhaling her scent, he didn't know how long they would be apart. 2 years had been agonizing. When he'd returned, he'd sworn that nothing would ever make him leave her side again. The hunger snarling in his stomach was torture. He'd gone without eating for periods of time between bounties, but never for this long. Zoro silently cursed that spoiled bastard's cowardice and threatening the little girl and her mother. His head throbbed painfully and his throat was on fire. The heat of the sun beat down on him with unforgiving intensity. The last time he'd had any comfort was a night or so ago. The girl's mother had made a habit of creeping into the yard under the cover of darkness and bringing water cans from him to drink from. She was grateful for his sacrifice and lamented that this was all that she could do for him in return. He'd snorted and told her not to lose sleep. He met this challenge with sheer stubbornness. The brat was going to have to do worse than this if he wanted to kill him. His promise to Kuina was all the food he needed. He dozed off a lot. That morning he was roused from a half-sleep by a ladder clacking against the stone wall. Bemusedly he half lifted his head to see Rika making her way into the yard. A boy was yelling at her to come back, only to utter a full shriek of alarm when a red figure easily vaulted the wall and followed after Rika. Hey, a cheerful girl's voice rung gently in his ears like a church bell. Is that food for him? Huh. Rika glanced up at her. Yeah, I made it myself. Big brother got in trouble for helping me. Oh, the girl hummed. Kobe says there's a sign saying nobody's allowed in the yard. How about I go bring the rice balls to him? Since I'm a pirate, I'm already in trouble, and you won't have to be. Oh, you would. Thank you, One-san. Thank goodness, the boy gasped. Come here, girl, I'll pull you back up. Footsteps come towards him as the silly girl was hauled out of the yard and out of danger, and Zoro permitted himself to look up. His breath caught in his throat. The girl in the straw hat smiled brightly at him, her hazel eyes amused and curious. She's dressed in boy's clothes, a red vest and short blue shorts. She's long-limbed and muscular and perfectly formed from her toes to the feathery black hair that framed her heart-shaped face. There's a scar under her eye that stretched a little with her smile, a sign that she was a fighter, that she was fearless. Zoro had never felt anything towards a woman before. His goal consumed his whole being. Yet the only word his stunned mind could cobble together was beautiful. He'd never seen anything so beautiful in his life. Irura no Zoro, the girl asked him, a little giggle spilling from her lips. Shishishi, I didn't think I'd find you all tied up like this. You're a scary demon, aren't you? Zoro rested his face in her hair. He wanted to go with her so badly, but he can't. They can't afford to forget about Kaido, and Law and Kinnaman's plan didn't have much room for error. That cook better not give you any trouble when you get there, he muttered, remembering Robin and CP9. Shishishi, Luffy giggled into his neck. Silly Zoro. You worry too much. You don't worry enough, Zoro groused, before releasing her and making himself take a step back. If he doesn't do it now, he wouldn't be able to. I'll see you in Wano. Luffy looked like she wanted to go for another hug. See you, Zoro. Luffy hated not having Sanji on the sunny. Hated it, hated it, hated it. It's not that Nami is a bad cook. Far from it. She's the only one keeping them alive when Luffy's own attempts at cooking had been not quite passable. Peckham's was with them, but he couldn't cook either, and Nami's food was really nice, but it wasn't the same. Luffy would sneak into the kitchen in the middle of the night for a snack, and she'd be halfway into a bowl of fruit before she remembered that Sanji wasn't going to come in to scold her. The realization made her wilt a little. She kept looking for her cook at odd hours, even though she knew he wasn't present. It stung, and she could tell she wasn't the only one. Nami kept glancing at the stairway like she expected him to climb up them any moment, her drink in hand and over-the-top compliment on his lips. Luffy had wandered over to her and flopped down in the chair next to her, so they could mutually sulk over his absence until Brook played a jaunty tune to cheer them up. The absence gnawed away at the back of Luffy's mind. It reminded her of when Vivi had chosen to stay behind with her people. She'd expected it, but having to leave her behind really sucked. Except this feeling was even stronger, impossible to set aside for long, and she knew she'd never feel right on the sunny unless Sanji came back. He wouldn't leave, would he? If he really wanted to marry Miss Pudding. A funny, angry squeezing feeling filled Luffy's chest when she unwillingly pondered the possibility. It really hurt. Why did it hurt so much? Sanji wouldn't leave. He wouldn't. She resolutely rejected the idea and tried to think about other things. I wonder what Sanji's family is like. Luffy pondered, casting her fishing line back into the water. It had been several days since they left Zoo for Tottland, and they were running somewhat low on food. Hekams was handling navigation since he was the one who knew the way, and Nami was handling cooking. Brook was playing a light tune. Looking up at the clear blue sky, the mercurial weather of the New World was giving them a break for now. Aside from the heat, it's scorching, and if Law hadn't insisted on packing all the extra food, they'd be suffering even worse right now. Luffy reminded herself to give him a big hug as soon as she managed to fish up something. He mentioned he was born in the North Blue a long time ago. Chopper remembered, but he didn't say anything else. You're right, Luffy realized, recalling the time they spent with Cricket on Jaya. He grew up with Old Man Zeph, but he never talked about anything before that. Did he get in a fight with them before he went to the East Blue? Chopper shook his head, looking up at her. Maybe. Her doctor looked out at the water, troubled. If he didn't mention them even once. I mean, you were happy to talk about your grandpa, even though you were always fighting with him about not wanting to be a Marine. Luffy blinked rapidly. Grandpa loves me, and I love him. He's just a stubborn old man, she said in confusion. Chopper nodded. Exactly. Even though you argue with him, there's so much love between you. If they were good to Sanji, wouldn't he have said something about them? If Germa really is some kind of evil empire, Sanji might not have liked them at all. The little reindeer grimaced, staring worriedly at the water. He couldn't help but remember how his herd had rejected him all those years ago, leaving him behind and chasing him away when he tried to follow them. I hope he's okay right now. Luffy twitched, her mind unwillingly settling on the idea. Her memories of Goa and the nobles she'd met there reared their ugly heads. How Sabo had hated his noble parents, how they crushed his spirit and treated him like a commodity meant to bring them more wealth and status, sent pirates to tear him away from her and Ace. Sanji's family was royalty, unless his father was like Vivi's. He'd better be, she muttered lowly, her fingers tightening like a vice around her fishing line. Rage pulsed through her. I won't let them hurt him. Brook wound his song to a close and glanced sideways at Law. The deadly doctor was sitting in one of the lawn chairs under the shade of Nami's tangerine trees, his head in a newspaper. Pedro and Carrot were both not so subtly trying to read over his shoulder in hopes of distracting themselves from the heat. Trafalgar San, the skeleton inquired, you grew up in the North Blue. Have you ever encountered Germa 66? Not in person, Law said with manufactured casualness, his eyes laser-focused on the Sora, warrior of the sea strips he'd located from the Sunny stores. The strips involved Sora's clashes with the seductive and eerie Poison Pink, who's threatened to poison an entire island if they didn't surrender to her father. The comics depicted her as the most competent of the Rangers and the most dangerous to Sora, who was unwillingly attracted to her and admired her relative morals compared to her vicious brothers. In this strip, the poison Pink was using was time delayed, giving Sora the room he needed to synthesize an antidote in time to rescue the civilians. While her brothers threw an angry fit, Pink just laughed and praised Sora's resourcefulness. She was Law's favorite character in the comics after Sora himself, and she's the cook's sister. He's going to meet her, in person, relatively soon. Excitement bubbles furiously in his chest. Law swallowed hard and noted that everyone was looking his way now. I did hear plenty about them, though. It's unavoidable. They're an army of mercenaries and conquerors. They've ended civil wars over the course of a single night, and they have precious little in the way of scruples. They're sufficiently prominent enough that they're a favorite go-to villain for the Marine comics. You mean like this one you're reading? Carrot asked innocently. I'm researching, Law said a little too quickly. Luffy glanced his way, hazel eyes wide and curious, and he forces down a hot, flustered feeling. If Sanji is the fifth member of the Vinsmoke family, they won't be keen on releasing him back to us after reclaiming him. Well, that's just too bad. Luffy burst out, indignant and nearly dropping her fishing line. Chopper yelped and saved it with his feet. Sanji is our cook. If he doesn't want to stay with them, he's coming home with us. Naturally, Law responded calmly, turning the page over. I need to know what to expect from them when this turns into a fight. However, while Sora is a fictional hero, all of his exploits are based in part upon the victories of real Marines. It stands to reason that the abilities that Germa demonstrates in the comics are real as well, so I'm refreshing my memory. When? Don't you mean if? Chopper asked nervously. Law gave his fellow doctor a very deadpan look. Honestly, that kind of question is that. The little Zoan should be used to the new world by now. Germa is a bastion of science. Their king, Vinsmoke Judge, used to be a research partner of Vegapunk's. That name again. Nami mumbled, wiping sweat from her forehead. Frankie had spent 2 years on his home islands, and Caesar Clown had whined enough about the mysterious doctor for them to get an idea of what he was capable of. God, if he's anything like Caesar Clown. I doubt it, Law responded dryly. Running a country, even a nomadic one that solely exists on the back of ships, requires a degree of competence. So Sanji's family has a comic book about them. Of course, that's all that Luffy got out of his debriefing. Is it any good? Law dropped the paper in his lap with a snap. Good, he demanded, indignant. It's only the best, the most popular and well-written serialization to come out of the North Blue. What could you name that's better than Sora, Warrior of the Sea? There's a second of stunned silence at his outburst, which allows Law's mind to catch up with his mouth. Most of her crew is staring at him in blank-faced shock, because they associated a lot of words with him, but Fanboy was definitely not one of them. Luffy pivoted toward him, her eyes brightening. "Oh, you're a big fan, Traffy," she said, excited to discover this new thing about him. "And it's just what I've heard," Law deflected, badly. When Carrot started to giggle, he shot her a warning glare. "You are," Luffy beamed, "because she's a demon, not a goddess. Hey, can I read them? Which part do you like the best? I can start there." "You read?" Nami asked blankly. Luffy jerked backward and gave her navigator an injured look. "Hey, I like books and stuff. Ben gave me good ones when I was little." Instantly her sparkling eyes were back on Law. "Please, Traffy, please. Later, focus on fishing. Will you?" Law retorted. His cheeks were burning now, a thump echoing in his ears at the thought of the Ravenet girl cuddled up to his side, reading the comics he'd enjoyed for years with him. The thought is so intoxicating he didn't dare give her anything resembling a straight answer in public. Luffy was about to pout and press him further when she was nearly yanked clear off the sunny and into the boiling sea below. She yelped and grabbed onto the railing, her fishing line pulling her toward the fish she'd unwittingly hitched. "Luffy," Chopper yelped, immediately switching into heavy point and grabbing her around the waist. "Hang on, you've hooked something." "Whoa, it's a really big one," Luffy yelped, frantically trying to reel in the catch. Pedro and Carrot bolted over to her to help Chopper keep her on the sunny. "Nami, I got lunch. Don't fall into the water," Nami yelled in concern. Law vaulted out of his chair and they both head over to the railing. Fortunately for their nerves, the Minks and Zoan have a firm hold on Luffy, and together they haul aboard a gigantic fish with a glistening, solid-colored skin. "Woohoo!" Luffy cheered, tossing her line aside and running in a circle around the fish. "Look at the size of it. It was perfect for a single dinner. I'm impressed that fish could survive in water like this," Pedro remarked, one hand on his sword as he eagerly takes their catch in. Law heaved in a deep breath. "Of course you'd catch one with poisonous skin," he said dryly, having almost instantly recognized the fish. One of the first things he'd done after finding himself on his own was memorizing what kinds of fish and land beasts that were safe to eat. How many times had he needed to upbraid Shachai and Penguin when they fished up something dangerous for dinner? "Hey, you say something, Traffy?" Luffy asked cluelessly, already peeling off some of the skin and happily chowing down on it. "Poison," Nami and Chopper roared in concert, naturally a few seconds too late to maybe stop her. Law sputtered a flood of angry imprecations and immediately shambled Luffy into his arms. The Ravenet yipped to suddenly find herself horizontal and looking up at those livid, exasperated golden eyes as she's laid out on the grass. "Traffy," she started in confusion, her doe-like hazel eyes widening. Her cheeks warmed up a little stuttered breath escaping her at the position she was relative to him. "You promised you were going to listen to me," Law dragged out, pinning her with a look. The familiar blue sphere formed around him and her, and he pushed her down by the shoulder when she tried to sit up. "That fish has poisonous skin. Only the meat is safe for consumption after grilling." He reached into his coat for his tools. Luffy blinked rapidly at him. "Oh," she says, before attempting to reassure him, "It's okay, Traffy. Poison has no effect on me. Warden Guy saw to that." Law's gold eyes burned hotly into her in response. He scolded her constantly, but this time Luffy felt a little abashed. Something about that exasperated expression felt different from before. "You don't have an immunity to poison, you have a built-up tolerance, and you are not going to tempt fate over a goddamn lunch. Now hold still." Luffy nodded obediently, looking up at the sky as Law opened her chest and stomach, then went about extracting the poison from her. Nami's cheeks turned a faint green color at the sight and she turned around quickly, babbling at Pedro to help her start cutting up the fish and disposing of the poisonous skin. Chopper hurried over and knelt down at her side, observing Law as he worked. Luffy did her best to relax. It didn't hurt. Nothing in Traffy's room ever hurt, but it did feel a little funny. "Ridiculous, absurd girl. Giving me so many migraines," Law muttered under his breath as he worked, removing any trace of the poison briskly. Thankfully it hadn't had any time to start spreading, so it wasn't a difficult fix. "So troublesome. Hee. Luffy giggled softly, her heart squeezing at the familiar-sounding words. "Sorry, Traffy. You always say that, but are you really sorry?" Law groused, closing up her stomach. Oh, was he really mad at her? No, that had to be fixed quickly. Luffy reached up and pressed one hand against his cheek, causing him to briefly freeze mid-movement. "Yeah," she responded honestly, worrying with her bottom lip. "Course I do." Her thumb brushed against his cheekbone. Law stared wide-eyed at her for a second, before Chopper's concerned noise reminded him that he was technically still mid-operation. Grabbing her hand in his own, he brought it down and rested it on his knee so he could finish closing her up. "All right," he mumbles, dismissing the room once he's finished. His skin is burning where her fingers brushed against it. Boldness struck him. Law took her by the arm and pulled her to her feet. "Come with me," he said briskly. You're staying where I can see you until the fish is done. Carrot and Chopper were already disposing of the skin, but he didn't trust that meat until Nami had thoroughly grilled it, and he knew from traveling with her that Luffy wasn't above stealing food straight out of the cooking pot to taste test. Why you? Luffy pouted. I'm going to pretend you didn't just ask me that. Law responded flatly. You wanted to read Sora, didn't you? She perked up. You'll let me have the comics. I'm going to get you started on the series, Law said, pulling her inside one of the Sunny's rooms where it was marginally cooler and teleporting the relevant newspapers into his free hand. And for that I need to explain the plot. Peckham's watched Law disappear with an excited Luffy and pinched the bridge of his nose. How was the Sun Goddess oblivious to her fellow captain's desire for her? How? This was legendary levels of density. Sora being oblivious to Poison Pink's advances didn't compare. This is going to be a disaster. So that's Sanji's big sis. Luffy murmured, odd. She was wholly absorbed in the comic strip, hazel eyes wide with enthusiasm. Poison Pink was winking mischievously at the reader, having escaped Sora to trouble the world another day. This comic was amazing. Law had given her the papers and explained the plot of the long-running serial with that special brand of low-key enthusiasm that makes him look surprisingly cute. So many story beats, but they were so crazy and exciting that Luffy had no trouble remembering most of them. Especially when he was halfway through the Waterfall Island arc and Luffy realized why it sounded so familiar. It had been based off of one of Zephyr Gigi's missions. He'd been so surprised when she told him that, stars in her eyes. Luffy wanted to read all of it, begged Traffy to give her access to his stockpile of the comics. He'd refused to look at her and warned her that she wasn't allowed to read them without supervision, but his voice was really happy, she could tell. Most likely, Traffy said in response to her question. Bear in mind that her personality might be quite different from the comic books. The writers apply a good degree of artistic license. Artist likes, Luffy asked in confusion. Law sighed, rolling his eyes. It means that the writer doesn't directly copy what happened in real life into their work, often changing things to be more dramatic and exciting for the reader. He explained with as much patience as he could muster. The comic is published by affiliates of the world government, after all. Albeit affiliated in the loosest sense, the government kept a watchful eye on what was published in waters under their control. Luffy uttered a noise of understanding. She pressed into his side, peering hopefully at the pictures of the feared Germa soldiers. Law was really warm, even though he'd reluctantly taken off his long coat and then his shirt as the heat intensified. Leaning against him infused her with a pleasant feeling, like sitting in front of the fire in a late autumn evening sharing stories with Ace and Sabo. It was so nice. I hope Pink is a little like this, she confides in Law. I don't like the others. They remind me of Mingo. Pink's three brothers, not counting the mysterious Stealth Black, shared none of the redeeming qualities she possessed. It might be linked to a general attitude that women were inherently more empathetic and noble than men. But those three were viciously insufferable, arrogant, spiteful, and completely without scruples. Law tensed a little at the comparison. It was one he'd made himself over the years in the privacy of his mind. But still, when have we ever been that lucky? He wondered. I'm very lucky, Luffy responded, looking up and blinking at him. I have Ace and Sabo in my crew and you too. Law coughed to cover a pleased noise, his heart flipping over. Hey, do you have a favorite part, Traffy? Favorite? Law repeated, trying very hard to sound aloof even though he'd already exposed himself as a giant nerd. I'm not a child. But since you're asking me, I suppose I prefer the arcs where Poison Pink is prominent. Shachai and Penguin always said ridiculous things about crushes whenever they caught him reading her passages. It wasn't his fault she was the most interesting and multifaceted antagonist in the series aside from Tyson the Revolutionary. The rest of them were just varying degrees of cackling. Two-dimensional evil only interesting for the challenges that they provided Sora or the humor they displayed. Shishishi, I like her too, Luffy cheered, delighted. A sharp knock on the door interrupted the moment, however. Boy, lovebirds, Nami called teasingly. Luffy yipped as Law immediately shot to his feet, causing her to topple over. She propped herself up on one arm and pouted up at him. Lunch is ready. Lunch, Luffy cheered, getting up herself and bolting. Nami, knowing her too well at this point, expertly opened the door in time for her to rush through the opening instead of smashing through the wood. Law followed along sedately, his hands in his pockets. He tried not to look too annoyed. The table was set out under the shade of a tangerine tree, the enticing smell of the food filling the humid air. Luffy cheerfully flung herself into the nearest unoccupied chair and started chowing down on the meal. Once again, Nami had applied herself to one of Sanji's recipes with great success. Law had to admit it was well made when he tried it himself. So do we have a plan about how you're going to go on dates with Katakuri? Nami asked uneasily about halfway into the meal. We don't know anything about this guy. Don't worry about me, Luffy responded easily between bites. I'll take care of it. Nami stared blandly at her captain. Shouldn't you at least have a chaperone or something? She prodded. I don't like the idea of you being alone and surrounded by the Big Mom crew. Luffy wrinkled her nose. I don't want somebody spying on us during dates. That would be weird and annoying. Plus, won't it make them suspicious? Wow, that sounds almost sensible, Chopper said, a little impressed. What's that supposed to mean? Luffy protested. The meal only lasted about 10 more minutes before the transponder snail started wringing its shell off of its back. Brook looked at the little creature in confusion. That's odd. The others can't have arrived at Wano already, could they? He asked in confusion. No, Law said, eyes narrowing. They need to travel 2 more days. I know that sound, Peckham said, getting all eyes on him as he stood up. It's an alert, informing the tarts that we're nearby so we won't get fired upon. Mama must have sent an escort after I informed her you were coming. Luffy's expression became carefully blank as she got up and walked over to the railing. Law grabbed his shirt off the back of his chair and put it on, not wanting to look vulnerable. Pedro tensed up and stood carefully behind Luffy, ready to defend her a moment's notice. Nami nervously fingered her climate act before firmly taking up a stoic look, putting Carrot behind her and joining her captain at the railing. Peckhams hopped up onto the railing, expecting to see one of the familiar tart ships cutting through the boiling waves towards them. Instead, out of the mist comes a massive transponder snail ship, its castle tower looming large over the thousand sunny. Luffy's lips parted in surprise as the ship chugged towards them. She'd never seen a ship of that shape before, and it's a perfect mirror of the ones she'd seen in Sora. This was a Germa ship, then. Sanji, she wondered hopefully, leaning on the railing and searching for any sign of blonde hair. Germa, Peckhams breathed out. Why them and not one of Big Mom's children? An uneasy feeling pulled in the mink's gut, growing stronger still since he'd decided to help the Straw Hat Girl against the woman he'd sworn to serve. Would Big Mom have sent them to get us? Nami asked, clutching her weapon. This wedding is supposed to make them allies, Law observed, his voice stoic. However, it is rather strange. He holds Kikoku in a loose but steady hold, ready to fight if necessary. They might be traveling on the ship, but I doubt they'd be pleased to do so. Chopper made a nervous sound and forced himself to stand up straight. The Germa ship came to a stop a few yards away from the Sunny, the waves from its hull causing the lion-headed vessel to bobble up and down like a cork in water. 2 figures walked up to the edge of the ship's railing. From the angle she's looking up at them, Luffy could just make out colors the pair were wearing, bright green and pink. Hello there. A cheerful-sounding female voice came from the railing. Luffy blinked hard against the sunlight glaring from behind the ship. You must be the Straw Hats. May we come aboard? Who's asking? Luffy yelled back. Vinsmokes, Sanji's big brother and sister. The girl's voice called back. Luffy's heart leapt into his chest. Sanji's family. It was them, not just random goons King Vinsmoke had sent to suck up to them. Sanji, she thought for a moment, then nodded vehemently. Yes, I want to meet you. Come down. There's a light laugh followed by what sounded like a humph. And the 2 figures leapt from the railing, easily crossing the sizable distance between the 2 ships. A strange whirring sound echoes through the air as the twosome fall gracefully down until they alight on the grassy area of the deck. The first was a green-haired boy with a twirly eyebrow just like Sanji's, but his face was strangely blank aside from irritation and an undercurrent of annoyance. He has a headset with the number 66 painted on it, and he's dressed in green aside from his black overcoat. Winch green, Luffy realized, her heart flip-flopping. And Sanji's brother. The young lady is a little taller than the first figure, with a large purple coat designed to resemble butterfly wings and serving as a conduit for her particular abilities. She has the same headphones, and her shirt and pants are a bright pink. Her expression is warmer, curious and thoughtful. Her eyes are blue, just like Sanji's, and she has the twirly eyebrow too. Poison pink. So ... this is Straw Hat Luffy, Winch Green said, his gaze raking up and down Luffy's figure. The raven-haired girl twitched, not liking the feeling it gave her. After a few seconds, his eyes turned into hearts and popped right out of his head. Cute. Cutie, so cute. This is who that failure's been hanging out with. His legs turned into a familiar whirlwind and he moves from side to side. The world is fucked up. A goddess deserves far better than him. What failure? Luffy asked, her eyebrows tabling. Something about the structure of that sentence bothered her. What failure could he be talking about? Poison Pink sighed deeply. Please ignore Yanji. He has very little inside his skull, she said with tired dryness. It's nice to meet you, Monkey D. Luffy. Sanji spoke of you when he first arrived, so I've been looking forward to this. My name is Vinsmoke Ryuju. My brother and I have come to escort you the rest of the way to Tottland. She offered Luffy her hand. The Ravenet smiled and took it. You're Sanji's big sis, she realized. You've got the same twirly brow. Ryuju can't help but giggle. What a disarming girl. That smile just made me relax a little. It's a family trait, she said. She looked between those standing behind Luffy and blinks when she spots Law. I don't recognize some of these faces. Where are the rest of your crewmates? Law frowned. Surely she'd seen his wanted poster and knew he wasn't a Straw Hat. Why wasn't she questioning his presence? It was deliberate. He could tell by the way her eyes flashed with thought before abruptly becoming unreadable. That was a very practiced action. one that characterized someone who couldn't afford to speak what was on their mind. What are you thinking, Poison Pink? I needed them to run an errand, Luffy responded, dutifully repeating the line Nami had drilled into her. She shrugged as if to say, what can you do? It was too important to be left hanging, with the Marines stirred up after Dressrosa. We won't be split up for long. Yanji continued to do his love hurricane thing, and while Ryuju arched an eyebrow at that, she seemed to accept it. The Marines will be desperate for good publicity after having to publicly apologize and grovel like that, she observed, especially since you were involved. Again, Luffy snickered. Yeah, they don't like me very much, do they? She asked carelessly. Then she turned to the ship and stood on her toes, looking for any sign of a notable figure. Did Cat come with you? Cat? Ryuju repeated, puzzled. Nami groaned. That's what she's been calling Charlotte Katakuri. She'd tried to stop her, she really had, but it was useless as usual. No. Though he had expressed interest in accompanying us, something came up, Ryuju said. She remembered the faintly aggravated look in Katakuri's eye when he'd been pulled away from her by one of his brothers, who insisted that Big Mom's summons couldn't wait. His mother wanted to discuss some things with him, I believe. Luffy pouted. She wanted to meet this guy already. Cute, Ryuju couldn't help but think. If it helps, I'm here to take you to him, and Sanji. He'll be quite glad to see you, I think. Privately, she hoped that seeing his captain again would restore her little brother's spirits, and that they had a plan to wiggle their way out of Big Mom's attempt to snare the Sun Goddess and trap her in her clutches. Please, I can't save my brother ... not without your help. Sun Goddess, you're the only one who could do it. Maybe even I. No, it's far, far too late for me. That little ray of hope was torture. Why couldn't she make it go away? Luffy nodded, all but vibrating at the thought of being reunited with Sanji, and soon. Good, let's go to Tottland. Katakuri almost wished he could drop his calm, collected demeanor enough that he could pace without being looked at sideways. He stood at the docks where the foot soldiers were preparing for the arrival of the Thousand Sunny and their escort, ignoring any attempts at conversation and the annoying catcalling from his older siblings whenever they passed by. He'd managed to escape from his mother a few hours ago, cursing the fact that she'd only now deigned to tell him about her plans for the Vinsmokes, and right before his would-be fiancé arrived as well. A plan he had a few misgivings about, at that. Kill them all. The Vinsmokes, Katakuri repeated, admirably managing to keep his voice at dull surprise instead of strangled disbelief or worse, complete incredulity. He looked up at his mother, ignoring the tea and snacks on his plate, tempting him. Mother, I can hear you thinking, Katakuri. Big Mom waved flippantly before seizing another pastry. The muffin screamed and quailed in fear the entire way into her mouth before death cut it off. Vinsmoke Sanji will be tranquilized and spared from the slaughter. That should keep your little fiancé happy. Which, it might, but Katakuri suspected that would depend entirely on what sort of relationship the fourth prince had with his birth family. He'd watched the entirety of the execution broadcast. Mama had insisted on it, staring burning holes in their transponder snail from the instant the 2nd Division commander had been named Roger's blood son. He'd seen Straw Hat vault across a not insignificant distance in an instant to put herself between Crocodile and Whitebeard when the former warlord went to attack him. Her reasoning for interfering with a man who would not underestimate her a second time. Porcas liked him, so she would defend an old man she'd never met and owed nothing to with her life. Newgate hadn't been in any real danger, but the principle of the matter had been enough for her. If Vinsmoke felt anything for his estranged family, he'd only have to say the word and Katakuri would bet she'd take the same tact here. Damn the fact she was in the dead center of Tottland and defying Charlotte Linlin herself. But he also knew that this observation wouldn't sway his mother in the slightest, so he kept it to himself. Instead he asked, I'm curious as to why you feel the exertion is necessary. The Germa Kingdom will be giving you access to their technology through the marriage, will they not? Big Mom's smirk collapsed into an ugly snarl, her brow pulled tightly in offense. That little man presumes to use me to get his pretty crown back, she said darkly. Her hand clenches the arm of her chair until it cracked, whining under the strain. Why do you think he's here, Katakuri? That he shares my vision? That he wishes to create the world of equality and harmony? No, he wants to use my forces and my children to make himself another petty tyrant. Katakuri leaned back subtly. He could feel the pressure of the room increase as his mother's haki began leaking out. No, Big Mom said, exhaling in aggravation before retreating into a calm facade. I will take what I want from his labs and destroy the excess baggage. For that, I will need you to perform as ever, Katakuri. He nodded, doing his level best to dismiss his misgivings. He had plenty of experience with that. As you wish, Mother. Your fiancé will be here soon, Big Mom said, before an aggravated look crossed her face. You will need to convince her that marrying you is what she desires most. I'm sorry, Katakuri asked, caught off guard. Had he heard that correctly? His mother ignored him, muttering to herself. That brat is lucky that she's the rarest creature on the oceans, a goddess made flesh. How dare she show me that kind of cheek after the trouble she's given me, when I'm offering her one of my sons and a place in my family, dates and romancing. Puh, she'll agree to this one way or another, but I'll need to get a few doses of that. Mother, Big Mom's eyes snapped over to her strongest child, who admirably didn't flinch under her infuriated expression. The girl seeks to be pursued by you, she said, her voice slow and heavy like she was speaking to a child. I have granted her 2 weeks to be convinced before the marriage. You will woo her in that time frame and you will ensure she will have no other man. Katakuri opened his mouth to say something, thought the better of it at the last second, closed it and nodded in perfect obedience. The sweet commander stared blandly out at the ocean waters, wondering not for the first time what cosmic joke was being made at his expense. His mother had been a little erratic ever since Nika appeared 2 years ago, and this was the result. She would have him woo Monkey D. Luffy. How? With his face. Katakuri was a soldier, and kept everyone outside of his family at a clear remove. This was one of the few areas that he not only didn't excel at, but had no experience in whatsoever. Wasn't this why Pudding had been selected as Vinsmokes' bride? She was young, beautiful, brilliant, and ruthless. Katakuri was out of his element here and he knew it. He could hardly look at his mother's many relationships for support. You couldn't call those flings marriages. He'd never been approached by women or men with anything but slavishly devoted servants, screaming fans, or both. There was a critical difference between romantic and familial love, and the latter served as the only significant relationships he had. Yet he must romance a young wild woman and convince this goddess, who adored freedom and gladly fought the world for it, to bind herself to him and his mother. Him, a beast who deliberately constructed the facade of an unbreakable monster. No. His only hope for any chance at succeeding, or decent advice, would be speaking with Praline or Chiffon, otherwise he was a ship without a rudder headed straight for the calm belt. Katakuri breathed in deeply, silently commanding himself to get a grip. When he managed to clear the noise from his head, he closed his eyes for a moment and focused his observation hacky, looking into the future. Monkey D. Luffy stood at the top of the cake, wearing a stunning dress that turned her from a scruffy pirate into a sensual goddess. He stood in front of her, to the right of Vinsmoke and Pudding, and his heart was twisting up in a tortured knot. The desire to not be here, to not be doing this, thrummed alongside his pulse, bitter reluctance tasting like ashes in his mouth. And Pudding's hands were shaking, visibly shaking, like the world had been yanked out from under her, and she couldn't hold on to the gun Mother had given her. I do. Do you mean it? Luffy asked, cutting off the priest who had never once in his life been interrupted, leaving him gawking at her, stuttering as he tried to derail the ceremony. Are you sure? Her gaze isn't mocking or accusatory. She tilted her head to the side, her eyes, almost entreating, demanding the truth from him instead of the words his mother had given him. And, I don't want to take your freedom from you, Luffy said earnestly, tilting her chin up and smiling at him. Do you really want to marry me? The sound of the whistle brought Katakuri out of the vision with a start. His heart jolted violently in his chest, his mind rushing over the scene as he tried to make sense out of it. The further ahead he saw something, the less information he had to go off of, and that. What was that? What was that strange scene? She must have discovered his mother's plans. But if she had, why wasn't she furious as she had been that day in Marineford? And how had she learned of it? And freedom. Freedom from what? He was a sweet commander of Emperor Charlotte Linlin, one of the few pirates who could go and do whatever he pleased even if he were to act on the darkest and bloodiest desires of sapient kind. In what way was he not free? He was a Charlotte. He would never be free of that. Katakuri's head throbbed, and it was a moment before he focused on the approaching Germa warship sailing side and side with the familiar figure of the Thousand Sunny. His breath came out in a deep, husky growl. Around him the dock preparations pick up in intensity, excited babbling echoing from all the foot soldiers and passing civilians. So she is coming. I hadn't been sure she would. A goddess is coming to Tottland. Oh, I hope this city looks good. What will her crew want for accommodations? Do we have everything I put on that list? Oh, I can't believe General Katakuri is finally getting married. I'm so jealous of her. Katakuri waited patiently as the two ships came in, wondering for the first time if perhaps he should have relented and allowed at least a few of his siblings to accompany him as a welcoming party. Flamp's behavior after the original announcement, throwing knives at Luffy's wanted poster, apparently among other things, had him decide to go alone. He couldn't figure out why exactly his younger sisters, she wasn't the only one, had taken it so personally. Their possessiveness of him was familiar, but this wasn't. As the Sunny came into dock, a semi-familiar raven-haired figure ran up to the railing of the ship and leaned over it. When her eyes landed on him, she beamed and launched herself from the deck down to the wooden dock and trotted up to him, her hand adjusting her worn straw hat. Monkey D. Luffy came up to about an arm's length away from him and peered curiously up at him. Are you cat? She asked brightly, casually. Her hazel eyes are surprisingly doe-like, Katakuri noted. The boy's clothes she's wearing aren't particularly flattering. Yet it can't the fact that she's beautiful in a sweet and soft sort of way. She's slender and strangely small-seeming, standing in front of him. It's a startlingly disarming first impression, almost jarring against the powerful figure he remembered from the visual den 2 years ago. Cat, he repeated flatly, confused. MMMHMM. Luffy nodded energetically. He's the guy Big Mom would like me to marry. She looked around. He'd at least come to welcome me here, wouldn't he? Cat, was ... that supposed to be a nickname? A pet name? My name is Katakuri, he said after a confused second. Luffy refocused on him instantly, and she brightened. Oh, it is you. Well, she looked up at him, a little awe in her eyes. You're really tall. Her legs stretched lightly, raising her up until she's at eye level with him. Shishishishi. Hi, we're finally together in the same place. Katakuri blinked rapidly at her. He didn't like laughter. He solely associated it with mockery, or his mother finding amusement in something warped or disturbing. And yet, Luffy's carefree laugh washes over him like a gentle wave lapping against the beach. So we are, he said in a neutral tone. The Thousand Sunnies plank dropped, admitting the girl's navigator, pet, musician, and a pair of minks. Nice to meet you, Luffy said, snapping back to her normal height. Hey, can you tell me why Big Mom was the one who wrote the proposal instead of you? What? Katakuri uttered, blindsided. Luffy tilted her head. You didn't write it yourself, she said. You didn't even write me a poem or something nice like that. That? Well, of course he didn't. He wouldn't know where to start. He hasn't written any poetry in his life. Why? I have little talent in writing, I'm afraid. Katakuri responded, refusing to show her how off guard he is. I'm a warrior, not a scholar. I had hoped my mother would speak for me. I apologize if it lacked romanticism. Luffy peered up at his face, studying him intently. Then she seemed to accept this and nodded her head. She did, and thanks. It was kinda dry, she said, blissfully oblivious to the fact that giving her a loving husband was not a concern of Linlin. Though I don't know if I wanted to get married yet. Gramps always said that I couldn't marry a man I just met. I had to know them well. She was serious. Davy Jones below, she was serious. She really had told his mother that she'd reject the marriage if he couldn't make her fall in love with him. Then waltzed right into Tottland without any concern for a trap being laid for her. She was mad as Gall D. Roger. So Kat, Luffy said before Katakuri could say something very dry. I was hoping we could go on some dates. She clapped her hands together. I was thinking about going out for lunch, some nice long walks, or maybe seeing a play. I have no objections to that, Katakuri managed after a second of stunned silence. Luffy relaxed, looking pleased. That's great. She turned around and cheerfully waved at her crew, who were warily approaching with the 2 Vinsmokes at her heels. Winch Green was glaring daggers at him, which made Katakuri arch an eyebrow. The prince opened his mouth to say something, only for his sister to ram her elbow into his side and smile apologetically at him. Hey guys, come and say hello. This is Kat, Luffy yelled, not noticing the interaction. Katakuri, the man corrected her, wondering if his name was really that hard for her to pronounce. Cat Burglar Nami, Soul King Brook, and Cotton Candy Lover Tony Chopper, correct. The reindeer zone flailed, visibly aggravated. Those stupid Marines. He met Katakuri's eyes with surprising boldness and said, yes, that's us, but I'm not the crew pet. I'm the doctor. It was a sign of how offended the pet designation made him that Chopper was able to yell at a man he was, understandably, somewhat terrified of. Doctor, then. Katakuri corrected himself without breaking stride. Mother welcomes you to Tottland. The foot soldiers will show you to your accommodations for the duration of your stay. Identify any luggage you wish to bring with you. Mother will greet you personally tomorrow. Nami blanched and immediately plastered a pleasant, grateful smile on her face. Luffy looked about and murmured, hey, where's? Only to be stopped when Nami stepped on her foot. Marvelous. I was going to have trouble carrying my wardrobe chests without those 2 lummoxes to act as my mules, she said cheerfully. Are these the soldiers? She waved at the dock hands. Katakuri nodded fractionally. Nami immediately turned and began barking orders, giving clear instructions about what they could or could not touch and what doors they weren't to open. The men quailed under her light-hearted malice and hastened to obey her. He turned his attention back to Luffy, whose smile has vanished as she looked around. Is something the matter? He asked. Luffy looked up at him and put her hands on her hips. Where's Sanji? She demanded. Where's my cook? One of your minions kidnapped him at gunpoint. I'm still mad about that. I want to see him. He better not be hurt. Of course. Silently Katakuri cursed Bajef for leaving him to deal with the results of acquiring the blonde, and vowed to make life unpleasant for him in the near future. Vinsmokes Sanji is present and unharmed, he said. And because something about the frown on her face was bothering him, he continued, unless I miss my guess. He's currently with his father in the Germa castle. If Princess Ryuju would escort us there, you can see him immediately. Ryuju nodded, an odd look in her eye. Katakuri reminded himself to search for her in the future later. Of course, she said lightly, a friendly mask upon her face at once. Come right this way. Luffy relaxed, relieved, though she didn't smile again. That bothered feeling intensified a little. The castle was worse than Sanji remembered, somehow. Oh, his father was the same bastard he'd always been, claiming they would have an honorable duel, then cowering behind human shields in his raid suit. Only remembered that Sanji existed when he didn't want to give any of the children he cared about to Big Mom's brood. His brothers were the exact same, somehow having not changed one iota even in the little things, like their mannerisms or their physical tics. It was almost like he'd gone back in time, or maybe gotten trapped in a nightmare. Leaning on the terrace of the castle and looking out over the water, Sanji shivered and clutched his arm. His busies from the so-called duel still hurt, though they would fade soon enough. The black pit of cold despair engulfing him was much worse. He had almost thought that since he'd lived through being under Judge's roof once, he'd be prepared and braced for the grim, bitter reality of living with them again. He'd faced so much worse than that old man since he became a pirate. Whatever he did, he couldn't compare to Kuma separating him from Luffy and his crewmates, of failing. The explosive collars around his wrists glint mockingly in the late afternoon sunlight. What fanciful thinking. It was because he'd found a true family, first with the old geezer, then with his sunshine, that Judge still had the power to hurt him. It was because he knew what love was that this place of misery and exclusion felt like a vice around his soul. Sanji stared numbly at the middle distance. Being outside of the castle helped him avoid his brothers, but he probably shouldn't stay in one place for too long. Ikiji and Yanji were worse when Ryuju wasn't around. Property, that's what Judge thought of him, that he'd procured these manacles from his underground contacts for this purpose. Sanji remembered when they broke into the auction house to save Kami, and seeing the horrible device around her throat, how it had filled him with terrible rage, how he'd wanted to give all of his strength to break the collars off every slave trapped on that foul island. No one in this world is meant to be a slave. Except for him, it seemed. A deep sense of despair rolled over the blonde as he stared down at his wrists, unable to look away from them. The realization, once it had sunk in, was the only thing dominating his mind. The old man was in danger because of him, just because he'd been good to him, had given him a place in his home. What a way for Sanji to repay him for everything. With Judge holding a gun to his head, Sanji breathed out slowly, hoping beyond hope that Germa wasn't targeting any other people, that he hadn't endangered his crewmates' loved ones as well as his own. He would never forgive himself if they got hurt because of him. Sanji. The voice echoed across the open ground and slammed into Sanji like a bullet. His cigarette falling from his lips, the blonde jerked backward and wheeled around to stare, unable to believe what he was seeing, what his eyes were showing him. What? No, how could? Why is she here? Luffy hurtled across the stone ground, leaving Charlotte Katakuri and his sister in her dust as she cleared the distance between them in a second. Sanji instinctively dropped his arms to catch her a second before she crashed into him. Long practice with his captain meant he wasn't thrown off his feet thanks to dropping into a bracing stance. The impact still sent him skidding several feet backward, his heels digging grooves into the stone until he came to a stop. Sanji, I finally caught up with you, Luffy cried in relief, wrapping her arms around him several times. WW, what are you doing here? Sanji demanded in a panic, putting his hands on her shoulders. His heart throbbed violently at this sudden, horrifying shift in his circumstances, not her arrival, but what it meant. She's out here in plain view of both Germa and Big Mom's hulking, powerful son, who looked very much like he'd been escorting her. Images of the Sunny being attacked and captured in his absence fill his mind, and his stomach drops into his feet. Are you hurt? Luffy asked, ignoring him. She pulled back a little, not loosening her hold on him in the slightest, keeping him almost pinned against her. In any other situation, Sanji would be completely melting at being wrapped in her embrace, but the sheer depths of his despair and panic overrode even that impulse. Did Baja hurt you? I'm going to break his face. I'm fine, Sanji retorted, pushing on her shoulders. Why are you here? What happened after I left Zoo? Luffy looked him up and down once, then looked up to meet his gaze. Oh, Big Mom invited me, she responded, the simple statement briefly making Sanji stop breathing in sheer horror. But you're really okay. They haven't been keeping you prisoner. They've been feeding you. Her big hazel eyes stabbed into him, searching for any sign of dishonesty. The blonde's jaw worked helplessly for a few moments before he could get his mental footing back under him. I've been fine. He lied blatantly because holy shit, that was not remotely the thing that matters right now. Son, Captain, you shouldn't be here. What are you doing? Why hadn't she abandoned him? Why risk everything for a failure? Luffy shook her head slightly. Weren't you told? She asked, bemused. Big Mom wants me to marry Cat back there. She briefly retracted one arm in order to wave vaguely back at Charlotte Goddam Katakuri. Sanji's airway closed up completely. Ew, Mary, he repeated, desperately hoping he'd heard her wrong. But the first time he'd had this feeling, he hadn't been that lucky. Sanji was genuinely impressed that Vivi had managed to catch Luffy before she could go running off the Merry before they disembarked from Nanohana. None of them had managed that yet, and they had been traveling with their captain for longer. He's also grateful for it. The deserts of Alabasta, as beautiful and vibrant as they are brutal in their heat. The rest of the crew would need plenty of food and water to travel through it. But with how much his captain ate on a regular basis, Sanji suspected it would be much harder on her. He wouldn't allow it. He had meal and ration plans drawn up before they'd left Drum Island for this eventuality. Of course, his task would be much harder if she went running off into the desert and left them all in her dust. Luffy was rather sulky as Vivi led her down the streets of Nanohana by the hand, refusing to let go and potentially let the Ravenet out of her sight. Despite being the same age, the dynamic was almost like a mother with her overly energetic daughter, or perhaps a responsible older sibling trying to manage her wilder little sister. Sanji adored watching them together, and he so admired that motherly, queenly strength that Vivi had. "Look, we'll go to the restaurant and get some food for you," Vivi said placatingly. "There's one at the end of the road." Luffy perked up a little bit at that. "Oh no," Sanji said, immediately reaching out to try and anchor Vivi before his captain could rush off with her. "Luffy, why?" His hand just missed her sleeve before Luffy cheered excitedly and bolted forward, hauling a shrieking Vivi along in her wake. Sanji cursed his slow reaction time and put on the gas, belatedly wishing he hadn't stuck Chopper and Zoro with the grocery shopping in his rush to act as the girls' bodyguards. He ran as fast as he could down the road after them. Luffy busted through the doors of the restaurant, but cognizant of the fact that she was carrying Vivi, she skidded to a halt a few feet after doing so and carefully placed the princess on her feet rather than blindly barrel right up to the doorway. Though she still ended up slamming into Smoker's back, sending him sprawling across the length of the building. Sanji stumbled through the doorway just in time to see this, and groaned in despair. "Of course," he muttered. "Of course he followed us here." He was about to raise his voice to warn Luffy when someone else cut across him. "Luffy," a deep male voice said, warm with emotion. Sanji froze in place, orienting the voice to a gorgeous, muscular young man who was sitting at the bar. He wore dark shorts, light shoes, and an orange cowboy hat. His tousled black hair framed a youthful face and bright ocean green eyes. He looked like he could have stepped out of a romance novel. And he recognizes his captain. "Luffy, is that you?" Luffy blinked out of her food haze at the voice. Sanji had never seen that before, stared for half a second, then gasped in joy. "Ace, Ace." She ran across the room. The young man vaulted out of his chair and caught her when she crashed into him, spinning her in a circle as she laughed joyfully, her hat falling down her back by its string. Sanji froze, staring at the tableau with wide eyes along with Vivi, though his reasons were very different from hers. Who was this man, holding his sunshine like that? White-hot jealousy lanced through him, and the desire to kick the man's head off is incredibly strong. Luffy buried her face in his bare chest when her feet touched the ground again, humming happily. The intimate gesture stuck an ice pick in Sanji's chest. "Ace, I've missed you so much," she babbled happily. "What are you doing here?" "I was looking for you," Ace responded. And then he kissed the top of her head. "Didn't you get my message at Drum?" "Eh?" Luffy peered up at him. Ace chuckled, looking down at her with a mixture of amusement and adoration. "Still a little ditzy, I see," he said teasingly, making Sanji both want to hit him more and feel something akin to fear. Luffy pouted at him in response. "And I ask, why you know this person, Luffy?" Vivi said, staring at the large tattoo inked across Ace's back. Their captain blinked and glanced sideways at them before beaming. Guys, this is Ace. He's my big brother. We grew up together," she said happily. Sanji looked up at Ace, saw the way he twitched a little in the flicker of emotion that passed through his ocean eyes when she said big brother. He had seen hundreds of couples pass through the barrady, how they would look at each other as if they were the only thing that existed in the world. "Luffy, a big brother doesn't look at you like that." Sanji blinked the memory away, swallowing hard as he experienced that feeling of defeat for the second time. "You're getting married into Big Mom's family," he repeated dully, silently pleading for her to say no. Luffy wrinkled her nose. "I haven't decided if I am yet," she responded. "But Sanji, what about you? Do you like Miss Pudding? Do you want to marry her?" Her hazel eyes are wide with concern, drilling into him like she's afraid of what he's going to say. Sanji forced himself to think through the haze in his mind. "She's a very kind girl. She's wonderful really. But my choice doesn't matter. If I don't do this they'll kill Zeph and the staff at the barrady. Luffy, I love you. How could I promise to marry a kind, sweet woman when I'm in love with you?" Luffy is looking at him in concern. Sanji is never this inarticulate around him. Backing up a little, her arms slid down from his shoulders down to his wrists to hold his hands, and was stopped by cold metal. Luffy blinked and looked down at the explosive cuffs. She went very, very still. Sanji felt tears burn at the corners of his eyes. It took all his discipline to force them back in. He hadn't wanted her to see him like this. Now she's seen him chained and collared like a dog. Humiliation and self-loathing pooled in his gut. Luffy stared in silence for a moment. Then she looked up and Sanji flinched in shock to see her eyes had turned the brilliant, hard gold of her Nika form. Luffy didn't recognize the cuffs right away. It took her a few seconds, but the knee-jerk feeling of wrong was instant. Then she felt an explosion of outrage from the presence of Nika at the back of her mind. And she suddenly remembered Kami and the human auction house, and it slotted into place. It was a slave collar. There was a bomb on his wrists, which could be detonated on a whim and take away his precious hands. There were slave collars on Sanji's wrists. Bomb collars on Sanji's wrists. Someone had put slave collars on her. Sanji. Who did this? She asked flatly. What? Sanji asked hesitantly. Who put these on you? Luffy repeated slowly, rage boiling up in her until she felt like her body couldn't contain it. Sanji was staring wide-eyed at her, and she tried to rein in her haki just in case he was getting buffeted by it. Tried. Her whole body was on fire, demanding that this heinous offense was punished and undone immediately. Father did. Ryuju interjected, causing Sanji to snap his head up and look at her in shock. He felt that they were necessary, and wouldn't hear otherwise. What? You objected to? Sanji started, only to cut himself off when Luffy dropped his wrists, turned on one heel, and started walking up to the castle. Luffy, oi, she said, silencing him immediately. Your father's in there somewhere, right? I gotta talk to him for a minute. Luffy stormed through the halls of Germa Castle, Gear 5 buzzing right beneath her skin. The power was hot, pulsing like a heartbeat, begging to be unleashed in all its glory. She coiled it around herself like a long coat so it wouldn't spill out on the servants who scrambled to get out of her way or the dumb weak soldiers who tried to stop her at every other door. She slammed their heads into the wall and kept walking, vaguely aware of Sanji hurrying after her and trying to say something she couldn't really hear over the roaring in her ears. She's pretty sure Kat and Ryuju were following too, but she hadn't paid enough attention. When was the last time she'd been this filled with rage? Dressrosa, Marineford, Inai's lobby, Alabasta, Kakoyashi. Luffy ceased, unable to get the image of those fucking collars out of her head. Slave collars on Sanji. She had used Gear 5 sparingly since Marineford. Rayleigh and Shanks and Uncle Ed had all been very clear once she regained consciousness that her body wasn't nearly strong enough, back then, to sustain the immense power of the sun. That she needed to practice a lot more with her haki and to create a gear between 3 and 5, so her would be able to use the power effectively without killing herself in the process. Luffy had listened, and she trained diligently and she came up with Gear 4. She'd only broken out Gear 5 against Mingo when she saw him shoot Traffy when he was already down and badly injured, and on Fishman Island to stop the Noah from crash landing. It stung and hurt, and she's still strengthening herself to take it on fully, but right now none of that mattered. Gear 5 was her peak. There was no need to use it most of the time, not after how hard she'd worked with Rayleigh and Boa. After all, why should she hunt rabbits with a cannon? But right now she wanted to use it and she couldn't resist the urge. If Judge was capable of putting a slave collar on Sanji, how had he treated him before? What had he done to him before he left home for the East Blue? Luffy increased her speed from a deliberate walk to a light jog. She'd been turned around a few times by the castle's winding hallways. But then she'd encountered a sweet lady from the kitchens named Colette who gave her much better directions than any of the foot soldiers, so she's very close now. A minute later and she came up to the massive double doors to the throne room. Luffy let a little more of Gear 5 leak out, swung one leg back, and delivered a violent kick to the door. The wood and stone splintered and flew out of the frame to crash to the floor. Luffy heard a deepish voice cry, "What the hell?" as she walked inside. Luffy, wait, Sanji protested, catching up with her and putting a hand on her shoulder. Luffy shrugged him off, reminding herself to be gentle, and strode up to the two people who were in the room. The first guy was about Sanji's height, red hair, emotionless posture, and identical to the comic's depiction of sparking red. Luffy kept him in her peripheral vision as she zeroed in on the older man who'd just jumped up from the throne. The guy was tall, and he carried himself like a king, King Walpole, that is, not Vivi's dad. He dressed in grays and blacks with an orange coat hanging mostly off of one shoulder. She could see flashes of metal and something else in the gaps of his clothes, some kind of bodysuit. Maybe. He was holding a spear that was at least as long as he was tall, and his face was angular and hard-looking. His eyes weren't blue, but a very dark brown. This guy was Sanji's dad. Luffy couldn't see any trace of her cook in him as he puffed up his chest and stalked toward her, attempting to loom over her. The light that was always in Sanji's eyes isn't there. His passion, his warmth, the way his eyes would gleam when he tried a new recipe and they all loved it. The righteous outrage that burned from him when he saw something that offended his morals. Judge Vinsmokes' eyes were cold, hard, and haughty. Every one of the man's muscles seemed to be straining to assert dominance over her. This was Sanji's dad. Impossible. He wasn't even like old man Zeph. She remembered the old cook's fierce brashness, how he loomed and exuded authority without much effort, as clear as if she met him yesterday. Who did this man think he was? How dare you burst into my throne room? Who are you? Why didn't the guards stop you? Judge demanded, clenching his spear. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, Luffy responded. Her voice came out the same way she spoke to Arlong the first time. Are you Judge Vinsmoke? Behind her, Sanji shivered, frozen to the spot. Judge scoffed. And why should I answer some girl who speaks so insolently to me? Ikiji stood up slowly. That's the failures, Captain, father, the red-haired boy said aurily. Luffy twitched violently. Failure. Winch Green had said the same thing. The holder of the human fruit model, Nika, Victor at Marineford. Vinsmoke briefly looked shocked at the statement, then looked down at Luffy with an expression of pure, greedy calculation. Oh, this is the girl they call the Sun Goddess. I hadn't realized she was so young. He hit the butt of his lance against the tiled floor. Yes, I am the king of Germa, Judge Vinsmoke. Then you're the one who put slave collars on my Sanji, Luffy said slowly, punching her fist into her open palm. Her eyes began to glow molten gold. Take them off now. Vinsmoke blinked twice, then looked up scornfully at her cook, before making a dismissive sound. I think not. He forgot his place. Those are there to remind him of it. His place ... his place. Luffy punched the man square in the nose, shifting fully into gear 5 so she could apply as much strength to her fist as she could without killing the bastard. The cartilage shattered under her knuckles and Judge went flying backward, crashing through the throne and wall behind it, and several walls after that. Ikiji jolted in shock and immediately moved to attack her. Luffy nonchalantly bent her body in a crescent moon shape, causing him to go flying past her, then lashed out with one arm to catch him by the leg. Swinging him around like a flail, she bounced sparking red off the pillar and flung him directly after his father. Dropping to the ground to regain balance, Luffy launched herself through the openings in the wall after him. The man met her about halfway. Lance at the ready, Luffy wove around his strikes and dodged when he flew up overhead. Ikiji came at her from the side. She snapped one arm up and blackened it with armament, catching his punch without even flinching. Shrinking herself into a small form, she grabbed his arm and darted between his legs, flipping him over 180 degrees so he crashed into the concrete right below his father's attack. Judge cursed and aborted at the last moment, and Luffy swung her leg as a whip and caught him in the stomach, sending him flying down the hallway. His place, she bellowed, her voice thundering with a reverberating echo from Nika. Judge crashed halfway through the wall and staggered to his feet, grabbing for his lance. Sanji's place is at my side. Free. He's not your property. Judge glowered, then tapped his foot on the ground. Fire burst from them. There were jets in his boots. Right, he would have the same tech powers as Pink and the others. He's a failure. A weakling. He launched himself at her, and he was fast, sure, but not faster than Mingo or Kizaru. Luffy evaded his strike by jumping over him and spun like a wheel. Gum Gum Battle Axe. Her heel slammed into the middle of his back and drove him down into the pavement until there was a decent-sized crater in the walkway. Ikiji was back on his feet and attacked her from behind. Luffy felt the impact of his fist and let that area of her body stretch, then snapped back to normal. It tossed the redhead away from her, sending him skidding backwards. Luffy whirled on him. Judge hacked and wheezed as he scrambled to get up. Neji, Ryuju, where are you? He bellowed as Luffy swung around Ikiji, evading his increasingly frustrated blows. Sanji scrambled to the edge of the broken wall, staring at the scene with wide eyes. A few yards behind him, Ryuju staggered and pressed one hand against her chest as the rest of her body immediately began to obey the order. She should have stayed further back. Of course he's calling for reinforcements. Her muscles are coiling for a fight and she can't relax, can't work around it, only give herself a throbbing headache. Frantic. You cannot make me fight to keep slave collars on Sanji, you can't. She looked around and locked eyes with Big Mom's massive, unreadable son. Katakuri stared at the first princess in surprise, because she was moving to obey her father, and yet, something in her expression is. The brats scattered like terrified rodents when he strode out from around the corner. Too bad for them that one of them dropped the scissors they'd just used to forcibly shear Pudding's bangs, telling him exactly what happened. Rage flared deeply in his chest, and it exploded out of him when his sister looked up at him, humiliated tears spilling from all three eyes. She flung herself at him for a hug, pleading, "You don't think I'm a freak, right? And the brat's punishment is set in stone." Katakuri launched some machai at Ryuju, trapping her feet and legs up to about mid-thigh, arresting her in place. He couldn't explain the impulse, or understand the briefly grateful look the pink-haired woman gave him before it vanished underneath a wry smile. He pushed it all aside and strode forward, eyes fixed on his fiancée as she unleashed pure, divine rage upon her opponents. Luffy grabbed Judge's face in one hand and flung him into the wall, staggering him. She pressed her palm against his forehead and forced her other hand down his throat into his stomach, then blew her fist up like a balloon until she'd stretched the wannabe slaver into a wrecking ball. Gritting her teeth, she spun around and flung him out toward Ikiji. This blow sent the redhead flying off of the terrace to land somewhere in the docks, unconscious, which is good, because he's not the one she needs to completely destroy at the moment. That could change if he uses the word failure to refer to Sanji again. Gritting her teeth, Luffy began to slam Judge into the ground repeatedly like she was playing whack-a-mole at a festival. Cracking the pavement with his face, Luffy uttered a scream of pure rage before slamming the man into the dirt one more time before dropping him, retracting her fist back with a snap. Judge rolled over, clutching the shaft of his lance. You bitch. He charged her again. Luffy warped her body into a massive, muscular Valkyrie and stopped him by grabbing the weapon. Seething, she then kicked the man in the face to send him flying backward. Sanji is not a slave, she snarled, easily dancing around his follow-up attack. He is not a thing for you to use and discard. Give me the key to those collars before I take them from you. She launched one punch, then another until she was firing a brutal Gatling into the man until she pounded him right into the floor. Her rage flowed freely through every punch, her fists a complete blur for a solid minute before ending the attack with a final slug to the gut that sent Judge crashing a few yards backward to the ground, vomiting. He tried to get up, but collapsed. Luffy blinked, frowning. Was that it? Was that all he could throw at her? Wasn't this guy supposed to be the king of an evil empire? She waited for him to get up, bouncing in place, but the man just threw up again, spitting out blood. Hissing out a sharp breath, Luffy dismissed Gear 5 and relaxed her muscles. Crouching slightly like a gargoyle, she watched Judge slowly stagger to his feet, silently daring him to try something. His face is bruised and bleeding. His helmet is split apart. His lance got snapped in half at some point during her beatdown of him, and she's at least broken one of his legs judging by the look of it. Mingo was much harder to beat down than that, she thought, bemused. What the heck? Shaking her head, it didn't matter. Those bastard world nobles were slavers while also being weak little bastards after all. Luffy strode up to the man. Where's the key? She demanded coldly. Give it to me, now. Judge spat up blood and looked sideways. Katakuri ... help me, he demanded. Why aren't you defending your ally? I don't take orders from you, Katakuri retorted flatly. You're not my in-laws yet. Luffy glanced sideways to see Katakuri and Sanji standing in the opening she'd created in the wall. Her maybe fiancé was standing with his arms crossed and a very unimpressed expression on his face. He was oozing contempt, even with his mouth hidden underneath his scarf. Sanji's expression was full of emotion, blue eyes darting between her and the fallen king. She grinned at Katakuri, pleased and thankful. She'd rather they sparred on their own terms. Returning her attention to Judge, she planted her heel on his chest and forced him onto the ground on his back. Then she started rustling around in the pockets of his coat, checking to see if he was keeping the key on him. Hopefully she hadn't broken it if he did. That would be embarrassing. Fortunately, she was in luck. Searching one of his inside coat pockets caused her fingers to bump into the familiar feeling of a metal key, and she wrenched it out. Making a pleased sound, she stepped off of Judge and walked back toward Sanji. Judge wheezed miserably, rolling onto his side and watching in disbelieving fury as the sun goddess, the crowning jewel of any army, went to the side of the pathetic failure he's forced to call his son. All this, over him, he spat out. That brat is nothing. Scum, my greatest shame. Luffy whirled around and swung her foot out, kicking him in the face and sending him plunging into unconsciousness. You shut the hell up, she growled, her eyes narrowing. When he didn't get up, she cooled her rage as much as she could before hurrying back toward Sanji. Sanji felt like he was in a dream, a strange and beautiful one. In his entire life with his family, only Ryuju had ever stood up for him, and then only in secret. No one had ever stopped the blows that rained down from Ikiji. Neji and Yanji protested Judge's vicious rejections and abuse. But in his bleakest moment, Luffy had just done all that and more. Luffy ran up to him, a smile of relief replacing her furious expression, and she brandished the key when she came to a stop. I've got it, she said. Here, give me your wrist, Sanji. The blonde couldn't speak. If he tried to vocalize what she'd just made him feel, he'd sweep her up in his arms and kiss her right in front of Katakuri. Instead, he shakily raised his wrists, briefly looking over her shoulder to where Judge lay in a bloody heap on the ground. Germa soldiers were rushing to his side. He'd been vanquished, completely and utterly. Mother will like Judge to be presentable for wedding, Katakuri said mildly. His tone was wholly uncritical despite his words. If Sanji was so bold, he thought the massive man was a little impressed. Then I hope his doctor is good at his job, Luffy responded with an aggressive shrug, sliding the key into Sanji's shackles. Katakuri's lip twitched upward beneath his scarf, and he waved a hand, releasing Ryuju from her temporary confinement back in the hallway. Luffy gave the key a hard twist and the shackles snapped open, dropping to the ground. Nika buzzed in surprise in the back of her mind. Those were duds, the spirit whispered to her, surprised. Luffy started slightly confused. Who put fake collars on someone who needed to learn their place? He thought they were real, clearly. Someone went around him. So Sanji had an ally in Germa. That was good. But as to the collar itself, it didn't matter. Slave collars were slave collars, even if they couldn't explode, and no one treated her cook like that. Sanji uttered a shuddering breath when the second bracelet clattered harmlessly to the floor. He ran his hands gently over the now bare skin, a dazed smile on his face. He suddenly felt foolish, absurd, that he had been so afraid of his captain coming here. Their circumstances now are still far from ideal, but freed from this bond at least, he remembered who he was. He was more than Judge Vinsmokes' cast-off son. He was a straw hat, and his wonderful, beautiful sunshine would destroy the world itself for his sake. If she was going to be the pirate king, he couldn't cower in the face of mere nobles and emperors. Luffy yipped when she was suddenly seized in a hug and swept off her feet, Sanji burying his face in her shoulder. "Oh, sunshine. Once again, you've come and saved me. I have never been worthy of you," Sanji babbled, holding her close. Her fist fell down firmly on his head. It was a mild whack, not nearly enough to cause pain, but it was nonetheless quite pointed. "Moron," Luffy berated him, her voice not without warmth. Her small hands rub his shoulders as she firmly hugs back. "Nobody gets to decide that but me. Sanji, I can't become king of the pirates without you. You're my cook, no one else." Sanji almost burst into tears at her resolute words. If he wasn't standing so close to Katakuri and Ryuju, he almost certainly would have. Those words said everything about she thought his worth was. She thought him irreplaceable, the corners of his eyes burning painfully. He hugged Luffy tighter, getting a cute little squeak from her. "Thank you," he whispered reverently, the pain in his heart lifting. Thank you. Heh. Luffy laughed softly, her arms sliding around him gently and her small hands rubbed soft circles on his shoulders. "Silly Sanji, you were waiting for me to come, weren't you? I'll always come for you." Sanji's heart exploded with joy, and he forcibly prevented himself from kissing her. Katakuri's stare was a tangible thing now, and he slowly released his beautiful captain and took a step back. She grinned guilelessly at him, her eyes warm and caring and concerned for him. "I'm glad to see you. I'll stay in contact with you the whole time. I know I'm being a little selfish right now. Oh, and are the rest of us chopped liver?" Marco rolled his eyes fondly, putting one hand on Ace's shoulder. The younger man was briefly startled before smiling shyly at him. "Relax, Captain. We can hold the fort for a few weeks while you go after our sweet little cousin." "How? Most of us would go with you if we could." The other 10 commanders all nodded seriously, thinking fondly of the wild girl they'd gotten to know in the celebrations after Marineford. Ace smiled, the gesture slightly wobbly with relief and love for them. "Thank you so much. If Teach or Weavile make another attack, call me immediately." His new role made him much more hesitant to leave his crew behind to handle a matter, even one involving Luffy. But his brothers and sisters had accepted his plan almost before he'd finished debriefing them on the situation. "He loves them so much." Marco nodded, patting his shoulder again before stepping back. "You going to tell her this time, or are you still planning to use the big brother card?" He teased gently, if meaningfully. Ace swallowed slightly, then glowered at his brothers when they all started snickering. "You guys are the worst," he said dryly. "I'll figure it out." "So it's one of those plans," Marco said in amusement. Ace punched him in the shoulder without looking at him. "One more thing, Ace. Once she's headed to Wano, you'll pass it along, right?" A more serious look crossed Ace's expression. "Of course I will, Marco." Izo, the 7th Division commander's shoulders shivered a little, and he gave his new captain a grateful look. Ace gave him a solemn little smile. They both had promises to fulfill there, after all. "All right, I'm headed out. Hold the line. Try not to set too much of Tottland on fire," Marco called after him as Ace turned and walked off. The Ravenet rolled his eyes and picked up the pace, jumping down from the hill to the open beach below. This was about par for the course of that birdbrain's ideas of being a wingman. He'd been much worse on Sayabati. Sabo waiting for him there, one hand in his pocket and looking a little impatient. Waiting there with him was Karasu, looking a little long-suffering. "Kept me waiting, Captain," Sabo said chidingly. "Screw you," Ace retorted affectionately before giving the blonde a one-armed hug. Meeting him again when he'd gone to visit Luffy after training at Asteria Island had been one of the best moments of his entire life. Granted, he'd wanted to punch Dragon in the face. If he wasn't such an absentee dad to Luffy up until now, they would have found out Sabo was alive years ago. But he'd also been the one to save Sabo's life, so Ace had reluctantly let go of the impulse. "Have you heard from Nami? They're in Tottland now, and Big Mom is actually consenting to giving Luffy a minuscule amount of time to get to know Katakuri before she tries to force a marriage," Sabo said, sounding a little incredulous. "She thinks it won't matter," Ace stated, scowling. Luffy's in her territory. If she says no, Linlin will just try to trap her there and force the issue. Sabo nodded in agreement and tossed Ace a long black overcoat with a hood. Put that on, I'll give you a mask once we're closer. Ace arched an eyebrow, unfolding the dark fabric. And that's going to make us less conspicuous, he asked sarcastically. If you want to make it more than 100 knots of that place without being recognized. Oh, Emperor of Flame, then yes, Sabo said, using the new epithet teasingly despite his equal dryness. Or would you rather spend the next 2 weeks fighting off Linlin's entire family before even getting to see Lu? The Ravenet huffed, but put the coat on and zipped it up before dropping his hat down his back, the string pressing gently against his throat. Bring them on, I prefer a straight fight to sneaking around. Asteria had reforged him so a statement like that wasn't foolish as it used to be. Sabo smirked. Barbarian. He glanced sideways at Karasu and pointed skyward. Let's get going, Karasu. The sun won't slow down for our sake. Karasu sighed deeply. I am never playing poker with you again. Never. He rolled one arm and then transformed. Ace put his arm up as the man's figure dissolved into a massive murder of crows. Sabo grinned and grabbed his wrist, bringing him up onto one of the big ravens back before Karasu takes off, the fleet of bird forming a black cloud that concealed them within. Ace cursed and pinwheeled his arms slightly as his sense of balance reoriented itself and he could sit up straight without feeling vertigo. He gave his brother a dirty look. Sabo just chuckled. We'll get there in a day and a half, the blonde told him. Good. Ace exhaled and looked out at the ocean before them. There were storms everywhere across the horizon, typical of the New World, though he doesn't usually see it from this angle. It's beautiful in its savagery. Sabo glanced sideways at him. I'm going to tell her, he told the Ravenet conversationally, if slightly gently. Maybe not right away, but he lets the sentence hang to see if the conversation will continue or be quietly rebuffed. Ace understands, his shoulders twitching slightly. We promised a long time ago she wouldn't tear us apart, he said quietly. You're not going to say anything? Sabo asked, faintly incredulous. Ace's shoulders hunched up a bit. Shut it. She's called me big brother for years and years. What will she even think if I say that He bit his bottom lip hard. What if she can't feel that way about me? If she finds it repulsive, I can't face that, Sabo. Sabo's expression softened just a little. Usually Ace's reticence to talk about the depth of his emotions about their raven-haired beloved drove him a little spare. His brother was usually so brash and fearless that it was a little infuriating to see him so nervous. But he could understand this fear. He'd be lying if he said it never worried him. After all, Luffy will never find you repulsive. You know her. Ace didn't respond, though his lip twitched upward slightly. I know I'm going to regret throwing my hat in this ring, Karasu said somewhat dryly, his voice bouncing between the many ravens. But what are you two going to do if Luffy decides for whatever reason that she wants to marry this guy? There's a moment of uncomfortable silence between the brothers as they ponder the possibility and reluctantly acknowledge that it did exist. Then Sabo shrugged and aggressively cheerfully said, Then I guess we'll end up being joint husbands. Ace sputtered and yanked his hat down, his cheeks absolutely on fire. What? Roger had multiple husbands, and sometimes I think Luffy is her actual child instead of you. Can we please not bring my mother into this? Ace protested, flustered. Why? Sabo said. I thought I recalled you saying that surgeon who saved her was a little cute. Or were you just in a happy haze over him saving her? I will shove you off this bird. So you do have something in common with her after all. Sabo, Karasu groaned. He could already tell this was going to go on for a while. Why did I open my big, fat beak? The revolutionary commander berated himself silently as the brothers' back and forth grew louder. I know better by now, so why? Luffy, please do marry him so I can get a break from this gremlin occasionally. A slave collar, Big Mom repeated between stuffing her mouth with muffins. Luffy nodded, aggravated at the reminder, and the huge woman burst into an incredulous fit of laughter. Nami flinched slightly, while neither Katakuri nor Pudding looked fazed. What an imbecile. No pirate captain worth being called one would let such an insult slide, much less Nika. Is he still alive? Yep, Luffy responded, sipping from the tea offered to her. It's really sweet. She's in a sweet, candy wonderland. You're more magnanimous than I would have been in your place, Big Mom said with what almost sounded like something resembling approval, though of course she followed that up with, people will think you're soft if you take that tact. Luffy could only shrug, more interested in the confections on the table than an old lady lecturing her on how to be a pirate. Her only concern had been that she might have caused problems for Sanji's sis. But Linlin's irritation at Ryuju subbing in for her father at the tea party seems to have been mollified. Luffy was pretty sure she shouldn't trust it, but she'd accept it for what it was for now. This tea party was awkward enough as it was. Big Mom towered over everyone in the room, her massive chair overshadowing the large round table where she's seated. It was the largest table Luffy had ever seen, and she's pretty sure it's made entirely of sugar. She'd given it a lick and her eyes nearly crossed. Sitting around the table are Ryuju, Sanji, Pudding, Brook, Nami, Chopper, Katakuri, and herself. Katakuri was sitting at her left and Nami at her right, while Sanji and Pudding were across from her. And those were the guests she recognized. There were a few more of Big Mom's children there, and a bird guy named Morgans who was constantly taking pictures of her. What was even up with that? Did the sundress and red sweater that Nami had thrown at her to wear that morning look strange on her or something? Warriors weren't usually pretty, yeah. Lord knew she'd heard that more than enough in her life, but it wasn't that weird, was it? Luffy didn't know what to make of it, so she pretty much ignored the guy as he rambled about big news, which wasn't hard, given the other eccentricities of the party. The table was piled high with treats and pastries of all kinds, which would be amazing if they didn't all talk, sing, and scream in horror when eaten. Nami and Chopper had to quickly squash their horrified expressions when they first saw Big Mom chow down on some donuts that had simultaneously been weeping with fear and asking her if they tasted good, then rapidly plastered pleased grins on their faces and made themselves eat when the Emperor glanced their way and asked if something was wrong. Luffy hadn't thought anything could interfere with a good sweet binge, but she'd piled her plate high and she's only halfway through it. She'd never eaten something that was conscious enough to beg her to stop. It was extremely uncomfortable. She'd rather be outside and eating the houses or drinking from the chocolate fountains. Whenever she was trying to distract herself from the oddities of her food, she found herself staring at Pudding, Sanji's fiancé. She's a slender, perfectly feminine woman. She isn't willowy and pure muscle the way Luffy was. She isn't all scarred up from pirate life despite being one of the Big Mom pirates. Her eyes are wide and expressive and kind, and her long brown hair is nicely styled. She's attentive to Sanji across the tea party, offering him various treats and bashfully admitting to having baked a decent number of them herself. She seemed really nice, so why did looking at her make Luffy feel mad and upset? It bubbled unpleasantly in her stomach when she watched Pudding talk to Sanji like she'd gotten food poisoning. They were well matched. This is a good thing. She'd have to clear out rooms for her and Katakuri on the Sunny, just in case they end up getting married. Her chest squeezed really hard at the thought, and she didn't understand why. Luffy blinked hard and promptly shoved a cupcake into her mouth. Distraction. She needs a distraction. These were pretty good treats. Pudding's a good chef. Nope, need to find something else to think about. Hey lady, Luffy piped up after swallowing, looking up at Big Mom. Nami gave her some pretty intense side eye at that. Is there anywhere around here that people can spar at? Big Mom arched an eyebrow. Of course, my children need to practice, after all. The new world devours those who become complacent. Fool, Luffy said, before turning to face Katakuri and clapping her hands together. Hey Kat, let's fight after this. I want to see how strong you are for myself. He blinked at her, and she thought he might be smiling underneath his scarf. He hasn't taken it off since she met him yesterday. As far as she knows, it looks really cool, but doesn't it get hot occasionally? His eyes are expressive, though, and not hard to read. Very well, he said noncommittally. Luffy beamed and pivoted toward Ryuju. You can come too, Ryuji, she offered hopefully. Ryuju blinked, the only concession she made to the very startled look in her blue eyes. It lasted about a second before she replaced it with a neutral smile. Dang, that was fast. It sort of reminded Luffy of Nami, way back before they fought Arlong and she was hiding her plans and her pain behind a teasing, playful attitude. I would loathe to intrude on time between you two, she said politely. That's fine, you can join us afterward. I've started reading the Sora comics and the Germa stories are super neat. Nami looked like she wanted to bash her head into the table, while Chopper smiled a little awkwardly. I want to see what you can really do. You're so cool in the comic. Ryuju giggled slightly, touching her lips with 2 fingers. Sora, father finds the comics quite vexing, but I'll admit to being a little fond of them, odd though it is to read about a mimic of yourself. Big Mom uttered a loud laugh that rattled the room. Your father should develop a sense of humor. The Emperor chuckled merrily. Good plan, a very good plan. Once you're married, you'll be fighting together whenever the situation demands it. Luffy resisted the urge to object to the woman treating the marriage like a done deal when she hasn't agreed to it yet. Traffy had said several times to tread carefully around her. The princess will learn something from observing you. Katakuri is the strongest of my many mighty children, utterly undefeated in every battle he's participated in. Nami and Chopper wordlessly pivot to stare uneasily at Katakuri, who declined to brag or preen at his mother's praise. Luffy's vision snapped back to her maybe fiancé, fascinated. Really, she prodded. That was really impressive if it was true. You flatter me, mother. Katakuri demurred. It didn't escape Luffy that it wasn't quite an answer. Nonsense, I speak the truth. Big Mom responded haughtily. Ew. Luffy made a little excited noise, remembering what Rayleigh said about how Haki could only increase in power in battle against another person capable with it. She and Katakuri could really help each other. It's a match made in the heavens. Big news, Morgan crowed, only somewhat putting his energy on. The sun goddess is marrying. The whole world would come to your doorstep if you would allow them, Mama. They, Luffy sputtered, snapped out of her happy thoughts. Why the hell would I want the whole world to be at my wedding? What a bunch of weirdos. The only people I'd want there would be my family and the other family. Ah yes, family, Big Mom said, a leer forming on her face. Luffy slowly turned to meet her eyes, feeling the temperature in the room drop slightly. I apologize that I can't fully accommodate you in that regard. I heard you grew up with Galdias, yes, though there's no blood between you. There's a bloody red light in her eyes when she said that name. Rage seething inside her at the memory of a certain mocking note she'd found taped to her precious red poneglyph. Fucking Roger. Now that she knew, she couldn't look at the Brat's wanted poster without seeing the bitch's features in him, like she was taunting him from beyond the grave. She wanted him dead very badly. He goes by Portgas, Luffy corrected, frowning. But yeah, we did. Well, I'm afraid he can't enter Tottland, nor that old man Garp. Big Mom swirled her glass of wine lazily. The Whitebeards and the Marines are my family's sworn enemies. There's too much bad blood that's been spilled for my people to be comfortable having them here. I'm sure they're displeased about your future union. I hope that you're prepared for future difficulties on that front. Luffy's spine stiffened as she processed that statement for a minute, eventually figuring out what Big Mom was teasing her about. If she married Katakuri, the Emperor expected her to fight on her side against Ace and Gramps. 2. Treat them as her enemies. Fight them like she'd fought the admirals at Marineford. Rage bubbled up in her like a pressure cooker, hot and unbelievable. Nami and Chopper were both giving her wide-eyed looks. Her navigator frantically waving her hand on the table. Don't rise to it, she's baiting you. Sanji was staring steadily at her with concern in his eyes, and Luffy fought to just breathe. Can't punch her, can't start a fight here, it would put her Nakama in danger. The gall of this old hag. Then again, I suppose you wouldn't expect much from Garp, after he betrayed you at Marineford. Big Mom continued, taking a drink and acting as though she was making casual small talk. Katakuri's eyes darted between her and his fiancée, trying to find some way to break into the conversation and redirect it. He was going to watch Gaul be executed, despite having raised him. What a coward. He betrayed the Marines by raising the boy, but he wasn't willing to stop play-acting when he was caught. Haha, when you've become a parent, one should be committed. Don't talk about him like that, Luffy muttered, gripping the edge of the table. The heavy sugar whined under the pressure. Big Mom glanced down at her. Hey, what? Did I say something wrong? She asked with both sarcasm and false sincerity. Brook flicked the strings of his guitar, which he'd insisted on bringing with him to the meal for reasons known only to himself. Like magic, everyone paused and turned toward him. Young lady, he addressed Big Mom casually. I've been accosted by some crowds of your civilians on the way here who recognize me from my days performing. They've been earnestly pleading for me to play for them, and I was wondering if a proper concert could be set up with your permission. The Emperor's eye twitched at the manner he'd chosen to address her, before melting into something more thoughtful, hungry for ways to show off what she believes is her newest acquisitions. Luffy breathed out and stared daggers into the table, trying to will herself to relax. I think that would be wonderful, Mama. Pudding chipped in, having gone a little pale when her mother started speaking and jumping on the lifeline provided with both hands. I enjoyed the Soul King's music quite a lot. In fact, why not have him conduct the orchestra at the wedding as well? I've never heard anything better. There's an idea, Sanji said, blinking rapidly. Law might be able to do something with that, should they have to fight their way out of the wedding itself. Luffy managed to force a smile. Brook is the best musician there is, she agreed amiably. I suppose that would be interesting, Big Mom decided after a moment. I never heard any of those concerts myself. Pudding excitedly started to talk about a venue, rehearsals and getting Brook some backup singers, and about halfway through the rambled conversation, Luffy and the others sans Sanji and the skeleton musician himself are given permission to leave the room. Luffy snatched a final cupcake and tried to leave the room without making her aggravation obvious. She's not very good at that. How does anyone on this island still have their teeth? Law wondered as he walked down the back streets of another chocolate and gingerbread town, Pedro at his heels. After a few hours of sneaking around the previous day and today, he's finally gotten enough local information and some reliable maps to feel confident starting to plan out escape routes for when Big Mom inevitably springs her trap. As painful as trying to plan around Luffy, when he still can't figure out if she's sincerely letting Katakuri try to woo her, or if the man has any chance at succeeding. Good dentists, I presume, Pedro said slightly shortly. We're almost back. Guards are coming. Law muttered something under his breath and promptly swapped their position with that of a few passers-by a road over. The foot soldiers were out in force thanks to the upcoming wedding, which was part of the reason this took so long. Sneaking around them was irritating, especially with limited use of his devil fruit powers lest he give himself away. The permanently sweet smell in the air was only outmatched by the syrup rain and how insufferable it was. He felt compelled to rinse his mouth out whenever he had the chance. There wasn't much respite in the hotel that the Straw Hats had been put up in, while the structure itself was made of wood and stone, which saved them from waking up to discover that Luffy had devoured the wall to her room. But the beds, dressers, and other furniture was all made of gingerbread held together by thick icing. Needless to say, they'd had to request replacements for basically everything twice times already. Nami was threatening to put Luffy on an all-vegetable diet until they found Raftel if she ran up a bill with the interior decoration store. And Law was pretty sure that was the only time in their entire acquaintance he'd seen the sun goddess look legitimately terrifying, including at Marineford. Returning to the bronze-painted building through a back alley, Law looked up at the third floor and tossed a stone against it. After about 20 seconds the frame slid up and Nami peered out over the edge. She sighed in relief and waved at them. "Oh, there you are. Get in, quick." She didn't have to tell him twice. Law opened a room and shambled himself and then Pedro into the obnoxiously brightly colored bedroom. It's painted to look like the top of an elegant cake covered in jelly beans. Nami immediately closed the window and pulled the heavy purple curtains down before running to the door. "Can you hear anyone, Carrot?" she asked the mink urgently, looking up and down the hall before closing the door and locking it. "Nope." Carrot shook her head vigorously. "We're alone for now." "What a relief," Chopper groaned. "I was worried she'd have somebody watching us all the time." Law looked around the room and frowned. Somebody fairly important was absent, as well as Brooke. "Where's Lou, Straw Hat?" he asked. Nami winced. "The tea party was a little difficult," she said uncomfortably. A chill ran down her arms at the reminder, and she rubbed her tattoo subconsciously. Law's eye twitched, alarm bubbling in his chest. "Difficult how?" he demanded. Big Mom tried to get a rise out of Luffy, and it almost worked, Chopper responded, flopping down on the ground and looking a little haunted, no doubt imagining what they might have just narrowly avoided. So she left with Katakuri to do some sparring matches with him. They'll be gone for a while, I think. Sanji blew out a puff of smoke, looking troubled. Better that she vent her anger in training than the alternative. Law nodded sharply in agreement, even as he scowled. Knowing how fiery Luffy's temper was when provoked, he just counted his blessings that she'd managed to keep it all in instead of reacting. A very rare show of restraint from her. He reminded himself to thank red-haired Shanks someday. "I see. Big Mom doesn't regard anyone as equals, except maybe Kaido," Pedro said. And there's a faint undercurrent of bitter experience in his voice. Her ultimate desire is for Luffy, Nika, to be her subordinate and her weapon. She'd need to tremendously break down her will to make such a thing even possible without hostages. "It's our fortune that the revolution is securing your home islands in the East Blue from her assassin." "Truly," Sanji blurted out, eyes widening. Nami gave him a concerned look. "Yeah, I called Sabo and he assured me that it's taken care of." "Sanji, were you told?" "My birth father," Sanji bit out the words, "told me that if I didn't acquiesce to the marriage, he would have the old geezer killed. I have absolutely no doubt he'd carry out his threat if he felt provoked, so I'd resign myself to. The Barady is safe." "Truly," Nami nodded firmly. And the blonde-haired chef almost collapsed in pure relief, what looked like a lifetime's worth of stress leaving his shoulders. "Thank goodness ... they're all safe. I might kiss that man if I see him again," Sanji babbled, ashing his cigarette. Carrot giggled softly, her eyes shining with happiness. "Luffy-chan has so many allies," she said. "It's her superpower." Nami mused. "She doesn't try to convince anyone of anything. She just follows her heart and her gut, and people get drawn to her like moths to a flame." Law snorted quietly. Knowing damn well he was one of said moths, he instead said, "Nami, you have the white den on you?" "Yes." "Has anyone seen it?" "Of course not. Who do you take me for?" Nami responded, almost sounding offended. She walked over to one of the drawers and opened it, withdrawing a small box habitat and returning to the circle on the carpet. Sliding the box open revealed the white snail Law had stolen some time ago. "Where did you even find one of these?" "The world government tries to keep them all to itself." "Same place I got the polar tang." Law responded easily before starting to dial up his first mate. Sanji straightened up and became serious again as the snail began to ring. The dialing sound made Law wish for the calm fruit. A familiar old pain twisted in his stomach at the errant thought. It only rang a few times before the clack of a pickup made everyone relax. "Captain," Beppo's warm, caring voice echoed from the other end. "Is that you?" "Yes, it's me," Luffy said, letting out the little breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We're in Tottland, and the Straw Hats have met with both the Vinsmokes and Big Mom. Status update, Beppo." "Oh, so everything's gone smoothly so far." "Thank goodness," Beppo sighed, and Law elects not to tell him about Luffy beating Judge unconscious immediately after meeting him until later. "We've landed in Wano. Robin and Kinnaman have started finding jobs and identities for everyone to slip into society unnoticed. Let me go get them for you." The snail phone was briefly abandoned as the mink rushed out, calling for the samurai and Straw Hats. They made it, Nami said in relief. I wish Luffy was here for this. I'll have to catch her up later. She's going to sulk a lot. Well, we'll just make sure she doesn't miss the next one, Sanji responded, looking a little amused. There's a sound of a lot of footsteps on the other end of the call. Sanji, is that you? Usopp's excited voice echoed in the room. Sanji, Frankie cheered. You're in one piece. I mean, you were right. The evil empire didn't treat you too badly, did they? Do we need to crush some skulls? It's very good to hear your voice, Sanji-san, Robin said warmly, her voice joining the kerfuffle moments later. The snail spasmed a little as it tried to figure out whose facial features it wants to emulate with half a dozen people fighting over the receiver. We've been worried. Speak for yourself, Zoro groused, his irritated voice hiding his genuine relief. Good to hear you didn't give Luffy any trouble, shit cook. You're hilarious, Sanji retorted instantly, more out of habit than anything. A shaky smile crossed his lips at the barrage of familiar voices, and he quickly put a hand over his mouth to suppress his joy at his crewmate's happiness upon hearing his voice. I'm fine, all factors considered. Oh, what a relief, Usopp cheered. We've been so worried. Where's Luffy? Zoro asked, the transponder snail frowning slightly. I thought we'd hear her voice by now. Nami sighed. She's venting some anger at Big Mom in a training area with Katakuri. She explained succinctly what happened during the tea party. The temperature in the room dropped about 2 degrees. It was tangible. I'm pleased Luffy managed to stay calm, Robin murmured, the first to speak. Temper runs so fiercely in her family, though Dragon's runs much colder than hers. The crew knew how easy Luffy was to rile up. The Davy back fight she'd gotten them stuck in was just one of many examples. Law only had to think of her reaction to Caesar and what he'd done to the children at Punk Hazard for a reminder himself. This is such a bad idea, Usopp groaned. Why didn't we just call up Dragon or Shanks or her two terrifying grandfathers? Law's shoulder twinged a little at the memory of Fleet Admiral Zephyr crashing down upon the island where Doflamingo had sprung his trap on him, ready to fight him and his government minion Fujitora in the name of true justice. Tell them that Luffy is getting married, and then run away as fast as we can. Nami sighed longingly at the thought. Luffy won't give up a fight with the Emperors, Frankie responded, rather needlessly in Law's opinion. Even if they do show up, she's gonna stick around to get her punches in, especially after this. Usopp groaned pitifully. Law wondered why he was still so anxious and fearful after being instrumental in Doflamingo's downfall. Few better snipers existed in the world, the Surgeon of Death could say that fairly confidently now. Those four might learn about this, he spoke up. If Big News Morgan decides that this is worthy of being on the front page for all four blues. Morgan? You mean the bird guy from the tea party? Chopper asked in confusion. I thought he was just some newspaper guy. Not some newspaper guy, Chopper ya. Morgan is in charge of the news that spreads across the world. Only the world government itself has a bigger influence on what the world sees, hears and believes to be true. Law corrected the younger doctor. Hard to get bigger news than the sun goddess possibly marrying, Frankie noted sourly, especially if he writes it up and presents it like it's a done deal. You've got to be kidding me, Zoro bit out, his voice hard with annoyance. Morgan is Linland's guest, Law acknowledged. There's a chance he won't publish anything yet if she doesn't want him to, but the possibility exists. Hot, boiling annoyance lanced through him at that thought. Luffy's marriage being proclaimed without her consent when she hadn't decided anything, and he wasn't the groom, but put a pin in that for now and tell me how you're going to integrate into Wano. And when we can expect your next call. Kinnaman spoke up then, and for the next 30 minutes he and Law debated, shared information, and began delivering some basic orders to the Supernova Alliance in Wano. The most important one, of course, being that secrecy was paramount. Kaido and the Shogun Orochi could not be made aware of their presence until everything and everyone needed for the uprising was prepared. Otherwise, everyone was to learn as much as they could, try to gather support with Kozuki loyalists, and those who wanted to escape Kaido's despotic rule, and wait for the Sanji extraction team to arrive on the shores. Law was tempted to suggest Zoro find a travel buddy for safety's sake, but he knew it would only rile the other swordsmen up and that he was already quite talented at giving his crew the slip entirely by accident. Hey Sanji, Luffy asked Ryuju to come spar with her and Katakuri. Nami remembered suddenly. Once Law had finished giving Beppo his orders for his crew and the Straw Hats reluctantly hung up. Can you tell us a little about your sister? Sanji's expression twisted with a rictus of complicated emotions. I can't say that I know her very well. Even before I fled Germa, he admitted quietly, taking Law off guard. He didn't know his sister. Lami flashed through his mind. How she'd always been in his peripheral vision. How she'd stay in his room for hours chattering happily at him while he studied medical textbooks and begged him to come out to festivals with her. The idea of her being a stranger to him was so anathema. It left him dumbfounded, even drowning out the twinge of pain he felt at her memory. The cook drew out a new cigarette, heedless of the closed windows. and fumbled with his lighter a few times before he managed to get it lit. Ryuji was the closest I had to an ally in my father's house after my mother died, Sanji said slowly, sitting back against the dresser. Judge has no love for me, never has. When I was a child, I didn't demonstrate the kind of superhuman strength that my brothers and sister possess, and I didn't have their temperament either. My brothers are cruel and vindictive. I served not as their brother but their training dummy with that man's tacit approval. Nami's mouth fell open in shock, and she and Chopper's horrified stares drilled into Sanji. Hedro gave the chef a comparatively softer, sympathetic look, while Carrot's face was full of disbelief. Ryuji would find me and patch me up whenever I was alone, Sanji said, his mouth twisting. She told me she was sufficiently terrified of joining my ignoble position in the family that she pretended to go along with their loathing and disdain for me in public. She was the closest to mother, other than me, yet she didn't cry at her funeral for fear of showing weakness. Something ugly twisted in Law's gut, a feeling he knew well and associated with blonde hair and sunglasses. With fatal gunshots in a snow-swept landscape, his grip on Kikoku tightened, his knuckles slowly going white. She never defended me to them. Never stepped between me and my brothers when they beat me, Sanji said vehemently, old pain audible in his voice, not understanding why the only person who showed him a modicum of kindness wasn't willing to do any more than just that. And yet, when Judge banished me to a cell in the castle to waste away my entire life, it was Ryuji who broke me out and helped me escape over the red line into the East Blue. When Luffy demanded to know who one hand shot to his bare wrists had put me in this position she found so offensive, Ryuji pointed her at Judge without missing a beat. I don't know why. She did not say or imply anything even when I asked. Sanji breathed out a cloud of smoke, squeezing his lighter. I don't know her, Nami Swan, he said quietly, but I don't think she'd make much of an ally, and I don't think we should risk telling her much. Why would she defend me now? Sanji. Nami looked lost, one hand over her mouth. Remembering her own sister, how Nichiko had gotten a soffish tattoo so she would feel less alone those painful years working for Arlong. You say your brothers were superhuman at birth, Law prodded, somewhat gently, by his standards, yet it's still netting him death glares from the two other Straw Hats. In the Sora comics, the king of Germa calls his children perfect creations of science. Is that why? Sanji snorted. It's called lineage factor, he said. That man's most prized success outside of my brothers, no doubt. It makes the person it's used upon superhuman in strength, speed, reaction time, everything, and it works in perfect tandem with the raid suits. Didn't seem to stop Luffy from breaking the ground with Sparking Red's face. Chopper jumped in, his eye sharp with anger. Sanji chuckled, a little tension going out of his shoulders immediately. A familiar stab of jealousy pierced Law's gut. It's not fair to compare Sunshine to mere mortal men, he said with a small but genuine smile. Against most opponents, Ikiji would not be so completely embarrassed. Well, Sunshine has taken a shine to your sister if she's inviting her to spar, Nami pointed out. Luffy is a decent judge of character, or she's just so overwhelming that her stubbornness and confidence bowls anyone she takes interest in into submission, Law deadpanned, even though he agreed with the navigator. Which means we'd best unravel the secrets of Poison Pink, lest she make this ridiculous situation we're in even more complicated. Sanji looked conflicted for a moment, before nodding. You're right. Law felt a jab of excitement, a ready-made excuse to shadow the real Poison Pink and learn her secrets. The idea of speaking to her made his heart almost flutter, which made him rapidly try to shake the emotions off and keep his face stoic. He could handle this. He could speak to her like a normal fucking human being. Maybe his Luffy would decide she liked her enough to drag her onto their crew. He might fall in love with her a second time if, focus. There was a time and a place for that. Luffy stomped down the road after Katakuri, grumbling ferociously to herself. If Kat minded how obviously pissed off at his mother she was, he wasn't voicing it, merely showing her in the way in relative silence. It wasn't too uncomfortable, but it didn't escape Luffy's notice that the people they did walk by gave them a wide berth. Luffy didn't do well with silence. Eventually, her need for a conversation overcame her aggravation, and she sighed. Are we close? She asked. It's only a minute's walk from here, Katakuri responded, his voice steady. His bearing reminded her a little bit of Sora, how he radiated calm and confidence, how nothing rattled him. I apologize for that. Why are you sorry? Luffy asked, her brow wrinkling. You didn't do anything. Katakuri's shoulders twitched slightly at that. Her words had struck on something sensitive, Luffy realized, but she couldn't for the life of her figure out what. What are the terms of a sparring match with you? He inquired instead, brushing past the topic. I can't promise that you won't get some sizable bruises. Briefly surprised by the question, Luffy giggles, her shoulders relaxing. Shishishishi. It wouldn't be much of a spar if I was worried about bruises, she said cheerfully. I'd be really embarrassed if you treated me like a China doll. Katakuri glanced sideways at her, his lip curling upward slightly. Good. Personally, I'd prefer it if you didn't turn me into a balloon like you did to Vinsmoke. The sight had been more than a little jarring. Though he'd seen more grotesque things in his life, the sheer wrongness of it struck like a tolling bell. Oh, I don't use Gear 5 outside of serious fights, Luffy responded. Katakuri arched an eyebrow at her, so she amended, I'm not supposed to use it for anything but serious fights. He really pissed me off, though, so I wanted to make a point. She put her hands in her pockets. Gear 5 takes a lot of energy and it's a lot of power. It's important that I can fight a good fight before I have to use it. Sensible. A bit more sensible than Katakuri expected from this wild girl. Honestly, everything he knew about her and everything she demonstrated since her arrival was that of someone who acted first and thought things through. Maybe never. I shouldn't be so surprised, Katakuri thought chidingly. She broke into and out of Impel Down with half an army's worth of prisoners assisting her cause, all without her crew's assistance. I see. That is acceptable, he said simply. He was confident he could defeat her if she wasn't using her full power. Luffy smiled that big, sunny, guileless grin of hers at him, pleased. He keeps looking for something behind that smile, searching for any trace of deceit or the sugar-coated malice that he knew so well, and there's just nothing. She's so innocent, it almost feels like a trap. What Big Mom wanted pudding to be, only effortless and seemingly sincere. Sincerity was deadly. Katakuri squared away the odd feeling in his chest, pushing it deep inside his mind. This way, he said gruffly, turning right and leading Luffy out of the edge of town and toward a large open field braced on all sides by iron fences. The ground was hard-packed dirt, showing signs of activity from just that morning. There was a wooden shed nearby, holding practice weapons, bottled water, and a few shower stalls. Very practical, compared to the sugary indulgence Tottland was largely constructed of. He preferred it for that very reason. Luffy made a pleased sound and picked up the pace, running up to the iron rock gate. Katakuri opened the door and they both entered. He walked over to one of the side benches and removed his leather coat, dropping it on the hard wood. Are you ready? He asked calmly, turning around. Luffy pivoted to face him, grinning. She'd changed out of her sundress for her usual clothes, saying she hadn't wanted to damage Nami's loans. For some reason, Katakuri felt a twinge of irrational disappointment at that he did not understand. I'm always ready, she said, excitement rumbling in her voice. Katakuri relaxed into a fighting stance, then blurred forward. She dodged his first punch with a hiss of steam, dropping into Gear 2 in the blink of an eye. Whoa, Luffy yelped. She nearly got hit by that. So fast. Oh, this was gonna be fun. She tried to punch him. Katakuri simply let his body turn to Machai and blunt the blow without effort. Luffy skittered backward. You ate a devil fruit, she realized. Did you even look at my wanted poster before you came to meet me? Katakuri wondered, completely bemused. How did she not already know this? I wanted to get to know you myself, Luffy responded, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Casual and confident. I don't care what other people say. When I meet people, I trust my heart. So show me yours. Moving in a flash of light, she charged him again. Katakuri blocked and pushed her off to the side, that strange feeling in his chest increasing. Luffy hadn't had this much trouble in spars with someone since she, Ace, and Sabo were kids. She kept getting knocked down and Cat didn't look like he was exerting himself much. She had to use Gear 2 just to keep up with him. He was fast, easily faster than Mingo and matching Kizaru at the least. And everything he didn't dodge he tanked. Going all out was not really the purpose of a spar, but Luffy steadily used more and more power to keep even with him, testing his limits. He met her every time. This was amazing. The thrum of excitement bubbling in her chest was all-consuming. She forgot all about that crappy tea party and about Judge and his shitty sons as she threw herself enthusiastically against his fists, blackened with armament hacking now as she kept pushing him. How many rounds had this been going on now? Not enough. Oh, it was like sparring with Boa and her sisters. Luffy had missed this. She could spar with Zoro or Robin on the Sunny, but she didn't learn quite the same when facing a swordsman, and Robin wasn't as physically durable as Boa. Which was fine. She was awesome and powerful in her own right. But Luffy had spent 2 years bruising her knuckles and every other part of her body training with Rayleigh, Boa, and her sisters on Amazon Lily, and having to pull her punches kind of undercut the experience for her. But then again, she'd been pretty spoiled while she was there. Boa always had time for her. Empress, aren't you getting hungry at least? The old woman asked, looking faintly consternation. You've been at this since sunrise. Quiet, Boa said loftily, turning elegantly on her heel to face Luffy as if the mere idea of food was inconsequential. Her expression was full of concentration, her cheeks colored a bright red from exertion. At least, Luffy assumed that's what it was, no matter how much Boa looked at her with stars in her eyes. My Luffy's haki is improving. Do not disturb us until she is satisfied. The arena where Luffy had originally been brought to fight for her life was a gigantic mess, with debris from the spar everywhere and the stands in a sorry shape. Those girls who had come to admire the practice battles between their empress and the sun goddess had learned to climb trees a decent distance from the area to observe safely. Margaret and Sandroja were sitting on one of the remaining benches, giving their sister identical pitying looks. "I don't mind stopping for food," Luffy said, dropping out of her combat stance. "She hasn't had anything since breakfast." "We will, in good time," Boa replied placatingly, pressing her hands together. They turn a shimmering black, a sight the Ravenet has become quite familiar with now. "You're close to a breakthrough, my dearest. Do not be distracted yet." "But I'm hungry," Luffy protested with puppy eyes. Boa would have fainted dead away at being the subject of such a gaze a few weeks ago, and her passionate love spent a few seconds violently butting heads with her determination to pass mastery of armament haki onto the other girl. "We can eat as soon as you've accomplished this," Boa managed after a few seconds of internal struggle. Luffy pouted, almost giving the warlord a heart attack, but readied herself nevertheless. "Now come." Katakuri was easily as tough as Boa. Maybe even a little tougher, or maybe it was the matcha fruit he'd eaten that made him so hard to get around. Though Luffy had amused herself by pretending to be trapped by the matcha at one point in a spar, only to surprise him from behind after eating just enough to get her arm free. His wide-eyed look of surprise had been the most emotion she'd seen out of him so far. Luffy crashed to the ground again with an unceremonious thud, Katakuri stepping backward. "Oh," she whined, though it didn't have any teeth in it. Hopping to her feet, she rolled her sleeve up again. "You're really tough. I've never seen anyone counter my hawk gattling like that. Are you still not tired?" Katakuri asked her, faintly disbelieving. Glancing up at the sky showed him that they had been at this for long hours. Yet Luffy had the same excited grin on her face that she'd worn upon their arrival. He's beginning to feel an ache in the many places she'd hit him, telling him that he was going to develop some genuine bruises. Basically everywhere. Not for nothing. Luffy, despite what some of his brothers had been confident in saying, was hardly useless without the Nika form. She was fast, comfortable with armament haki, and more than anything, the single most stubborn opponent that Katakuri had ever faced. Even Cracker and Oven would have given up a few hours ago. But the sun was drifting down the western horizon and his fiancée seemed no more tired than when they'd started. It was almost alarming, with the potential relationship between them such a tentative thing that his mother seemed happy to jeopardize needling the much younger captain. He was starting to see why such a guileless, reckless girl had achieved so much in so little time, irregardless of those victories occurring in the calmer parts of the Grand Line. She intrigued him, he couldn't deny it. She was so strange to him, he felt like he was on the back foot in half their conversations. "Nope, I'm having so much fun," Luffy cheered, clapping her hands together. "So Gear 3 isn't enough against you either. Great, I've got some new ideas for what I can do with Gear 4 from after beating up Mingo." She rolled her shoulder, preparing to warp her body into one of its many combat forms. "Let's go." Katakuri opened his mouth to say something when his observation haki trilled, the future jumping out at him the moment he focused on his fiancée. The vision lasted mere seconds, but the alarming sight allowed him to cross the distance between them in a second and bring up a wall of matcha to shield Luffy from her attacker. The dozen or so poison arrows hammered into his defensive shield, having been fired fast and hard enough that some of the arrowheads were poking partway through the sweet matcha. Katakuri stared dully at them, his sharp teeth grinding together. "Flamp," he thought in disbelief. What is she doing? He's confident that's who he saw half-shadowed by the tree she'd taken point in, glaring at the Straw Hat Captain with such burning hatred. "What was that?" Luffy asked, puzzled. "Nothing you need to worry about," Katakuri half-lied, before dropping the matcha wall and glaring ferociously out in the direction his younger sister was concealing herself. Looking down at the arrows themselves, he could see the poison glistening on the tips, the color and sliminess of the texture. Flamp had exposed herself to one of those toxic fish to do this. "I'll handle it." He was going to give her a very stern talking to. What was she thinking? In his vision, Luffy had taken the arrows with little more than an aggravated complaint and acted distractingly nonchalant about being violently poisoned. Katakuri hadn't been willing to take the risk, particularly because he was right there. To think he had almost missed that. "I guess somebody here doesn't like me," Luffy observed airily, looking down at the arrows. "Not sure what I did, though." Katakuri's jaw tightened a little, not wanting to explain. Hopefully he could deal with it and never have to. It was only then that he really noticed that he'd pulled Luffy flush against his chest protectively, and his mind briefly stalled out when their eyes met. Because of the height difference, her feet weren't touching the ground, and Luffy had instinctively grabbed his shoulders, her fingers tangled in the fabric of his scarf, to center herself. Now she was holding him loosely in this suddenly intimate position, and her doe-like hazel brown eyes lift up to meet his curiously. Alarm came first, worry that she'd pull the scarf down enough to see his hideous smile. He wanted to grab her hands immediately and move them away, but the sudden change in the situation had him slow to react. "How'd you know someone was gonna shoot me?" Luffy asked, seemingly unfazed by this. Katakuri blinked rapidly at her. "I didn't hear anything." Then you need to practice your observation haki more, Katakuri said a little roughly, hesitantly moving to put her down, though Luffy seemed disinclined to let him, her grip on him holding steady. My mastery of it allows me to see into the future. That is why I so rarely lose a fight. Luffy's eyes widen. That's so cool, she enthused. Teach me how to do that. Please, please, please. I'll bring you so much cake if you teach me. Sanji will make it. It'll be wonderful. Katakuri's breath hitched. And that part of him that he'd become so accustomed to strangling and pushing down wanted so badly to say yes. Cake, donuts, muffins. He'd been out here for so long that he'd missed one of his usual snack breaks. He hadn't noticed that until right now, somehow. He couldn't say yes. Why take the risk of exposing his weakness? And yet that lack of mockery and honest sincerity in her eyes stalled him from bluntly turning her down as he had everyone before her. And he stuck for a long moment as he tried to figure out what to say to her. You're not embarrassed asking for help, Katakuri said in lieu of answering. At first, he wasn't sure if it was a statement or a question. Luffy tilted her head to the side, her lips quirking lightly. There's lots of stuff I can't do, she responded unself-consciously, and for a wild moment Katakuri both bitterly envies her and desperately longs for that kind of freedom. That's why I have my Nakama and my family. Whatever one of us can't do, another can. She smiled. If we're gonna get married, it'll be the same for you. We'll take care of what you can't. And you'll do the same for us. Why should I find that embarrassing? She'd take his burdens. She didn't know what she was offering to take on. She didn't ... She doesn't. You're really nice to hug, Luffy decided. Because she wasn't done messing with him yet, she looped her arms around him and embraced him fully. Katakuri tried very, very hard not to go completely stiff in her grip. His mind drew a complete blank. Thanks for guarding me, even though I would have been fine. Her body was so warm. Katakuri was hyper-aware of her almost delicate feeling frame pressed up against his chest, the curve of her hips under his fingers. His heartbeat picked up, erratic and confused, and something else he couldn't put words to before Luffy finally released him and dropped back down to her feet. The sudden lack of that warmth was tangible, and Katakuri swallowed minutely while wondering what the hell was wrong with him. It seemed the reason for the sudden movement was that she'd spotted someone over his shoulder. Ah, Ryuji, I was starting to think you weren't coming. Luffy cheered. Katakuri blinked and turned around himself. Sure enough, the pink-haired first princess of Germa was walking down the dirt road, approaching them with a guarded sort of friendliness. I had to attend a meeting, Ryuji responded by way of explanation, jumping over the fence and landing gracefully in the field. Is the offer of sparring still open? If I'm interrupting something, I could come back tomorrow. Nope, we were just taking a break. Luffy responded before Katakuri could say yes. He gave his fiancée a slightly exasperated look, but it seemed to bounce right off of her. Ah, this is so cool. I've read some of the comics where Poison Pink fights. Can you really spit poison? Ryuji gave her a faint but genuine smile. Of course I can, though I wouldn't use any of my poison powers in a friendly bout. I can do much more than that. Luffy began to almost vibrate in place out of sheer excitement. She looked up at Katakuri with an entreating expression. Can I go first, please? You can call the matches, she asked. I'm still gonna beat you, but she's Sanji's sister. Poison Pink. I have to fight her. So childish, Katakuri mused, before shrugging slightly. Very well. He stepped off the field as Luffy and Ryuji began to take positions, sitting down on the bench. This would give him a window into the princess's thoughts, however narrow, and that made this a good opportunity. Why does a princess have the smile of a bird that has been caged all its life? Katakuri was intimately familiar with smiles. His mother's warped amusements aside, Tottland was a place where everyone was supposed to be happy. Its stated mission was to be a paradise where everyone from every race could live in harmony ... even if it's in spite of its ruler. The citizens smiled because they were safe from the rest of the world, and because not smiling might offend Big Mom. Among his siblings, smiling was even more important. It kept you from showing weakness and protected you from getting torn apart. Most of the smiles he knew were lies, or the product of blissful ignorance. Vinsmokes Ryuju's smile was a carefully manufactured thing, long practiced and worn out from overuse. It was armor, old and strong enough that Katakuri thought of putting when he looked at her. Putting, I'm sorry I failed you. From the moment he'd met Ryuji personally, the only times he'd seen her smile actually reach her eyes was after Luffy destroyed Judge, her father, in a fight in defense of her cook, and right now in the face of the sun goddess's endless friendliness and excitement. Luffy had a magic touch, it seemed. Very dangerous. Who are you hiding from, Princess Ryuju? Katakuri wondered as Luffy launched herself at Ryuju, who was clearly surprised when her block didn't stop the girl in place but sent her skidding a few feet backward. Your father, who you have no love for. Your brothers, your people, royalty were often cruel, as much to each other as their hapless subjects. Vinsmokes Sanji had abandoned his family name as a child in favor of being a mere cook in an East Blue restaurant. Perhaps Ryuju wished she could do the same, or had attempted to do so, only to be found out and forcibly brought back into line. Mother intended to wipe out Judge's family. Perhaps Katakuri could approach Ryuju and get her assistance in the matter in exchange for freedom from the prison she'd built around herself. No, he needed much more information before he considered that seriously. Mother wasn't likely to spare her, even at his request. Mother only did things for them when she was pleased with their performance. Thank you, everyone. You're a great audience. I always love seeing you in person. Yuta waved at the screaming crowd, the greatest singer in the world, enjoying the moment of comfort and peace she found in making people happy. Her moments of joy were few and far between since she stumbled upon that damning recording. Her playing gave her some respite from the horror and despair that choked her ever since, allowing her to concentrate on preparations. But that wasn't truly a comfort. Seeing smiles on people's faces, knowing she'd lifted their spirits just a little bit in the face of this cruel and unjust world, knowing she'd done some good in her life was what allowed her to get out of bed in the morning. To not just lie down and die. Taking her water bottle, Yuta bowed one more time to the crowd before turning and walking off stage. Dear Gordon smiled and patted her gently on the shoulder. Get some rest, Yuta-chan, he said softly before heading out to make the announcements. Yuta headed down the hall, past her bodyguards and toward her dressing room. She can still hear the people chanting her name even as she goes deeper into the building. She had a huge crowd today. The noise could probably be heard for quite a long distance. My fans are so good to me, she thought fondly. Entering her dressing room, Yuta slid out of the feathered coat she'd been wearing for the performance and hung it over a chair with a sigh of relief. It had gotten pretty hot up on stage. She should probably have a shower. But she wanted to sit down first. Her feet were aching from standing and dancing for hours. Sliding into her chair and lifting her legs up with a sigh of relief, Yuta looked at her reflection. Her hair could use a brush. She reached up and removed the ties that had been holding it in place. Her stomach twisted a little when her fingers trailed through the scarlet strands on her left side. She'd thought about dying it time and again, and yet she never had. Why did it have to remind her of him? Grabbing her hairbrush, Yuta began to rake it through her long, stubborn locks, grumbling to herself. Good mood spoiled. While she was in the process of this, one of her den mushy started to ring off its shell. It was the one she gave the number of to various press people, so she grabbed it and unhooked the receiver. Hello, Yuta speaking, she said, hoping she didn't sound tired. Yuta, my lady. Morgan's cheerful voice echoed from the other end. Yuta's eye twitched slightly. She wasn't the biggest fan of this guy, but he was somewhat of a necessary evil. I deeply apologize for taking so long to get back to you. I've been invited to Whole Cake Island, you see, for the marriage of the century. I'm sure Linlin says that about all her children's weddings, Yuta responded with manufactured politeness. No need to apologize for that. I know Linlin doesn't tolerate being made to wait. She'd heard horror stories from her fans who'd had the misfortune of falling into her orbit. You received my letter. Yes, I did. What a magnificent undertaking you have planned. I'd gladly advertise such big news under any circumstances. Hell, I'd do it free of charge, Morgan said gleefully. Can you give me an exact date yet, or are you still in preparations? I'll be able to give you one soon, Yuta said confidently. I believe everything will be ready in 3 months, maybe 2. Once I've secured the concert hall, I'll be able to give you the date. That's good. That's good, Morgan cheered. It'll give some time for the news of the sun goddess marrying to die down just a little, keep you from getting overshadowed. Yuta's hairbrush yanked violently through a tangle and went spinning off onto the floor. The songstress stared at the snail in mute shock and disbelief for a minute. The sun goddess, she repeated dully. You mean Monkey D. Luffy? Who else would that title be referring to? It had almost eclipsed her original epithet of Straw Hat. Yet she dearly hoped, somehow, she's marrying. I haven't published it yet, so this is technically a leak. But I can make an exception for one of my favorite news ladies, Morgan chirped, apparently oblivious to the shift in Yuta's demeanor. Yes, Monkey D. Luffy has gone to Tottland to be courted by Big Mom's third son, Charlotte Katakuri. In 2 weeks we'll see if they tie the knot or not. This is my biggest story in years, ever since Marineford. I've never been this excited. I see, Yuta croaked. Her hands were starting to shake. I'd better not keep you long, since you're staying on Tottland. I'll call you back once the venue is secured. Uncaring of how rude it might be, she quickly hung up and collapsed back in her chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. Luffy was getting married to a Charlotte. The trembling spread from her arms up to her shoulders, and Yuta tasted bile in the back of her throat. Luffy appeared in her mind's eye, smiling, kind, always picking her up when she fell, her beautiful soul shining out in everything she did. She hadn't seen her in years until she came across her first wanted poster by chance, but she remembered their every interaction as clearly as if they'd been together just yesterday. Her childhood love had grown up into a beautiful young woman, and even though she'd become a pirate, Yuta's heart had been lost a second time the moment she saw her picture. She'd followed her path along the Grand Line like a shark chasing after blood in the water, grabbing every newspaper and listening in on every marine report and asking her fans about her. She'd heard so many wonderful things. Luffy wasn't much of a pirate. She was too busy saving everyone she stumbled into on the way to her dream. Alabaston fans enthused about how she was their true savior and gleefully regaled how she defeated Crocodile. A small town called Kakoyashi chipped in with how she liberated them from the control of the Arlong pirates. Water 7 crowed about how she and her crew beat down the CP9 plants that had infiltrated their shipyard businesses and saved Mayor Iceberg's life. Sayabuddy natives whispered about how she punched a celestial dragon in the face with zero fear. And now Fishman Island and Dressrosa too had been saved from certain mass murder and death thanks to her. Yuta adored her, and had watched the Marineford battle horror-struck from beginning to end. She'd seen her awakening to her true power in desperate hope of saving that pirate. A hot, twisting knot of emotions filled her chest. Jealousy, that Luffy cared so much about some phantom man that she'd destroy herself for his sake. Guilt for feeling that way. Anger at the world government for trying to kill Porcas Diaz just for being Roger's son. He had undoubtedly committed actual crimes as the 2nd Division commander, but they didn't accuse him of a single one of them, just tried to use his parentage as an excuse to use him as Roger's stand-in. It was disgusting. And terror when Luffy collapsed and didn't get up. Terror when Porcas couldn't rouse her and the revolutionary she'd broken out of impel down could do nothing. Terror when he was forced to hand her over to the goddamned surgeon of death in the hope that he could save her life. Terror was waiting for weeks with no peep from anyone she could reach on if Luffy was even alive, with the demon laughing and whispering in her ear. Yuta didn't want to be in a world without her. She couldn't live. She survived. Yuta had collapsed in a sobbing heap of joy when she finally saw Luffy alive and standing in the paper, using a mark on her arm to signal her crew about when they would reunite. She wasn't ashamed of that, of the depths of her feelings. When she entered the new world, Yuta had waited and listened with bated breath for when they would meet again. But now now that joy and hope has all transformed into horror and dread. Linlin must know about Dawn Island. The sickening certainty swirled in Yuta's gut, reminding her of Makino and Woolslap and the kind people who lived there, who raised Luffy and now were probably hostages in a farce of a wedding designed to make her that monster's minion and prisoner. Would Dragon help her? Would he do anything? Or did he prioritize his mission over his own daughter? Like Shanks, Luffy, trapped in chains, at the mercy of that evil bitch and her psychotic children. So what if Katakuri was known as the most noble and decent among them? He was still his mother's obedient dog. What would he do to Luffy if they married? What would he want from her as a bride? Yuta couldn't breathe. Panic and overwhelming rage bubbled in her chest, and she gripped the arms of her chair in a desperate attempt to stop shaking. She couldn't do this. She won't get away with this. Not to Luffy, not her son and her light. Then you know what to do. Yuta jerked upright, her blood freezing in her veins. "Leave me alone," she whispered, the blood draining out of her face. A rattling, musical laugh echoed in her ears, like broken glass. Yuta slowly turned and looked at the mirror. She recoiled in horror when she saw that her eyes were blank and little rivers of yellow were visible in the blues. You can create that world in an instant. Rescue Luffy and bring her into the world where she'll never be taken from you again. You'd be together forever and ever, in that beautiful dream. "You don't want to help me," Yuta said thickly, balling up her hands into fists. It was a weak attempt at bravado, and she knew it. She's completely frozen in horror at the being's presence. "I know what you are. I'm no worse than the demons of this world. Besides, who cares? You can get your princess back and safe. She'll be yours, always, always, always yours." "I can't trap Luffy in that world," Yuta responded. Shadows shivered within the mirror, swirling lightly. Freedom is everything to her. "I can't. I won't hurt her. I won't." Yet part of her wanted it so badly, and it sickened her that she felt so possessive. "If you'd rather leave her at the mercy of this hateful world, be my guest. How many CP0 do you suppose have tried to kill her by now? Dozens, hundreds. That government and that throne will never stop trying to kill her, until they're all taken in hand." Nasser rolled up in Yuta's chest, and she bolted to the bathroom to throw up violently. That crackling laugh echoed in her ears again, but when Gordon came to find her out of concern, Yuta couldn't bring herself to say anything. Deep in the dream world, Tot Musica cackled, swirling in the darkness of its cage. The host was so close to breaking. It would only take a little more pushing. With the right circumstances, and she would sing the awakening hymn herself. It wouldn't even have to brainwash her this time. Dear, foolish Amu would create the circumstances himself. The only problem was that girl. The light that comforted his damned host and kept her together, weakened Tot Musica's hold on her. But that emperor has finally damaged that lifeline. The time was close, so close. Maybe not before the wedding. But afterward, there was no chance. Its song would fill the world again. "I'll be seeing you again soon, Nika. I can't wait." Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.